Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Got Gun Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku, you're going to be late if you don't hurry up. I'm coming. Izuku shouted back down the stairs. He looked back at the mirror and saw his green eyes staring back as he sighed, shook his head, and threw water on his face. After quickly drying off and putting on his school uniform, he headed downstairs where he smelled a hearty breakfast being cooked. He smiled as he saw his mom sitting at the table wearing the stylized scrubs that made up most of her hero uniform, with the lab coat hung over the back of the chair. Inko Midoriya was a taller woman, standing 3 inches short of 6 feet tall, with a fit build that befitted her profession as a pro hero. Her green hair was tied back in a long ponytail and her large, green eyes were filled with kindness as she saw him. He had inherited her eyes, and his hair was just a shade lighter than hers, but there was no doubt that he was her son. She smiled as he sat down. "Did you oversleep?" "Something like that," he replied. "Dodgy answer," his father noted as he walked over to the table with food in hand. Comparatively, Hisashi Midoriya was rather short. He stood only 54 and had a short, messy mop of black hair on his head. He was visibly muscular, even under the loose shirt he was wearing, as he kept himself in shape for his job as a police detective. While Izuku had inherited his hair and eyes from his mother, he had gotten his height from his father. He had reached 5'5" by the time he was 15 and had essentially stopped growing, at least vertically. He was 17 now, going into his last year of high school, and he was still the same height. Izuku only offered a weak huff as a response to his father. "What's wrong?" he replied as he sat down next to his son. "It's nothing, really," Izuku offered. He didn't want to think too much about it. Today was the day he drove that final nail through his dream. His mother looked at him for a few moments. "Honey, we raised you better than that. If you don't talk about your problems, they can't get solved. No use fighting it." Izuku sighed. "We're submitting college applications today." Inko and Hisashi understood immediately. They looked at each other with deep concern and tinges of regret. Their son had dreamed of being a hero since he was old enough to dream, but that hadn't exactly worked out. Over the last few years, he had begun to come to terms with the reality of the situation, but they knew that Izuku wasn't someone who gave up easily. They were torn between their parental desire to support and encourage their son, and their parental desire to see him kept safe and healthy. Over the years, they had discussed the whole thing with him dozens of times, but they still didn't know exactly what to say. Izuku had grown up idolizing the symbol of peace, as well as his mother and father. Perhaps the fact that Hisashi wasn't a hero had helped temper Izuku's idealism. But his fire was one that was hard to put out, if not impossible. Inko had a particularly hard time of it, as her quirk wasn't a combat quirk. She was a rescue hero, specializing in helping and healing people, not fighting. If she ever got in a situation where she had to protect, she had to rely on her skills and some gadgets, just like Izuku would have to do if he was a hero. It was hard for her to tell him that it was too dangerous, but she felt she had to protect her son. Hisashi wasn't necessarily in an easier position. He had a quirk, but it was one he couldn't use for heroics, or really one he could use at all. His flames burned him almost as much as they burned others. Even so, he at least had one, and he knew that stung Izuku. He had turned his desire to help into a career as a police officer, and he not so subtly hoped that Izuku followed in his footsteps. Hisashi and Inko both knew that their son had a nearly inextinguishable drive to help others, and it would be a tragedy and a theft from the world if he didn't get to use that drive. "You know," Hisashi began, "you're old enough to come and shadow me if you want. I'd love to give you a proper tour of the precinct." Izuku smiled kindly, but his thoughts were still cloudy. "Yeah, that sounds cool." The rest of breakfast passed silently, although the delicious food helped Izuku feel better. He inhaled as fast as he could because his father was right. He was going to be late if he didn't hurry. As soon as he finished his food, he threw his backpack over his shoulder and headed out the door. "Bye, love you." "We love you, too," Hisashi called back. "Have a good day at school," Inko added. As the door closed, both parents moved over to the window and watched Izuku walk down the path to meet his friend. She smiled at him as they began to walk to school together, like they had almost every single day for years. "Thank God for Ochako," Hisashi muttered as he took a sip of coffee. Inko nodded, reaching over and ruffling the hair of her shorter husband. "I can't imagine how Izuku would have turned out without her. They'll make beautiful grandchildren one day." Hisashi nearly choked on his drink. "Inko, they're not even out of high school yet." She giggled softly, which sounded angelic to his ears. "I didn't mean now, honey. It'll happen one day, though. Have you seen the way they look at each other? I'm just surprised they haven't begun dating." "They have other things on their minds," Hisashi suggested as he leaned his head over and rested it against Inko's shoulder. The world was done a disservice when those two were born quirkless. Ochako and Izuku were quieter than normal as they walked to school that day. The two had been best friends for as long as they can remember, and their parents had pictures of playing together as toddlers, so it had to have been close to 15 years now. They knew each other about as well as two friends could, and they spent time together almost every day. She was an adorable person that Izuku stared at far more than he would ever admit. Her thick, brown hair hung down to her neck with the exception of two longer locks that framed her face. Her cheeks were almost constantly filled with a natural blush that emphasized just how beautiful she was, especially when combined with her large, chestnut eyes. Izuku wasn't a tall boy, but he still stood 3 inches taller than Ochako. Even so, nobody could call either of them scrawny. The pair had been training and exercising together for years, and as such, both of them were fit and toned, at least for their age. They often spent some of their free time every day jogging together or working out at the gym in Izuku's house before retiring to his room to study or play games together. It had all started because of the shared desire they held. When they were younger, they had dreamed of being heroes together. Both of them wanted to save people, to help people, to be heroes in every sense of the word, but life hadn't been kind to them. As they grew older, reality pressed down on them more and more. Izuku and Ochako slowly began to come to terms with the fact that no, they couldn't be heroes. Ochako had been the one who began to realize it first. Izuku's family was well off, thanks to his mother's pay both from the government and from her position at UA, on top of his father's salary. Ochako's family had a much harder time making ends meet. One of her primary motivators had always been to help relieve the burden on her family, and when the reality of the situation became more apparent to her, she began to accept it faster than Izuku. He had the luxury of being able to keep his idealism, but Ochako had to be more practical. Izuku wanted to save people, to make them feel safe, just like All for One did. Ochako loved to protect people and see them smile, just like All for One did. They were two kids who wanted nothing more than to be heroes, but it seemed like it wasn't to be. "You're feeling it, too?" Izuku asked as they walked down the sidewalk. "Yeah," she muttered. "This is where we put it in writing. It's not technically final, but it sure feels that way." Izuku sighed. "It's where we give up." "No, it's where we take a different path," she retorted, reaching over and putting a hand on his shoulder. "We're gonna help people, Izuku." He shook his head to clear away the clouds. "You're right. Nothing we can do but keep going." "Exactly." They smiled at each other, her looking up at him as they walked. Each of their gazes lingered just a bit longer than needed as they wondered what the other was thinking. But before they could, there was a great crash that shook the very ground. Izuku and Ochako both grew excited expressions as they took off running. When they arrived at the scene, a crowd had already gathered to watch whatever was happening. Up on a raised railway stood the source of the noise, a villain. He was wearing simple clothes. So Izuku reasoned he was a small-time thug rather than any sort of big-name villain, as they often wore costumes like their hero counterparts. He picked up a metal electrical tower at least 30 feet tall and ripped it off the ground like it was nothing, then hurled it down the tracks towards someone. Ochako and Izuku both gasped with excitement as they saw who was standing there. "Is that the best you got?" The woman scoffed as she caught the metal tower in one hand and tossed it to the side with its weight fully removed. Tan skin, red eyes, white hair, there was no doubting who that hero was, even if she was wearing a jacket and jeans instead of her hero uniform. Izuku vibrated excitedly as he pulled out his notebook and flipped to her page. Rimi Yuzujiyama, hero name, Orbit. Orbit pressed the pads on her fingertips together to return the gravity to the metal tower as she stepped forward toward the man. "You really fucked up, causing trouble while I'm late for an appointment. Let's make this quick or I'm really gonna be mad." Ochako leaned over and looked at Izuku's notebook with a furrowed brow. She reached her hand out and pointed to a diagram he had drawn about her hero costume. "Look, she's got some backup bracers even if she's not in her costume." "What, really?" Izuku asked before looking up at Orbit. "Oh, you're right. Good eye." Orbit popped her neck as she walked toward the villain, wiggling her fingers toward him. "One touch and you're done. Give up and I might go easy on you." "You should be the one asking me to go easy on you." The man yelled as he reached into his backpack and pulled out what looked like an entire bag of sugar. He ripped it open and began to pour pure white sugar into his mouth, which seemed ridiculous at first, but then he began to shift. Muscles all over his body bulged and grew as they swelled with power, causing his shirt to tear open. He ripped a piece of concrete from the ground and hurled it at her with unbelievable speed. Orbit dodged out of the way thanks to her well-honed reflexes, but the wind from the boulder knocked her off her feet. "This is going to be tough," Izuku muttered. "She only needs to touch him, true, but that's not going to be easy. If he touches her, she might not survive. That's a ton of strength." The villain roared with anger, but was cut off in surprise as he felt someone tapping his arm. He looked down to see a short woman in a black catsuit smiling up at him. She had white hair about the same length as Ochako's, dappled with red flecks that gave her a very unique look. "Come here often?" she asked almost seductively. The man looked confused for a moment, then swung his fist into her before she could react. Izuku prepared to wince, but the fist seemed to pass right through her as she dissolved into mist. "Oh, you almost got me," she teased, suddenly a good 10 feet away from him and leaning on a lamp post. He blinked at her before lunging at her again and turning the lamp post into scrap metal. The woman was sitting on a piece of rubble behind him. "Nope," the villain grumbled with frustration as he stood up and narrowed his eyes at her, trying to figure out how she was doing that. "How many fingers am I holding up?" she asked from behind him again. He turned around to see the woman, or rather, another copy of the woman. More and more identical women were seemingly appearing all over the track, each of them doing something a little different, but all of them teasing or antagonizing him in some way. As he spun around in confusion, he saw that there were suddenly a dozen orbits all running at him from different angles. He flew into a rage and began to swing at them all, eventually dissipating them in clouds of gray mist as his fists flew through them. He stood there panting as his energy was seemingly fading. He took a shaky step and wheeled around to find another dozen white-haired women watching him. "I can do this all day," she teased as she stuck her tongue out playfully. "But I don't need to. I was a good enough distraction for Orbit." The villain made a noise of general confusion before he was hit with what seemed at first to be a meteor. He might not have noticed, but Ochako had watched Orbit leap into the sky and come back down with a terrifying amount of speed while he was distracted by the mysterious women. He crashed into the ground with a resounding thud as Orbit stood triumphantly over him, a wild look in her eyes and a manic smile on her face. Cheers erupted from the crowd as the villain groaned in defeat. Izuku and Ochako were no exception to this. It was just too cool watching heroes work. "Man, I wish I had Orbit's quirk," Ochako sighed longingly. Izuku nodded. "I bet you do great with it," she breathed out with a sad smile before she refocused. "Right, did you get all that?" Izuku nodded and began to pen a new page in his notebook about this mysterious hero while Ochako relayed information to him. She watched as all but one of the clones vanished, and the lone remaining woman began to walk toward Orbit as the latter hopped off the villain. Ochako couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the newcomer blow some sparkling mist from her lips as she smirked at Orbit. "Wait, I think I know who that is," Ochako muttered as Izuku wrote down all he could about the quirk. "She can make illusions with her quirk, just out of UA. Aw, crap, I can't remember her name." Izuku thought for a moment. "Illusions. Oh, was it Siren? That's it," Ochako exclaimed as she snapped her fingers. "She's got attention because of that catsuit she wears, but the rumors I read said she's a totally different person out of costume." "Interesting," Izuku noted as he finished his entry and the crowd began to disperse. "Well, let's not be late, yeah?" Ochako's mood dropped. "Yeah, you're right. Let's get going." The majority of the day had passed uneventfully. The other students left the pair of them alone like they always did, which Izuku was grateful for in some ways. It was a little lonely, but he had Ochako, and it was better than the other students antagonizing them. Ochako tended to hang out around Izuku's desk between classes so they could talk. He used to always offer her a seat, but she said she preferred to stand, so he stopped bothering. It was just nice to have someone to talk to, especially when it was his best friend. They'd been in every class together since they started school, and that was the intention going forward. The teacher came in and gave some speech about their future that Izuku wasn't really listening to as the forms were passed around the classroom. He took his and immediately filled out UA as his top choice, his only choice, really. But then he stopped. He stared at the page. All he had to do was fill in the program for which he was applying. Ochako and Izuku had made plans a year or so ago to both go into the management department at UA, so if they couldn't be heroes, they could at least manage them so they could help in that small way. He had considered doing support, but he didn't feel like he had the technical know-how to pull that off. All he had to do was write down management. There were dozens of majors to choose from at UA, from physics to art to IT to pre-med, and more. There was even law enforcement, which is what his father had wanted him to pursue. Those were all wildly popular and prestigious schools, as UA wasn't just the top hero school, but one of the top universities in all of Japan. But those weren't the ones that got the most attention or publicity. All he had to do was write down management. There were the three schools that stood above the rest, the big three programs that made UA famous internationally. The support course, the management course, and the hero course. The courses dedicated to the heroics that had taken over society in the last 200 years. The ones dedicated to making sure people were safe from villains in every way they could. All he had to do was not write down hero. Then it would all be over. He tried, but he couldn't do it. Not yet. On the other side of the room, Ochako looked over at Izuku. It seemed like he was having the same problem that she was having. It wasn't right. It wasn't right for her to be pretending like this when her parents were out struggling every day to make sure she had clothes and food and a roof over her head. She needed to stop being a kid and take responsibility for what needed to be done. But Izuku raised his hand and got the teacher's attention before class ended. "Yes, Midoriya, these don't have to be turned in today, do they?" Izuku asked. The teacher shook his head. No, they're due by the end of the week. Ochako felt a weight fall off her shoulders. Sure, the can was only kicked down the road, and she knew she would have to face it soon, but for now, the pressure was off. And for a 17-year-old girl, that was enough for now. Izuku stuffed the application into his backpack as class was released. Ochako did the same and stood up to go talk to him and try to cheer both him and herself up. But someone else got to his seat first. Thin, almost invisible strands of fabric grabbed Izuku's face and lifted his vision up to look into the smug, condescending red eyes of one of their classmates. Izuku sighed. What do you want, Bakugo? Ochako narrowed her eyes as she looked at the student holding Izuku's face up. His blonde hair was a mess, but one of those messes that Ochako could tell took considerable time and effort to get right each morning. He was taller, about an inch shy of 6 foot even, and constantly wore a look of smug derision on his face. Katsuki Bakugo was better than you, and he wanted you to know that he knew it. If that wasn't bad enough, he always had a posse of sycophants trailing behind him that acted both as free servants and pack mules on top of being obnoxious yes-men. You wouldn't be considering applying to the hero course, would you? Bakugo asked, every word dripping with snide arrogance. Leave him alone, Ochako barked as she quickly approached Izuku's desk. It's none of your business. Bakugo laughed contemptuously. I think it is my business. As the next number 1 hero, the next number 1 is going to be whoever All for One chooses as her successor. Not you, Izuku interrupted, his eyes burning with defiance. Ochako loved when he got like that. Oh, hadn't you heard? Bakugo replied, feigned surprise in his voice. All for One is teaching at UA this year. She's looking for a successor at the top school, and I'm going to be there to impress her. When she sees me in action, she'll make the right choice. Ochako's lip curled in disgust. Well, since you're so grand, you won't need to worry about us making you look bad. You'll just look better by comparison. Bakugo chuckled so derisively that it almost sounded evil. I don't need anybody's help to look better. The strands released around Izuku's head and returned to Bakugo's sleeve, where they reformed as if they had never been disturbed. He brushed his hair a little with a finger in a way that made Ochako want to punch him in his smug face. But she resisted as he gestured to his sycophants and began to walk away. Come, the quirkless aren't worth our time. Ochako crossed her arms and glared at the others as they walked out of the door before turning to look down at the still-seated Izuku. I don't know why his parents sent him here. They're rich enough to buy an entire school just for him. Izuku sighed and shook his head. Maybe they hoped a public school would teach him to not be so insufferable. It's not working, Ochako muttered as she shot another dirty look at the door. Come on, we have work to do. It'll get our mind off this crap. Izuku smiled softly as he stood up. Yeah, you're right. They both grunted with effort as they pushed a refrigerator over the edge of the dumpster and let it fall into the rest of the trash. Izuku wiped his brow as Ochako jogged back to the beach to grab more trash. He looked over Dagaba Beach and felt a little pride in the work he and Ochako had done over the past few weeks. The mountains of scrapped appliances, cars, and other trash had been shrunk considerably by their efforts, and while they had a long way to go, it was nice to see they were making a real difference. The city of Musutafu had put together a community initiative to help clean up the junkyard of a beach by placing a dumpster nearby and contracting a local truck company to dump it whenever it got full. Unfortunately, Izuku and Ochako appeared to be the only ones to accept the call to action and volunteer their time, but it gave them access to a fantastic place to train. Hauling all kinds of scrap and junk gave Ochako and Izuku an effective full-body workout. Pushing tires used different muscles than hauling microwaves or dragging stoves, which meant Izuku and Ochako were developing practical strength rather than just cosmetic muscle. Ochako returned and dumped a basket full of scrap iron into the dumpster and let out a heavy, tired sigh. She gladly accepted the bottle of water Izuku offered her and took a big swig before wiping her brow with her shirt. Izuku took the moment to secretly admire her abs that were slowly gaining more definition as they worked out more. This is nice, Izuku said, almost without meaning to do so. It's exhausting. Ochako responded with a laugh. But yeah, I know what you mean. I almost don't want it to end. Izuku looked up at the towering piles of trash. I don't think we have to worry about that anytime soon. The dumpster is basically full, though, Ochako pointed out. We're gonna have to call it a day soon. As if on command, there was a loud scraping from behind them that caused the pair to yelp in surprise and whip around. The dumpster rumbled and began to rise into the air as their jaws dropped. You two fill this up all by yourself? A strange, yet familiar voice asked. The massive metal container rose more than 6 feet into the air before it finally stopped moving. The pair's eyes somehow grew wider as they saw someone standing beneath the dumpster, holding it above her head with ease. She was tall, muscular, and wearing a wide smile that made her radiate confidence. Her simple costume was anything but in the eyes of Ochako and Izuku. The black bodysuit with white cape and red sash was instantly recognizable to anybody in Japan, and probably the entire world. Izuku couldn't get the words out. All for one, Ochako screamed for him. Nana laughed as the two kids gawked at her. That's me, but you didn't answer my question. Yes, ma'am. We did, Ochako sputtered nervously. Was the number one hero, the symbol of peace, really standing in front of them? Good. Nana smiled widely down at the two stunned children as she quickly took to the sky. Izuku and Ochako could only stare as All for One flew off with the dumpster and disappeared into the afternoon sun. Did that? Was that really? Izuku mumbled. Yeah, Ochako answered. She's a lot taller in person. Ochako nodded. In buffer, both of them could recall her page from Izuku's notebook with ease. Nana Shimura, the most recent in the line of heroes bearing the moniker of All for One. The eponymous quirk was completely unique, giving the user the ability to take and give quirks from people. As the hero aged, they had always found a successor to give the power and all the quirks accumulated to them. Izuku and Ochako had both watched the old news video where the previous bearer of All for One, Toshinori Yagi, announced Nana as his successor. For the past 30 years, she had been the unfaltering and undefeated symbol of peace. There might not be a more famous person in the entire world. They stood rooted in place until Nana returned a few minutes later with an empty dumpster. She placed it down gently and then leaned against it. You two look like you've seen a ghost. Izuku gulped. Something much more incredible, ma'am. Nana barked a laugh. No need to be so formal. Please, call me Nana. I see can't do that, ma'am, Izuku stuttered. Are you disobeying me? She asked pointedly, suddenly much more stern. And no, he exclaimed, tripping and landing on his backside as he stepped backward. Nana burst out into hearty laughter as she watched Ochako instinctively help him up. I'm teasing, kid. What are your names? Once he was back on his feet, Ochako turned to Nana. I'm Ochako Uraraka, Miss Nana, and he's Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya, she repeated. I know that name. Izuku nodded nervously as he stood back up. His fanboy tendencies were desperately trying to burst forth, but he was containing them. My father works as a detective, and my mother is a pro hero. Remedy. Nana exclaimed, snapping her fingers. Right, I've worked with him before. Good man, not to mention your mother. She's healed me more times than I can count. Remedy is your mother. Wow, Izuku's knees felt weak. His father had told him the stories a dozen times. But meeting Nana in person was something different entirely. Ochako was handling it a little better, but Izuku's fanboyness had rubbed off on her pretty heavily over the years. If I can ask, Miss Nana, where is Ground Zero? Ochako asked. She knew Nana was seldom seen without the man, and vice versa. Oh, he's around, Nana replied noncommittally. And Ochako continued, what are you doing here? Not that you can't be here. Just, yeah, a fair question, Ochako, Nana replied professionally. I heard that this beach was a mess and I came out to see what I could do, but it seems like I'm not needed here. You two look to have it under control. We didn't mean to take your job, and ma'am, Izuku stuttered. Izuku, Nana repeated firmly. She always tried to make that personal connection with people. Her personal philosophy demanded it. Call me Nana, please. And Miss Nana, he offered. Normally he wasn't this hopeless, but this was the symbol of peace. He was freaking out. I'll take it, she said with a chuckle. Now, don't apologize for doing this sort of work. Community service is an important thing. My predecessor believed in it as strongly as anything else, and I'm thrilled to see you two putting in the work necessary. So, from the depths of my heart, thank you both for doing this. Izuku and Ochako were both stunned silent for a few moments. Ochako was the first one to break the silence. We're just happy to help, Nana. Nana smiled widely. You don't know how good that is to hear. Say, you two look to be about the right age. Are you heading off to college soon? Izuku nodded. Yes, next year. We're trying for UA. Really? Nana exclaimed. Oh, that's great. I'm sure you two will make great heroes with an attitude like that. Ochako and Izuku both winced, which Nana picked up on. Oh crap, she thought. Actually, Ochako said softly, we're both quirkless. I see, Nana said after a small pause. The solemn tone to those two words cut Izuku and Ochako deeper than she could have possibly anticipated. Her stomach sank and twisted as she saw the two visibly deflate as she answered the unasked question that both of their hopes were riding on. Even so, I'm sure you two will do great things, Nana continued, trying to salvage the teenager's mood. Heroes get the most spotlight, but we're far from the only ones who help people. Just look at your father, Izuku. He tried to nod, but his heart was hurting too much. Yeah, Nana kneeled down a little so she was more on their level. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine, Ochako interrupted. We know, we've known. It's just hard to accept. We both really wanted to, and, well, life doesn't always go the way you want it. We're trying for the management course at UA so we can help as much as we can. Nana smiled sadly. That's very noble of you. If more people were like you too, I wouldn't have to work half as hard as I do now. That made Izuku feel a little better. He kept his tears back and nodded once. Thank you. Speaking of work, I do have to run, Nana said awkwardly. It was a pleasure to meet you both. Ochako nodded more emphatically than Izuku. "It was an honor, Miss Nana. Thank you for emptying the dumpster." "My pleasure." She lifted up into the air and gave them a small wave before turning around and flying away. Nana still felt awful. She wished she could have done something to make them feel better, but offering an autograph just felt tacky. All she could do was keep telling herself that she did the right thing. Izuku and Ochako watched Nana fly away in silence. Neither of them knew what to say. They had met their idol and she had confirmed what they already knew. It wasn't her fault. They both knew Nana was right. It just hurt. Both of them had that same selfish, yet utterly human thought in the back of their mind. All for one had the power to give quirks. Why couldn't Nana give them something? They knew the answer to that. They weren't the first people to ask her that, nor her predecessor, nor the one before him. Could All for One give out quirks? Yes. Would they? Never. It was always an upfront and utterly absolute refusal. The only time they ever give away quirks is when they chose a successor and gave them everything. Nana always spoke of the sanctity of quirks. They were gifts she carried with respect, she said, not tools to be given away. Besides, they knew that if Nana gave away quirks to every quirkless kid she ran into, she'd be out by the end of the day. They couldn't help but wish anyway. After a minute of silence, Izuku turned to Ochako, and as she turned to him, he reached out and hugged her. Ochako immediately returned the hug, and both of them held the other close in a tight, comforting grip. And then they began to cry. It started with small sniffles, but their tears seemed to feed into the others, and before long, both of them were full-on sobbing. They held onto each other for dear life as all of their emotions poured out. They didn't know how long they stood there, chins hooked over each other's shoulder and tears streaming down their faces. It could have been 2 minutes or 2 hours, they didn't know which. It felt like all of their hopes and dreams were pouring out, like the last vestiges of their childhood was flowing down a drain to be replaced by adulthood. There was no more time for entertaining impossible dreams. All that would do would detract from their future. Entry into the management course wasn't easy. It was just as exclusive as the hero course, and they had a lot of studying ahead of them. Eventually, the tears dried and they broke apart. The two looked at the other's bloodshot eyes with regret and sorrow, but also with a hint of resolve. Together, they'd face whatever came. "Sorry for making a mess of your shirt," Izuku apologized. Ochako laughed once as she wiped her face. "I did the same to yours." He looked out at the trash and knew that they should continue cleaning, but all of his energy had been sapped away. "I think I'm done for today." "Me too," Ochako agreed immediately. The two picked up their backpacks and began to walk home. They made some small talk, but both knew it was forced and pointless. They had too much on their minds to properly focus. After 15 minutes, they reached the corner where they went their separate ways. "See you tomorrow," Izuku said with a wave. "Yeah, see you," Ochako replied as she waved back once. They turned and went different directions, neither of them really paying attention to their surroundings. It was only a minute or two later when Ochako felt the ground shake beneath her feet. A massive crash echoed out from behind her that made her whip around. Smoke rose from the sky over the buildings, right in the direction Izuku had walked. Her feet were running down the sidewalk before she could think. Nana was sitting on the edge of a rooftop looking down over the city with Sorahiko next to her. Her brow was furrowed in thought and in frustration. The interaction with those teenagers was eating her up. "That was tasteless, especially for you," Sorahiko chastised. "I know," Nana admitted to her longtime friend. "I didn't mean to." He nodded. "I know you feel bad enough, so I won't harp on it." Nana had stealthily swung back around on the pair of teenagers after she had left, hoping to see them working again. However, what she saw was them hugging each other tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. It broke her heart. "Not just bad, I feel awful, Sora," she muttered. "I crushed them." Sorahiko looked at her for a moment. "This isn't the first time you've disappointed someone, nor the first time you've disappointed a quirkless kid. What's eating you up about this one?" Nana trailed off as she thought back over what she had seen. There was a connection there that was undeniable. "I saw myself in them. A quirkless kid full of hope," he asked as he adjusted one of the bulky gauntlets on his arm. "Full of hope and full of drive," Nana answered. "I just wish I could do something." "You can't," Sorahiko said sharply, suddenly more alert and attentive. I know, Nana replied quickly. "I wouldn't ever, but I sometimes wish I could." Sorahiko huffed softly as he returned to checking his equipment. "What do you all think?" she asked in her mind as she looked down and felt the quirks inside of her. Before she could continue thinking, she looked up to see smoke beginning to rise over the skyline, and before she had fully processed what was happening, her body had pitched over the side of the building. Nana heard the telltale explosions of Sorahiko following behind as they both flew toward the smoke as fast as they could. Nana's gut twisted with dread. She was flying almost straight back in the direction she had left those teenagers. If they were caught up in this, she didn't know if she could handle it. She turned on search and reached out for them. Just to be sure, Ochako's heart felt like it was pounding out of her chest by the time she turned the corner and finally arrived. What she saw seemed to be straight out of a nightmare. Smoke was billowing from a wrecked police transport that had crashed into the side of a building and seemed to have its back doors blown off its hinges from the inside. Several officers laid on the ground nearby as they seemed to have pulled themselves from the wreckage. But they weren't in good shape. People were running all around, fleeing from the scene all around Ochako, but none of them were helping. There were no heroes around either. Why wasn't anybody helping? Where were all the heroes? Had she beaten them there? As the crowd parted, she saw why they were running. Standing in the middle of the street was that sugar villain. The police must have been transporting him and he broke out. That's what probably caused the crash. She had to get out of there before he turned. Wait, Ochako saw that he was holding someone in his hand. A hostage with green hair. He was holding Izuku by the neck, strangling him with only his fingers as her best friend tried to pull his fingers off. He looked like he was suffocating. Her feet were moving again. Ochako charged straight at the villain, who had upturned a cotton candy cart and was pouring the contents into his mouth. His distraction was her opportunity as she sprinted at him, desperate to do nothing other than save Izuku. Come on, remember what Inko and Hisashi taught you, she thought to herself as her legs continued to carry her closer and closer. When they were watching the villain from afar, it was hard to get a sense of just how big he was, but now that she was closing in on him, it became evident. Ochako didn't come up to his chest. He had to be at least 7 feet tall. That was okay. Hisashi had taught her how to take down people bigger than her. Izuku saw her approaching. His desperate eyes locked onto hers as she saw him silently plead for her to run away. The fire burning inside her roared into an inferno of resolve. There was no way she was leaving him behind. Ochako finally reached the villain as he threw the entire food cart away like it was an empty soda can. He was bigger, stronger, and had a quirk, but she bet that those muscle augmentations didn't remove his need for joints. The combination of him being distracted plus the screams all around him meant that she had gotten inside his reach without him noticing. She knew those muscles of his were more than enough to turn her into a bloody streak on the road. She only had one shot at this. Ochako planted her feet like Hisashi taught her and drove her knee into the side of his with all her strength. It was at this moment that she was exceptionally glad that Izuku and her had made strength training such a focus. The villain roared in pain as his knee buckled and collapsed to the ground. Ochako regained her footing and let her training, limited as it may be, take over. As the villain's face was pulled toward the ground, she swung her elbow up to meet it. She caught him in the jaw, causing him to cry out again and instinctively reach up to grab his face, which meant he dropped Izuku. Ochako did her best to catch him as he fell to the ground, ignoring the throbbing pain in her knee and elbow. She knew her attacks would stun someone like that at best, and once he had his bearings back, he would come for them. She hadn't thought that far ahead. To be honest, she hadn't thought at all. Drop me and run, Izuku gasped through his heaving breaths as she held his arms over her shoulders. No way. Ochako snapped back defiantly as she continued to run with his feet dragging on the ground behind. What she wouldn't give to be taller than him right now. An angry snarl from behind told her that the villain had recovered. You little shit. The ground began to rumble as the huge man began to stomp toward them. Ochako willed her legs to move faster, but there was no way she could outrun him with Izuku on her back. She had to get him out of the way. Ochako grabbed firmly on Izuku's arms and began to try and throw him. But at the same time, his muscles sprang into action and tried to do the same thing to her. Both tried to shove the other out of the way, resulting in them sprawling in opposite directions onto the ground. She looked up to see the villain closing in on them, absolute feral hatred in his eyes as he raised a fist toward Ochako. There was no way for her to get away now, but at least she had done her best to protect Izuku. She forced a smile on her face as she faced her end with dignity. There was a rush of wind that felt like a jet had flown past her, followed by a heavy, solid impact. Ochako looked up and saw the villain's fist blocked by a yellow-gloved hand. All for one? Ochako asked weakly as she looked up further. The number 1 hero held the hand back and looked down at her with an apologetic expression. What do I know, kid? The villain tried to surge forward, but faltered as Nana turned her gaze on him. The air around her suddenly became charged with an indescribable energy that Ochako felt in her soul more than anywhere else. All for One was a great hero and a shining beacon of hope, but she was also terrifying when she wanted to be. Attacking defenseless teenagers is low. Nana almost growled at the villain. Give up now. The man didn't seem to be in the right mind to back down, but the moment he moved forward, a rush of power shot up Nana's arm and he went flying backwards. He crashed into the ground and skidded for a few yards before he picked himself back up. He took a moment to look around and then ripped up a lamp post and charged at Nana, brandishing it as a weapon. She held her hand out toward the villain and the post suddenly shot out of his hand and flew toward hers, where she caught it and discarded it to the side. As the villain stared confusedly at his hands, she shot forward and delivered a single punch to his jaw, right where Ochako had hit him earlier. There was a moment of silence before he collapsed to the ground and laid there, quite unconscious. Cheers erupted from the onlookers as the dust settled. Nana took a moment to smile and wave, but she quickly moved back over to Izuku and Ochako. Are you two all right? She asked in a low voice as she reached a hand out to both of them. Izuku and Ochako looked at each other, then nodded and took the hand. Nana smiled down at them, although she faltered for a moment and did a double take at Izuku before continuing. I need to see to the cleanup, but you two stick around, all right? She ordered. We need to have a talk. She leapt into action, securing the villain and making sure all the officers were all right. As the adrenaline drained out of Izuku and Ochako's systems, they suddenly felt weak. The pair slowly walked over to the sidewalk and leaned against a building before both of them slid down to the ground. They were too stunned to speak for a while as what just happened processed through their minds. Then Izuku began to cry. Ochako looked over at him in concern, but then yelped softly as he threw his arms around her. Thank you, he stammered. Thank you, foe, for saving me. Ochako hugged him back as tight as she could. After earlier, she was a little surprised he still had tears to cry, but she understood. I just did what I know you'd do for me. He hugged her firmly as he kept crying. After nearly a minute, he spoke again. You're my hero, Ochako. Ochako knew that he knew what that meant to her. Only he really could. She started crying too as she somehow gripped him tighter. All of their remaining strength went into their hugging of each other, both of them pulling each other as close as possible and trying to convey as much as their affection as possible. Eventually, they broke apart and looked over to the street. Ground Zero had shown up at some point while they were hugging and was ensuring that the villain remained secure. Izuku wanted to get an autograph from the tall, white-haired hero, but he wasn't exactly in a state to ask. Nana, on the other hand, was speaking to the police from the van and helping them into the ambulances that had arrived. The way people looked up to her, both literally and figuratively, emphasized just how important she was and just how amazing she was. Both of them were caught staring as she turned back to them and walked over after saying something to Ground Zero. Do either of you need to be looked at by the paramedics? They both shook their heads. You better not be lying, she almost scolded. Remedy will have my head if I return her son to her injured. Just a little sore around my neck, miss, Izuku said softly. My mom will be able to heal the bruising. Fine, she relented. Now, are you two ready to fly? Fly? Ochako asked. Nana smirked. I'm not going to talk to you on the sidewalk. Come on, take my hand. The two reached out and each grabbed one of her hands. As soon as they did, they felt a strange energy surround them, and before they knew what was happening, they were lifting up into the air. Nana flew them up on top of a building not too far from the scene and placed them down gently. Now, she began, we have a lot to talk about here. Izuku and Ochako looked at each other nervously. Are we in trouble? He asked. I know I shouldn't have run out, but Nana held up her hand. Don't apologize for that. Your actions likely saved Izuku's life. I know I'm supposed to scold you, two minors, for acting how you did, but that's not how I operate. Izuku and Ochako smiled at each other softly. First, she continued, I'd like to thank Izuku on behalf of those officers he saved. They told me you pulled them out of that crashed van before the battery caught on fire. You saved each of them from injury, if not death. Ochako gasped. You didn't tell me that. Oh, well, it wasn't really important, he muttered, blushing softly. Nana nodded. I suspect that's why he was the one grabbed by that villain. He was the closest target. The officers mentioned that nobody else even tried to help. She kneeled down and looked him in the eye. You did good, kid. Thank you for that. Izuku was out of tears by now, but he still felt a little choked up. At least for a little bit, he could pretend. And then you, she said, turning on Ochako as she stood back up. I was monitoring you all while I flew toward the scene. You acted immediately, when nobody else would. There were no heroes nearby, and that villain was dangerous. What were you thinking? Ochako began, trying to remember. Were you thinking? Nana asked, trying to sound a little stern, but being betrayed by her smile. Or did you just act? I guess I just acted, miss, Ochako responded softly, looking down. Perfect, Nana said, almost too softly for Ochako to hear. Now, I'd like to go back to our first meeting back on that beach. I did something I'm not proud of. Both Izuku and Ochako's shoulders slumped. Izuku spoke up this time. It's fine, really. We're just happy we were able to help. That's just it, Nana continued, pounding her fist into her palm. You both acted selflessly, with no regard for your own safety, nor anything but the well-being of others. You both acted unequivocally like heroes. Both of their minds froze. Nana smirked. The question went unasked earlier, but I think I knew what it was. Can you be heroes? Of that, I have no doubt. She crouched down and put a hand on each of their shoulders. You two are going to make great heroes one day. Izuku was wrong. He wasn't out of tears, and neither was Ochako. They both began to cry softly as Nana beamed at them. More than a decade of doubt, fear, and hopelessness cracked and began to crumble. A door that they had all but shut and locked suddenly flew wide open, and nothing could have felt sweeter. Hope, purpose, vindication. All these things washed over them like a warm drink on a cold day. But Ochako was the first person to question it. Before she let herself pass through that door she had been dying to run through for most of her lift, she had to make sure it was real. How is that possible, Miss Nana? Ochako asked, wiping her face. We're still quirkless. Nana's brow furrowed as she stood back up. Yes, about that. Izuku, what if I told you that you weren't quirkless? Izuku's tears ceased immediately as his brain froze like a crashing computer. All he could do was stare dumbstruck at Nana. What do you mean? Ochako asked nervously for him. My quirk, my main quirk, as you know, lets me take quirks from people, yes? Nana asked. Ochako nodded. Izuku was still rebooting. Nana smiled at him. When you took my hand down there, I felt your quirk. It was faint, weak from never being used, but it was there. What? He finally yelled. Nana laughed loudly as Ochako yelped in surprise. It's true. Here, I can prove it, but it's gonna feel weird. She reached out and placed her palm on Izuku's chest. Her hand began to glow, and Izuku suddenly felt this strange, foreign sensation grip at his very being. He thought he was going to be sick for a moment before Nana took her hand back. That was me grabbing your quirk, she explained. If I wanted to. And I could have pulled it out. It's there, Izuku, and it's yours. What is it? He asked softly. Nana rubbed her chin. I don't know. I've gotten a good eye for quirks over the years, and I can tell it has great potential, but it's never been used once. I wish I could offer you more advice, but I can't. I can tell you that if you figure it out, there's no doubt you'll do great things. Ochako suddenly almost tackled Izuku off of his feet as she threw a great hug around him. He was still stunned as she almost picked him up with how hard she squeezed. This is amazing, Izuku. You're going to be a hero. You're going to do it. He still couldn't believe it, but there was something more important on his mind at the moment. But what about Ochako? You said both of us. Does she have a quirk, too? Nana was quiet for a moment, then turned her back on them and took a few steps. She closed her eyes and began to breathe calmly, almost like she was meditating. Izuku and Ochako looked at each other with a mix of worry and confusion, but after a few more moments, Nana turned back around and gazed down at them with a wide smile. She walked back toward them and looked down at Ochako with a piercing, expectant gaze. Young Ochako, do you trust Izuku? With my life, she answered immediately and firmly as she let go of her hug and met Nana's gaze. Very well, Nana continued. Then answer me this, would you like to be my successor? There was only a beat of silence. Yes, she yelled. Nana's grin grew even wider as she saw a fire erupt behind Ochako's eyes. This time, it was her turn to nearly be tackled off her feet as Izuku threw his arms around her. You're going to be the next all for one. He cheered, holding her close. You're going to be the greatest. Ochako hugged him back as her brain began to process exactly what was going on. Her hug loosened slightly as she turned back up to Nana. Am I really? Do I deserve it? There's nobody else who deserves it more, Izuku declared emphatically. Nana gave him a warm smirk. Yeah, what he said. Ochako, to tell you the truth, you remind me a lot of myself when I was a kid. When Toshi found me, I was quirkless too growing up. Really? They both asked simultaneously as they broke apart again. She nodded. Toshi saw something in me, and I think it's the same thing I see in you. Both of you are so determined to help, even when things aren't going your way. That's what's important. These quirks are a burden and a gift. It is my duty as all for one to carry them onward and do the best I can with them, and I believe you, Ochako, are the person who will carry the torch next. Ochako gazed up at her with awe, but her practical side stopped her again. But, why me? Why not Izuku? Nana smiled as she shook her head knowingly. You two really are something else. Besides the fact that he already has a quirk and doesn't need my help. The answer might not be satisfying, but it's this feeling I have. I think you'll understand in the future, but for now, all I can ask is that you trust me. Izuku put a hand on Ochako's shoulder and smiled. You deserve it more than me, Ochako. I know you'll be amazing and I honestly can't wait to see what you'll do. Izuku, she said softly. Then is it settled? Nana asked. I know you already said yes, but there's been this little debate. Ochako giggled a little and nodded. Yes, I accept. Perfect, Nana said as she pumped her fist. And we don't even need to find you a partner. You already have a good one in your boyfriend. Izuku and Ochako almost jumped a foot in the air. Be boyfriend, they said simultaneously. Nana looked surprised. What, you're not dating? And no, Izuku stammered. We're not no. Ochako shook her head. Yeah, no, we're not nothing like that. Why not? Nana asked, cocking her hip. Izuku and Ochako couldn't bear to look at each other. Neither gave an answer as their faces burned red. Nana shook her head as she laughed softly. Now, come on. I gotta get you back to your parents so I can explain to them all this, and then you both need to get some sleep. Training begins tomorrow. Izuku and Ochako both shot a glance at each other as Nana took them by the arms and lifted them up into the air. The embarrassment faded a little as it was overtaken by awe and amazement at how different everything felt compared to just 10 minutes prior. What had seemed a bleak fate was now a bright future for them both. Part of me is worrying that she won't show up," Izuku muttered as he and Ochako sat on Dagaba Beach the next afternoon. Nana had told them that she'd meet them there after they got out of school so they could officially begin their training. "I know," Ochako agreed. "I know she'll be here, but it's hard to believe it's really happening." Once they had gotten over their worry and after Inko had healed both of them, Izuku's parents were overjoyed for Izuku and Ochako. They couldn't have been more supportive to either of them. Izuku hadn't seen it, but Ochako told him that her father had fainted when he heard the news, and her mother nearly did as well. If it wasn't for Nana being there to corroborate her story, they probably wouldn't have believed her at first. It was just too fantastical. Izuku smiled at his friend warmly. "It's going to be amazing to watch you turn into the hero I always knew you could be." She blushed and returned his smile. "Hey, the same goes for you. Once you figure out what your quirk is, I'm sure you'll be right there with me." He knew there was no way he'd ever be able to keep up with All for One, no matter what quirk he had. He'd always dreamed of being the #1 hero when he was younger. But as he grew up, that desire shifted a little. He wanted to save people to the best of his ability, and if that did or did not propel him to the #1 spot, then so be it. He wasn't in this for the glory nor the money. To him, being the greatest hero didn't necessarily mean being the top-ranked hero. "I'll be doing my best. That's for sure," Izuku replied as he met her gaze. "That's all I can expect," came a voice from behind them. Izuku and Ochako whipped around to see a tall, casually dressed woman wearing a baseball cap and a pair of mirrored sunglasses. A disguised Nana was walking toward them, a wide smile on her face. "You're, pretty sneaky," Ochako noted. Nana smirked. "Or maybe you two lovebirds were just distracted." Both Izuku and Ochako began to blush. Ochako gulped. "And Nana, we already told you." I know," she said, waving her hand dismissively but still smirking. "Now, let's get down to business. To defeat the tons of trash here," Izuku agreed, nodding. "Yes, but first," Nana began, looking down at Ochako as she took off her sunglasses. "We need to have a talk about the reality of what's happening here." Ochako blinked nervously. "What do you mean exactly?" Nana's joviality was replaced by the seriousness one might expect of the #1 hero. "Make no mistake, Ochako, I intend to give you my quirks. Not all at once, of course. That would kill you. But eventually, everything I have will be yours. That is perhaps more of a burden than you realize." Izuku felt like he was intruding a little. "Do you want me to leave you two to talk in private?" "I don't. Absolutely not," Nana said firmly. "You need to hear this just as much as she does." Ochako and Izuku exchanged a concerned look. "Each one of the quirks I carry is a sacred gift," Nana began with a weight in her voice. "A quirk is far more than just a superpower or a special ability. A quirk is a part of someone's very soul, and when you carry that quirk, you carry that soul with you." The pair were listening with rapt attention. "I have critics, just like my predecessor and all of the all-for-ones before him, that believe we are too conservative with our quirk. In theory, we could take quirks from villains and prevent them from ever using them to hurt someone ever again. But that is an abominable punishment. Taking a quirk against someone's will is a line we only cross when we deem it absolutely necessary. And so far, that has never been the case. There is always another way. To take a quirk forcibly is to mangle someone's very soul, and to invite ruin upon not just yourself, but all of the other souls we bear. Each quirk I carry has a story behind it. It has a person behind it, a soul within it. For nearly every quirk, I can tell you the name of the person who owns it, as well as the story behind how we came to have it. As my successor, as heir to all of the all-for-ones that came before, I will expect you to continue this practice in good faith and judgment. You are shouldering not just the power and responsibility to society, but the personal commitment to every noble quirk joining us on our journey. Knowing this, do you still accept?" She finished, looking down at Ochako expectantly. She nodded. "I do." Nana smirked proudly and nodded back. "Good. But there's one more thing you need before we can get you started." "What's that?" Ochako asked, furrowing her brow. Had she not passed all of the tests? "A partner," Nana answered simply. "Have you ever wondered why I'm seldom seen without Ground Zero? The rumor sites say you're dating." Izuku responded before he had time to think. Nana shook her head. "No, Sorahiko is a dear friend of mine, but we work together not just because we're friends and have good teamwork, but because he serves a vital role. Ochako, you must understand that All for One is an incredibly powerful quirk, but it is even more dangerous than it is powerful. It is said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in a world of quirks, the person who wields All for One is about as close to absolute power as it gets. I already talked about why we don't take quirks for our sake, but it goes further than that. With this quirk, you could, in theory, reshape society. You could take quirks and give quirks. You could be, in many ways, almost a god. Beyond the obvious horrible implications of that sort of thing, every person you touch would have their soul affected in some way. By having this power, you are subject to the greatest degree of responsibility of almost anybody on this entire planet." Nana looked down as her expression became darker. "It can be subtle at times. You might not even notice yourself thinking or talking in a dangerous way. Restraint must be your mantra at all times. Let me tell you this, when I first met you two, my heart ached. I wanted nothing more than to give you both quirks and let you both chase your dreams. But I couldn't. If I gave you quirks, not only would that betray those that gave themselves to me and our predecessors on this journey, but it would open up a terrible door. If I gave a quirk to you, what is to stop me from giving one to every quirkless kid I run into with a dream to be a hero? If I take a quirk from a villain, why shouldn't I take one from every villain? It is best to never go down that path, not even once. Ochako nodded her head in understanding. She grasped what Nana was saying, but all of this was a lot to take in, which is where our partners come in. Every all-for-one since the first has had a partner to keep them on the right path. It is hubris to assume that anybody can make the right decisions at all times, and to think that any one person is strong enough to resist temptation forever. This is why you need a partner. This is why you need a support network. Our mission, our journey is too important to undertake by ourselves. Nobody is an island. You may carry the quirks alone, but you cannot stand alone. Nana took a deep breath and looked Ochako in the eyes. Do you understand? Ochako stared at her in awe for a few moments, then nodded. I do. Do you have someone in mind who could be your partner? Izuku, she answered without hesitation. He smiled softly. I had a feeling that might be what you said, Nana said with a smirk as she turned to Izuku. The smirk fell from her face again as she gazed down. Izuku, you need to understand what is being asked of you here. You are not to be her keeper, nor her boss, parent, taskmaster, warden, or anything else. You are to be her partner. That's what he is now. Ochako protested as she came to Izuku's defense. Nana held up her hand. I know, but this is serious. I'm not accusing him. I'm trying to impress upon him the reality and gravity of the situation. Ochako nodded and deflated a little, even as Izuku shot her a thankful smile. As I was saying, you need to be her partner, her friend, someone she can lean on, and someone she can trust. You two have the remarkable luck of already having a relationship like you have, but this burden can put a strain on things. More than one friendship has been broken by all for one, and I don't want to see that happen to you too. Izuku, you need to realize and accept what is going to happen to Ochako. She is going to become very, very powerful. No matter what quirk you develop, there is very little chance that you will be able to keep up with her in terms of power. She will be faster, stronger, and able to do things that you can't. Can you handle that? Izuku stared at her like she had two heads. I don't understand. Are you asking me if I'm going to get jealous of her? Nana nodded. It happens. Sorahiko wasn't my first partner. My first was a woman I had taken a fancy to in college, and who was with me from the beginning with Toshinori. As he passed the torch to me, she became more surly and unpleasant, until it finally came to a head about a year later. Apparently, she thought it was an unspoken agreement between the two of us that I would use all for one to make her powerful as well. When I told her that I wouldn't do that, she was very upset. She wound up devolving into villainy out of bitterness. Izuku and Ochako both stared at her in shock. He held a hand to his mouth as he spoke. I'm so sorry, Nana. That's awful. It was a long time ago, she replied, nodding solemnly. Sorahiko took up the mantle of my partner shortly after, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. He's been a fantastic partner. What I'm asking you is, do you think you can stand by Ochako as she becomes the next all-for-one? Can you support her and help her, even as it feels like she's leagues above you? I can, Izuku answered firmly. Ochako is the most heroic person I know and she deserves this. I don't care about being the strongest. I just want to help people, and that includes her. Izuku, Ochako said softly, eyes starting to grow misty. Nana turned back to her. One last question. Ochako, can you stand beside Izuku as a partner to him as much as he is a partner to you? Can you respect him and listen to him even when it's hard? God, I feel like I'm marrying you too. I don't remember it being like this when Toshi gave me this speech. Anyway, can you support him as he supports you? The word marrying sent blood rushing to both of the teenagers' cheeks and forced both of their gazes down to the sand. I can, Ochako said softly, trying to keep her mind from wandering places. I promise. Great, Nana exclaimed as she discarded the weight and austerity to the wind. That's out of the way, then. Congratulations, you two. This is the start of a new— Nope, this sounds like I'm marrying you again. Look, this is where your dream starts. Both of you, are you ready to begin? They nodded emphatically, neither daring to look each other in the eye. Nana sat down cross-legged in the sand. Then let's not waste any time. Ochako, sit across from me. Izuku, between us off to the side a little. The teenagers obeyed quickly. The two women looked across at each other for a moment before Nana began to move. She held out her hand and offered it to Ochako, her palm facing skyward. Ochako reached out and took it gently as her heart rate picked up. What is this? She asked. Nana smiled. I'm about to give you your first quirk. Are you ready? That's what Ochako both hoped and feared she was going to say. I think so. I mean, yes, I am. Nana chuckled. It's normal to be nervous. I nearly cried when Toshi gave me my first quirk. And that was before the pain began. Pain? Ochako squeaked nervously. Getting a quirk isn't an easy thing. And it will hurt a bit. Don't worry, it won't be that bad, and I know you're tough. Besides, Izuku is right there if you need to hold his hand for support. Nana smirked a little as Ochako fidgeted. Are you ready? Ochako nodded once quickly. Arakan, Nana said simply. Say his name. Arakan, Ochako replied. The quirk I give you now was first owned by Arakan, the second all-for-one. He took up the mantle from the original and spent nearly 2 decades defending innocence in the early days of quirks. His quirk has been passed down to every all-for-one since, and it will be the first I give to you. You will be the guardian of this piece of all of us. Ochako was listening with rapt attention. I'll carry it proudly. Now you're getting it, Nana said with a proud smile. Have you ever noticed that all of us all-for-ones have been tall and muscular? Ochako paused. Yeah, I have. It's not a problem that I'm short, is it? I mean, I'm still muscular. I've been working really hard. Nana laughed. And you're going to have to keep working hard, but this quirk will help. It is called heroic form. Arakan's quirk gives us the body to best do our duty. It is a simple, yet powerful quirk that will turn you into your ideal vision of yourself. Whoa, what? Ochako gasped. Like, what? Make me taller. Nana confirmed. And more, based on how you envision your ideal heroic form, the quirk will work to change your body to match that. It won't give you total command over your body or anything like that, but it will do wonders, believe me. I gained 8 inches and about 50 pounds of muscle when I got it from Toshinori, as well as some other weight. Beyond just that, it'll make your muscles denser and stronger, essentially giving you moderate superhuman strength and speed, even without another quirk. You will have to eat a lot more from now on, though. To emphasize her point, Nana reached out and rapped her knuckle on a nearby fridge, putting a huge dent in it. Are you serious? Ochako asked. She nodded. Are you ready to receive this quirk? Ochako hesitated. Wait, so if I take this, are you going to shrink down and lose strength? I can't weaken the symbol of peace. Oh, you really are considerate, Nana cooed. But you don't need to worry. The quirk does its work and then sets it in stone. You'll have a couple weeks to grow and decide on what kind of height and build you want. And then it'll kind of lock in. I'm not going to grow or shrink if I change my mind right now, and I'm not going to lose anything by giving it to you. That's why we give it first. Well, okay, Ochako said nervously. As the transfer became imminent, she felt more and more nervous. Izuku reached out and put a hand on her leg to try and calm her, which seemed to surprise her at first. Ochako shot him a nervous glance, then reached down and grabbed his hand like Nana had jokingly suggested. It made her feel better. Nana pretended not to notice the pair holding hands and took a firmer grasp of Ochako's other hand. She closed her eyes and began to focus. This was the first time she had ever given a quirk away. How hard could it be? She took a hold of Arakan's quirk and began to pull it loose. The quirk seemingly came willingly, as if it had heard the conversation and knew the plan. With a thought, she began to push the quirk toward Ochako, which felt much more intimate than she had previously anticipated. She wasn't surprised, as she was transferring a bit of soul between herself and her heir, but there was a difference between theory and practice. Ochako grimaced as she felt the strange energy begin to flow up her arm. She began to unwittingly squeeze Izuku's hand as her entire body began to feel indescribable. Ochako didn't know if she could put into words how it felt to have a quirk given to her. But if she had to, it was as if something was added to a pot that made it overflow a little, then stirred until it disappeared. She felt overfull from the very depth of her being. There was no place on her body where she could point to, but there was a definite point somewhere that was being twisted. At the same time, it was as if an emptiness that she had never noticed was suddenly filled. In those uncomfortable, beautiful moments, she was no longer quirkless. She finally had what almost everyone else had. As quickly as it had begun, it finished. Nana released Ochako's hand as she felt the quirk fully depart and implant itself inside of its new home. Ochako released a great breath she hadn't realized she had been holding and began to pant heavily as a wave of discomfort washed over her body. In that moment, she realized she was crushing Izuku's hand and quickly released it. Oh, sorry. Are you okay? He took his hand back and flexed it. Don't worry about me. How are you feeling? Are you all right? Do you need anything? I have a snack in my backpack. Of course I'm going to worry about you, Ochako huffed. But no, I'm fine. I just feel weird. Nana smiled down at the two teenagers fussing over each other. Yeah, they were going to do fine. All right, up you go, she said as she stood up and looked down at them. You've got your quirk, but you both still need to train. This garbage isn't going to move itself. Get moving. A few days later, Izuku and Ochako walked out of Aldera like they always did. In the short amount of time since Ochako had gotten heroic form, the changes were already noticeable. Instead of having to look down at her like he had for his entire life, she stood eye to eye with him. Nobody else seemed to have really noticed it yet, but everyone ignored the quirkless kids, so he wasn't surprised. What he was surprised about was how he had begun to feel weird when looking at her. Ochako had always made him feel happy and warm, but now those feelings that he had managed to stuff into a box labeled "Do Not Open" years ago were threatening to break out again for some reason. "Have fun with your dad," Ochako said as they neared the gates. "I'll see you later, all right?" Izuku nodded. "Yeah, it'll only be an hour or two. Nana knows I'll be late. Don't do too much without me." Ochako stuck her tongue out. "You better hurry or there's not gonna be any trash left for you." The two waved goodbye as Izuku walked toward his dad, who was waiting outside of the school with his car. Izuku was getting that tour of the precinct that they had talked about on the morning of that fateful day, but truth be told, he was less invested in it than he was then. He was still excited to see the place his father worked, but now that he knew he had a quirk, the prospect of being a police officer was out the window. He was going to be a hero and he wouldn't settle for anything else. "How is school?" Hisashi asked as the two hugged and got into the car. "Fine," Izuku answered typically. Hisashi smiled. "Have you figured out what your quirk is yet?" Izuku furrowed his brow. "No, Ochako and I have tried everything we can think of trying. Even Miss Nana has helped me out. We still have no idea." "Well, if I might," Hisashi began, "it's technically my job to figure out mysteries. I'd be happy to lend my help, if you'd like it." "Of course," Izuku replied immediately. "I'll take all the help I can get." "Smart man," his father replied. "Turning down help is never a good idea. Now, since your quirk has never activated, it can't be something simple. It's not an obvious mutation, and you've never shown any signs of transforming anything. I'm sure you've already come to all of those conclusions." "Yes." Izuku nodded. "Right, so it has to be activated somehow. There must be a trigger that you haven't experienced yet. Let your old man tell you that this world has tons of things that you haven't seen, heard, or done, and any of them could be what you need. There's no way to figure that out. The greatest detective in the world couldn't deduce it." Izuku deflated a little. "So, what you need to do is be vigilant," Hisashi continued. "Since you've never used a quirk before, you might not recognize what you're looking for." He held up his finger and summoned a small blue flame for a moment. "Using a quirk is like using a muscle. It's something physical that you feel. You might not be able to figure out where you feel it, but you'll feel it. And since you've never used it, it will probably be something pretty apparent, like when you work out a muscle for the first time in a long time. You need to stay aware of that so you don't miss your opportunity." "Makes sense." Izuku nodded as he rubbed his chin. Yeah, it does." "Good," Hisashi finished. "Now, don't obsess over it or you'll lose the forest for the trees. Just be aware and keep living your life. I'm sure you'll figure it out." They arrived at the Musutafu police precinct a few minutes later and pulled into the garage. The few of Hisashi's fellow officers greeted the pair as they entered, complete with standard coworker jokes that nobody thought were really funny but everyone chuckled at to be polite. They gave Izuku an exaggerated security scan to show him the process before welcoming him into the building proper. Hisashi took him around and showed him his desk and introduced him to several of his coworkers, including the police chief. Izuku got the impression that she was a no-nonsense woman, but she seemed friendly enough to him. "Hisashi told us that all for one told you that you have a quirk," she noted at one point. "I'm happy for you, but a part of me is sad that we're losing out on a promising potential officer." Potential officer, ma'am," Izuku replied. She chuckled as she glanced over at Hisashi. "If half of what your father brags about you is true, you'd be a fine detective one day." Izuku blushed a little as his father beamed proudly. He was shown around their holding cells, and he was even put in handcuffs as part of the demonstration. They had all sorts of different gear and gadgets to deal with different types of quirks, from suppression cuffs to reinforced braces and more. The police did their best to contain villainy, but there was a reason that heroes were needed. With superpowered criminals on the loose, they needed help. That isn't to say that they didn't have their own ways of defending themselves. Near the end of the tour, Hisashi took Izuku down into the basement where their firing range was. The police almost never used their guns, but they were all trained in case the need arose. Not to mention, firing ranges are a blast. No pun intended, Hisashi noted. "I didn't really appreciate them until I spent a summer in the States in college. Firing a .50 calories rifle has no business being as fun as it is." They gave Izuku a thorough safety course and standard safety equipment before they let him touch a gun. He put on the safety glasses and the fancy ear protectors that only dampened sound over a certain noise level, which Izuku thought were fascinating. "All right, Izuku," Hisashi began from several feet away. "Remember what I said about posture and stance. Pick up the pistol when you're ready." Izuku nodded and turned back to the range. The target was a good 20 yards away, which didn't seem too far, at least to him. He picked up the pistol and kept his finger off the trigger as he checked the safety. He picked up the magazine with the other hand and inserted it securely. He pulled the slide back and kept the barrel low as he flicked off the safety and aimed at the target. He put his finger on the trigger and took a deep breath as he remembered what his father told him. "Squeeze, don't pull." Izuku lined up his sights straight at the bullseye and focused. After a few moments of hesitation, he squeezed the trigger and a crack echoed through the range. "Damn," Isashi exclaimed. "Was that a bullseye on your first shot?" Izuku blinked and looked. Sure enough, his shot was dead center. A grin grew across his face as he felt a small rush. His dad was right, this was fun. "Go on, shoot again," his father encouraged. Izuku nodded and aimed the gun back down range. He went through the same motions and tried to line up his shot again, but his hands were shaking from the adrenaline and excitement coursing through him. He tried to steady his hands, but he couldn't, so he simply tried his best. Another shot rang out, another bullseye on the target. Izuku's grin grew wider for a moment before it fell off his face. He aimed downrange again, but this time, he intentionally aimed a bit far to the right. He focused on the bullseye regardless, and with his shaky hands, shot a third time. He felt something tug inside himself. It felt awkward and tender, like a muscle he had never used before. Izuku shakily put the safety back on as he put the gun down. His eyes were wide as he stared at his third consecutive bullseye. "D-Dad." Nana rubbed her forehead in exasperation. "Your quirk is what?" Izuku rubbed his neck awkwardly as he looked up at the much taller woman. "I can, control bullets, Miss Nana." "Are you sure it's only bullets?" she asked. Before he could answer, Ochako came around the corner carrying a truck tire above her head. As soon as she saw him, she dropped it and came running over, kicking up sand as she almost tackled him off his feet in a great hug. It was far from the first time she had done that over the years, but he was used to catching a shorter and lighter woman. By now, she was about his height, and maybe a bit taller, but she had begun packing on muscle too. She was always fit, but now they were bigger. Not big enough for most people to notice, but for someone who knew her as well as he did, he could tell. Her arms were a little bigger, her thighs a little thicker, her abs that he could feel under her shirt as she hugged into him were harder and more defined. And if he didn't know better, her chest felt a little more generous as well. She broke the hug apart after a few moments and grinned as she pulled back. "I'll forgive you for not showing up yesterday." He blushed a little. "Yeah, I was a little busy. Today was Saturday, and they were out on the beach in the bright, early morning sun." He hadn't shown up for their normal training the previous afternoon as he had spent it trying to figure out as much about his newly discovered quirk as he could. He had told Ochako over the phone that he had found his quirk, but didn't tell her any specifics as he wasn't sure about them at the time. Nana cleared her throat to get the pair's attention. She smiled knowingly as they quickly turned around and looked up at her dutifully. "My question, Izuku." "What?" "Oh, right," he began. Yes, I believe so, Miss Nana." Ochako tilted her head. "Huh, my quirk, Ochako. It lets me control bullets," he explained. "I thought it might have been control of projectiles, but that didn't make sense. I would have discovered it earlier if it was. I tried throwing rocks, some knives my dad had, even Mom's old bow from when she was younger. Nothing. But when I shot the pistol, I could do something. It wasn't much, but it was there." "Whoa," Ochako whispered with wide eyes. Nana stroked her chin. "And you're sure it's bullet control and you're not just a really good shot? A marksman quirk, perhaps?" He shook his head. "No, it's not aiming. My hands were shaking way too much for that to be the case. Beyond that, I tested it. I aimed the pistol further and further away from the target until I couldn't hit the bullseye anymore. The further I aimed away, the more I felt something inside of me tug on it. The bullet was curving, Miss Nana. There was no doubt of that." "I wonder why that is," Ochako muttered as she scratched her head. Izuku shrugged. "My guess. It's a really bizarre mutation of my father's quirk. It might have to do with the ignition of the powder." "Oh, that could be it. I wonder how useful it will be," Nana wondered out loud. "Powerful, no doubt, but it's a little niche. That's nothing to be ashamed of. You just have to be aware of it so you can compensate with other training." Ochako put an arm around her friend. "If you think Izuku won't figure out ways to use it that you'd never dreamed of, then you don't know him. He's got a mind for quirks." Fair," Nana said, rubbing her chin and letting out a terse sigh. "Nana," Ochako shot at her. "Why aren't you happy for him?" The taller woman went wide-eyed. "What? No, you missed that. I already was." "It's true," Izuku admitted, rubbing his chest. "I think she almost bruised my ribs when she hugged me." "Down, girl," Nana said teasingly to Ochako. "I'm just exasperated because of what his quirk means for me." "Which is?" Izuku asked nervously. Her eyes grew an almost fearful look. "It means I have to talk to Nezu." Izuku and Ochako glanced at each other. "The president of UA." "Yeah," Nana said with a shudder. "Him? Why?" Ochako asked. "Because if his quirk can only be used with a gun and bullets," she began, pointing at Izuku, "then I need to talk to Nezu so he can use a gun during the entrance exam." "Well, at least it will be simple, right?" Ochako offered. Nana's expression darkened. "It's never simple with that cat." Another month had passed and the mountains of trash were beginning to shrink. There were still towering piles, but the two were making good progress. On the subject of progress, Nana's training was already having a visible effect on Izuku. He was nearing his 18th birthday, but he was already built like many young men heading into college. His arms had visibly bulked up, his chest broadened, and his trapezius was making his neck appear thicker. On the other hand, there was Ochako. Her growth had recently stopped, and while Nana told her she would still have to put in the effort to grow her muscles, heroic form had done wonders. In many ways, she looked like a smaller Nana. She stood an inch shorter than the pro at 63, and had filled out with muscle that again was reminiscent of her mentor. Perhaps it shouldn't have been surprising that Ochako's idea of a heroic form was akin to Nana's actual form, which, apparently, included her chest as well. Ochako had gone through several new bras over the past month, and the one she was wearing was feeling a little tight. Fortunately, with her growth more or less stopping, she wouldn't have to worry too much about it anymore. However, on that subject, "Hey, Nana," Ochako asked when she saw Izuku walk off to a pile on the far side of the beach. She responded as she looked down, barely, at Ochako. She looked down at her chest, then back up. Are my boobs supposed to be getting bigger? Nana stared at her for a moment before she began to laugh. "I warned you, kid. The quirk makes your body into your ideal form. What you want to look like, it helps make happen. Remember that extra weight I mentioned?" Well, sure, Ochako said, her face growing redder by the second. But I'm kinda making myself look like you, right? Sure, Nana admitted, you do look like me. But I don't think it's just me you're thinking about. What do you mean? I think that you might be considering a certain green-haired boy you have a crush on, she explained. Maybe you're thinking that if you grow a certain way, he might like it. Ochako gulped. No, those feelings had been locked away years ago. I don't know, I don't think so. Besides, I don't think he likes this new look of mine. Oh, Nana asked, raising an eyebrow. Ochako nodded. He's been more awkward around me, I guess. And he doesn't make eye contact with me much anymore. And it always seems like he's nervous and distracted. Nana began to laugh again as she clapped Ochako on the back. Oh, you poor thing. This isn't funny. Ochako exclaimed. I feel like my best friend is growing away from me. Nana's smile grew a little smaller. That wouldn't be funny if it were happening. I'm laughing at how blind you are, kid. Come on, he was crushing on you before you got heroic form. And now you're turning into an Amazon in front of him. Ochako's entire face lit up neon red. What? No, that's not it. Nana said with a smirk. Oh, speak of the devil. Izuku had appeared back on their stretch of beach carrying a rusted oven. He hauled it to the dumpster and hefted it inside with surprising ease and then clapped his hands together. It's full, Miss Nana. All right, she called back before turning back to Ochako. In all seriousness, I don't want this eating you up. I order you, as your mentor, to go talk to him about this. No arguments. Go. Ochako opened her mouth, but Nana was already walking away. She watched Izuku jog back down the beach as Nana picked up the dumpster and flew away, leaving her alone on the clean section of sand. She grit her teeth, decided that Nana was right, and that it was for the best, and began to jog after Izuku. She was trying to keep her mind from racing over all of the worst-case scenarios. But her success was mixed. What if he hated her now that she was taller than him? What if he was jealous like he said he wouldn't be? What if? Ochako rounded the corner to see Izuku pulling another appliance out of an entire mountain of steel and aluminum. She paused for a moment as she watched him struggle. Her eyes traced over his deltoids, triceps, and lats as they bulged with effort, showing off just how much work he'd put in over the years. As he wrenched it free with a great metallic scrape, something else caught her eye. There was a heavy dishwasher at the top of the pile that was knocked loose and had begun rolling down the mountain. Izuku, she cried out as her body jumped into action. He jumped a little and whipped around just in time to see her leaping toward him and tackling him out of the way. The dishwasher slammed into the sand with a heavy crash as they dove clear and hit the ground themselves. Ochako breathed heavily as the adrenaline that had surged into her system began to fade. She looked down at Izuku, who was flat on his back beneath her and looking up at her in awe. Ochako herself was above him, propped up on her hands and knees as her face hung over his. Are you all right? She asked. He nodded. Their eyes met for a moment before he averted his gaze again, which caused her mind to quickly return to her original mission. Izuku, we need to talk, she said firmly. He didn't look at her. All right, but you've been acting weird, Ochako exclaimed. She wasn't sure where this surge of confidence had come from, but she wasn't going to waste it. You've been avoiding me and not making eye contact, and then you've just been awkward. We've always been honest with each other. What's going on? Izuku's eyes went wide as his eyes snapped to hers again. I promise it's fine, Ochako. Nothing is wrong. You've never been able to lie to me, Ochako said firmly, moving her face a little closer to his. That wasn't entirely true, but she'd learned to read him pretty well over the years. Izuku paused for a moment. He realized that Ochako was doubting him, only a month after he had promised to be her partner. His own weakness was causing her to trip on the path she needed to take to become the next all-for-one. This was bigger than him. All right, yeah, he began awkwardly with a forced laugh. Okay. It was harder than he thought to say it. Spit it out, Ochako ordered with worry in her voice. You're beautiful, Izuku answered before he could stop himself. He relaxed a little, he'd finally done it. Ochako was convinced for a half-second that she had misheard him until her brain caught up. The chains that had held her box of feelings shut had apparently rusted under a month of Nana's constant teasing, and she felt one of them snap. What? You're beautiful, he repeated. I've been awkward because, well, every time I look at you, I keep staring. He was doing it now. She stared at him too. Because I look different. No, he said quickly. I've always thought you were beautiful, but I was able to keep it under control, but now. Look, sorry. I'll get used to the new you and then there won't be any problems, all right. Another chain snapped. You did, she asked. He laughed awkwardly. He wasn't sure she realized she was still pinning him down on his back. Yeah, how could I not? You always thought. Why didn't you say anything? I couldn't risk it, he admitted. What if you thought I was weird or creepy or something? But now I'm your partner, right? I have to put those reservations aside and be honest so I can help you be the next all for one. Creepy. No way, Izuku, you're my best friend, I could never. She trailed off as she looked down at his big green eyes. I guess I should be honest, too. I've always thought you were handsome and attractive and of course I love being around you and, well, maybe Nana isn't wrong. Izuku's jaw dropped. You, like me, like she says, I mean. She nodded. Izuku gulped. She was so close to him and she smelled so good. I, like you too, Ochako. Another chain snapped. How long? She asked simply. As long as I can remember, he replied. Me too. Izuku smiled awkwardly. I guess we should have said something earlier, huh? Yeah, I guess, she responded. His face was so close to her own. If she just lowered herself down a little more. His lips were right there. It's too late now, though, he continued. She stopped. Right. We need to focus. He nodded. Why, yeah. You need to get ready to be all for one. We both need to train to get into UA. Our dream isn't ours yet, Ochako. We still need to fight for it. She finally leaned back off of him and fell back on the sand so she was sitting down. Izuku pulled himself up on his elbows and looked up at her. Both of them were blushing fiercely. And he was sure her heart was racing as much as his own. Maybe someday in the future. The box was unchained, but it stayed closed. For now, her gaze snapped to him. She stared at him for a moment then smiled. Yeah, they sat there, looking into each other's eyes for a few moments before Izuku averted his eyes out of nerves. It's good to know that you, like what I look like. She blushed a little harder. It was true. She had stared at him more than a few times over the years. And did you mean it when do you like how I look now? His vision returned to her, but it was firmer. Ochako, you have that quirk to become the best hero you can be. You can't hold back for me or anyone else. Become what you want to be. Right, she said with a nod. It was foolish for her to get hung up on something like that. But for what it's worth, he continued, I, really do like it. A lot. Ochako grew 2 inches that night. Izuku walked into the firing range to see Ground Zero and his father putting the final touches on a strange stand. It looked like a camera tripod, but there was a pistol strapped to the top, which probably wouldn't take very good pictures. Ah, good, you're here, Ground Zero muttered as he stood up and looked down at the young man. Your father and I figured out a way to help train your quirk efficiently. Izuku looked down the range and saw 5 hay-filled targets sitting at various distances and at various spacing. Looking back at the gun, he noted that none of them were directly in front of it. You want me to hit all the targets without moving the gun? Exactly, Hisashi said proudly. The amount of training we can do with a quirk like yours is limited, so we have to do what we can, Ground Zero noted. Once you're at UA, a lot of the red tape will be gone and you can start really making progress, but this will do for now. The 2 men took a few steps back so Izuku could take up his position behind the stand. Over the past few months, he had gotten very comfortable with a pistol in his hand, almost to the point that it had become second nature. This one was chambered in .22 caliber, which was one of the easiest for him to control due to the relatively small mass and energy. He took a deep breath as he scanned over the 5 targets, making a note of exactly where they were, then began to fire. 5 controlled shots rang out, each of them striking bullseyes except for the last one, which hit several inches away. Izuku huffed in frustration. We put that one over there as a challenge, his father called over. Come on, son, focus. Izuku nodded and returned his focus to the pistol. He put his finger back on the trigger as he narrowed his eyes. 4 more shots rang out and then there was the smallest bit of hesitation before the 5th. Izuku pulled as hard as he could on the bullet and this time, it struck true. Good, Ground Zero noted. Now again, faster this time. Once you get the hang of this, we'll move you up to the 9mm. You must always be pushing your quirk if you wish to see improvement. Izuku nodded dutifully and recentered himself as he pulled the trigger 5 more times. Do you know what today is? Nana asked in the morning sun. Izuku and Ochako said together. It's the 1-year anniversary of our meeting. She exclaimed. It's been a year already. Ochako gasped. Is that why you brought us back to Dagaba? Izuku looked off into the sunrise as he thought. The year had seemed to fly by. Their 18th birthdays had come and gone, and they had graduated from high school a few months prior. They were in the middle of the long summer, a term for the extensive break between the end of high school and the start of college. Many things had changed over the years, and while Japan's secondary schools had held onto their trimester schedule many decades ago, their colleges had changed to fit the 2-semester start in the fall schedules that the rest of the world used. As for the beach, Izuku and Ochako had finished that up in only a few months. Between the two of them, it had gone rather quickly, and they had spent the intervening months training with lifting weights, running, and other more conventional methods. A combination of that training and heroic form had turned Ochako into something to behold, at least if you asked Izuku. Her height had stopped at 65, a full foot taller than him and an inch taller than Nana, but that wasn't the only place she had grown. Her thighs had thickened, her arms followed suit, and her core wasn't being left behind. That wasn't to say that she was all muscle. Izuku was painfully aware of how feminine she still looked. Heroic form had widened her hips, and Izuku was sure that her backside wasn't solely the product of the thousands of squats they had done over the past year. He was very conscious of how Nana had described how heroic form would change her body to match her vision, especially with his head level with her breasts. Those definitely hadn't been that big before she had gotten the quirk, and now they were each comparable to his head. He had failed in his goal to get used to her new form over the past year. He was just better at hiding it now, which he supposed was the same thing in the end. The truth was that she was more beautiful and attractive now than she had ever been before, and it was only getting worse. Perhaps the most attractive thing about her was just how strong she had become. She looked powerful, but she was even stronger than that. Thanks to heroic form, she was maxing out weight machines with little effort, and her deadlift personal record had topped 1,200 pounds the previous week. He would never admit it, but Ochako filled his thoughts quite often when he was alone in his room with the door locked. On the other hand, Ochako had enjoyed watching Izuku over the past year as well. While he hadn't grown any taller, his effort was far from going to waste. Nana had informed Ochako that heroic form had a more passive element. While her outward appearance wouldn't change much, her growth was far from over. Her muscles would gain a little size and some definition as she grew up and trained them more, but the real strength would be invisible. Her muscles would grow denser and stronger without much outward sign, which is how Nana was able to pick up cars, and she only looked a little buffer than Ochako. Izuku didn't have that quirk, which meant all his work was very visible. She sometimes encouraged him to work up a sweat just so he would take his shirt off and she could secretly admire him. His arms were defined, his core was sturdy, his legs were thick. His entire body was covered in powerful, functional muscle. She loved how his traps tented every shirt he wore. She loved watching his back when he flexed. She loved how his shorts stretched over his straining thighs when he did weighted squats. One of the things she noticed most was how broad his shoulders had become over the past year. He may not have grown taller, but even though she had a foot on him, his shoulders were just as broad as hers, if not more so. When they had met Nana, he was wearing size small shirts, even if they were a little tight on him. She remembered how privately excited she had gotten when he had needed to go up to mediums, and how even those had gotten too tight for him. He was wearing larges now, and she could still make out his pecs underneath them. Ochako remembered how Nana had mentioned that they still had plenty of growth ahead of them. They were just now reaching physical maturity, and the training they would go through at UA would shape them into heroes far more than what she would be able to drill them through in a year, even with their intense schedule. There was something about him being shorter than her that she enjoyed as well. She wasn't quite sure what it was, but it was yet another part of her undeniable attraction to the man. Not that she would ever admit it, but she had moaned his name more than a few times into her pillow. Unfortunately, she was sure Nana knew about their mutual attraction. They were probably being a lot less obvious than they thought, and Nana had jokingly given Ochako a condom for her birthday, which pretty much confirmed it. Nana's teasings were always lighthearted and she never pressed too much, so Ochako and Izuku didn't have anything to complain about. If anything, Ochako was pretty sure Nana was proud of how mature they were being by choosing to focus on their goal instead of dating. It is, Nana confirmed, because today you get your second quirk. Well, Izuku exclaimed. Go Ochako. Really? Ochako asked. Are you sure? Nana laughed as she looked up at Ochako. Absolutely. You'll need more than just heroic form if you want to excel at UA. And the exam is only, 3 or 4 months away? God, it is coming up, isn't it? Izuku muttered. I don't feel like I'm ready. Don't worry, we still have time, Nana said in an attempt to comfort him. She had become a bit of a second mother to both of them over the past year, although there was no way she could replace Inko or Kyoko. But we do need to get you this quirk so you have plenty of practice. I'm ready, Ochako said confidently. Wait, Izuku interjected. Didn't I hear you mention that people aren't designed for more than one quirk? Nana nodded solemnly. That's the other reason why we give heroic form as the first quirk. It's there to pave the way for the second. You need a powerful mind, strong willpower, and a sturdy body to handle a second quirk. Anything less and it might break you. Ochako felt her confidence waver. You did this, right? Nana smiled at her warmly. I did. So did Toshinori and everyone before him. I have no doubt that you are more than strong enough to handle this, especially after this past year. Depending on how well you handle it, we might be able to work in a third quirk before I have to give you everything. But that's not going to be for a while. Come, sit. Both of you. The two sat down on the sand like they had a year prior as Nana did the same. Ochako preemptively reached over and took Izuku's hand as they both grew a faint blush. Smart, Nana noted. This will hurt much more than the first. These two quirks have lived together for many years and they know each other well, but first you must prepare. Take my hand. Ochako placed her other hand in Nana's and took a deep breath. Her name is Taka. Taka, Ochako repeated. Her quirk was the first that Toshinori ever took. Nana began calmly with a touch of nostalgia in her voice. She was a hero, just a year older than him. Nana pulled the quirk loose easily and began to push it toward Ochako. She held it between them, so they both could feel it. She was just starting out as a hero when fate deemed that she make the ultimate sacrifice. Nana continued. To save a small child, she faced a villain much stronger than her. She held her own as long as she could, and the child was able to escape. Ochako felt a pulse of pride from the strange energy tickling her fingertips. However, the villain was persistent and cruel. Taka was mortally wounded in the fight. The doctors could not save her. A pulse of sorrow flowed over her. However, Taka was a hero. She refused to give up, even when her time was drawing short. She sent out a call for All for One, who arrived at her bedside as quickly as he could. Taka pleaded with him to take her quirk, so it could continue to save and protect even after her body faded. Toshinori understood and took her hand, much like how we are now, as life began to leave her body. He took her quirk into himself. She had a smile on her face when she passed. Gratitude. Ochako felt Izuku squeeze her hand and she glanced over to see a tear running down his face. Now Taka journeys with us. Her air cannon has saved more lives than I can count, and it will continue to do so in you. Remember her sacrifice, Ochako, as you remember her name. But most of all, remember her duty as it is now your own. Ochako felt one of her own tears begin to fall as she nodded. I will. Nana pushed the quirk through fully as she put her other hand on top of Ochako's. Holding it firmly, pain shot through Ochako's body as the quirk flowed into her. She felt every fiber of her being, from her brain to her body to what felt like her soul, writhe in protest as she began to breathe heavily. The pain grew worse as a pressure built up inside of her, like a soda can that had been shaken too hard, or a tire pumped full of too much air. Ochako began to groan in pain as sweat began to flow down her face. Izuku released her hand and moved toward her, throwing his arms around her in a tight hug that she returned with both of her arms as Nana let go as well. The pain grew more intense as Izuku and Ochako held each other. Izuku squeezed as tightly as he could, and Ochako as tightly as she dared, both of them holding on as the quirk continued to merge with her. After nearly a minute, it began to fade. The pressure lessened and she finally opened her eyes and began to breathe normally. She held Izuku tightly for a few more seconds before she gave him one last squeeze and they broke apart. Izuku took her hand back in his as he sat down next to her, hoping to give her as much comfort as he could. How do you feel? Nana asked. Like I've eaten too much, Ochako answered truthfully. Nana laughed heartily. Sounds about right. And hey, you did a lot better than I did. No screaming. Good work. Ochako smiled weakly. Thank you, Nana. I know you'll make Taka proud, she said softly. I'll do my best. I know you will, Nana said with undeniable confidence. Now, you two need to get your run in. Take it a little easy if the quirk is still weighing on you. I'll check in with you in an hour and we'll test out air cannon, all right? Yes, Nana, Ochako replied dutifully. Nana saluted and flew off into the air. Izuku and Ochako sat there for another minute or two as she tried to ease the uncomfortable feeling rippling through her body. As she started feeling more normal, she realized Izuku and her were still holding hands. She looked down at their hands and then up at him with a warm smile. Izuku blushed a little and returned the smile. We're really going to do it, huh? He asked. Yeah, we are, Ochako replied. We're going to reach our dreams together. He squeezed her hand. Together. Izuku and Ochako were both silent as they approached UAS main gate. Just beyond the walls were massive buildings that sprawled as far as they could see, and both of them were coming to terms with what was happening that day. The UA entrance exam was broken up into 3 stages. First was the application. If you got accepted, that was the end of it for most of the schools. However, if you were part of one of Big 3, you were far from done. For the prestigious management, support, and hero courses, the written exam came next. These exams were proctored remotely and had taken place 2 weeks prior. If you passed, you were invited for the third and final stage. For management, they would spend a day in simulations as UA faculty assessed their talent. For support, they had to bring an invention of their own, then participate in a build exercise on campus. For the hero course, there was the practical. It took a week for everyone to get through, and Izuku and Ochako were lucky enough to be scheduled for the same day. It was different every year, but the exam was notorious for being difficult and weeding out those without potential. There were plenty of schools in Japan that would accept nearly every prospective student. UA only took the best. A hero degree from UA was a badge of pride and a golden ticket. Everyone knew that the best came from UA. Izuku gripped the steel briefcase he was carrying tightly. Even though he had all the right permissions, he was still understandably nervous about carrying it around. Ochako noticed his nerves and patted him on the shoulder. "It's gonna be fine," she said kindly. "We're gonna crush this thing." Izuku smiled at her as best he could. "Yeah." They walked up to the gates and stopped for a moment, both of them looking up at the imposing everything. It all seemed larger than life. "Hey, Ochako," Izuku began before they continued onward. "Yeah." He looked up at her. "If I don't make it in, you have to promise me you'll find a new partner, all right?" "What?" she exclaimed. "Hey, none of that talk. There's no way you're not getting in, and I don't want to hear you saying that." Izuku kept his gaze firm. "I'm going to try my best. I'm not going to leave any doubt that I didn't, but you and your mission are more important than me. I can't imagine trusting anyone but you with this," she said sincerely. "You're going to make it. And that's final. But fine, I'll make that promise. Doesn't matter because it won't happen." He smiled. "Thanks." Izuku remembered his instructions and presented a keycard he had been given to a scanner at the gate, then held up his case. There was a series of low beeps followed by a ding and a green light, telling him that he was allowed to continue. They stepped into the gates together and walked up the vaunted path toward the main building side by side, even as Izuku had to walk at a faster pace to keep stride. They weren't the only ones there, but Izuku was too focused on the task at hand to pay attention to anyone else. They entered the main building and froze in place. The entrance hall was grand, with a ceiling that stood at least 50 feet tall that was lined with banners and flags red, blue, and gold. A staircase laid on each side leading off into other wings, and a massive set of doors was set in the back wall, leading to who knew where. The marble flooring was decorated with carpets, and it was all tied together by a massive golden statue of the UA logo surrounded by some of the greatest heroes of the past. Standing at the front of the display was the line of heroes that anyone could recognize, each of the 7 all-for-ones that had come before Nana. One day, when she had passed on her quirks fully, she too would join that line, and eventually, hopefully many years later, so would Ochako. He looked up and saw Ochako staring at the same thing. Izuku could only imagine what was going through her mind. "You're going to live up to them and then some." Ochako seemed to snap out of her trance as she looked down at him. "I hope you're right. Come on." She gestured over at the growing line of prospective students in front of a row of expensive-looking machines. They got in the line, which was moving rather quickly, but was still long enough that Izuku grew bored and looked around. He noticed that Ochako was drawing stares from many of the others, which caused a strange feeling to well up in Izuku's chest. He had felt it back when they were still at Aldera and people stared at her, but he never really understood it. He felt acutely protective of her, but that didn't make any sense to him. She was the last person who needed his protection, right? Before long, they reached the front. They both produced the cards that had been delivered to them in the mail and let the machine scan them. The printers produced a small slip with their names, a code, and a large word at the bottom, combat. The pair smiled at each other as they followed the signs down a hallway and into another large room. The exam was sorted into a few categories based on the quirks that the students possessed. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for someone who had a quirk like Mindjax to fight robots, after all. Izuku was grateful that UA took the entrance exam seriously. Neither were surprised by their results. Where else could air cannon, combined with a secret strength-boosting quirk, and bullet control be placed? They stepped through a metal scanner that dispensed a UA gym uniform and a UA-branded bag for each of them, which they grabbed and split off to change into in some of the stalls that had been set up, even if they didn't get in. The uniforms and bags were theirs to keep as a souvenir, which was a nice touch. Izuku suited up and took a moment to appreciate how he looked. The blue uniform was easy to move in but wasn't baggy or stifling. The cloth breathed easily and wasn't itchy, which was all you could ask for from workout clothes. He stepped out of the stall after he stuffed the clothes he had been wearing into the bag and slung it over his shoulder. Ochako exited at the same time and pretended not to notice how Izuku's eyes had gone to her bust, which was still impressive even in the unflattering uniform. Her own eyes were tracing over the way his uniform clung to his chest and how it looked a little tight around his biceps. So they were even. The two followed the next set of arrows along with the steady flow of other attendees. Ochako noticed that several other students were staring at Izuku much like she had done, which gave her this strange feeling in her chest. She had felt it back when they were still at Alder and people began to stare at him as he started bulking up. But she never really understood it. Ochako shook her head and focused on the task at hand. They arrived at a circle drive that had buses flowing in and out of it constantly and scanned their passes again to find out which one they needed to ride. She wasn't sure why, but when they got on the bus, she made sure Izuku got into the seat first so she could sit closer to the aisle. The bus ride was fairly quick, but both of them were still amazed that they needed to take a bus at all to get to somewhere that was on the same campus. They stepped out and looked up to see what appeared to be an entire city behind a massive wall, which further put into perspective just how much money UA was operating on. Despite his mother working for UA, Izuku hadn't ever seen anything but the main building and a few of the other halls before. This was entirely new. The pair approached the final scanner, which beeped and told them where they needed to go for their assignments. They passed through the open gates of the city and saw the different signs directing them to different places, which meant that they were finally splitting up. Ochako leaned down and the two shared a tight hug and wished each other good luck before they went their separate ways. Izuku walked down several city blocks, passing by the streets that had been blocked off by metal walls that were labeled with numbers. Each one was a separate testing area, which meant each one represented someone who was trying to get into the hero course. He had to prove himself as one of the best to get in. They only took a small percentage of the applicants. He wasn't just doing this for himself, but for Ochako. He had a duty to be by her side, and he wasn't about to let her down. He finally reached the right area and pushed the door open into a small preparation area that had been set up in the middle of the street. The room was essentially a steel box with no roof, but what drew his attention immediately was that he wasn't alone in the room. Reclining in one of the chairs that had been set out was a woman around his age, clearly another applicant. "Oh, I'm sorry," Izuku said quickly. "I thought this was my spot." "It probably is," she responded calmly, almost with disinterest as she pulled a pair of headphones from her ears. "The video said we'd have a partner for this." She looked at him with purple eyes, which sat underneath short hair of a similar color. What drew Izuku's attention immediately were the two large, purple-furred rabbit ears that stuck up nearly a foot above the top of her head. They were both facing him at the moment as she studied him with half-lidded eyes. Izuku couldn't stop himself glancing down as he noticed that, while she was wearing the top of the UA uniform, she'd abstained from the bottoms. Instead, she was wearing running shorts that were only a few inches long, leaving the majority of her legs exposed. He couldn't help but notice that they were defined, with powerful muscles that would have made Nana envious. If she was as tall as Ochako, her legs might have been thicker than Ochako's. He quickly pulled his vision back up to her face, which was devoid of emotion. "What video?" She gestured at a television screen that was hanging from one of the steel walls. "It'll probably start up again now that you're here." As if it hurt her, the screen flashed to life with a triumphant fanfare. After the UA logo faded, it was replaced by a woman with long purple hair a few shades darker than his new partner's. Her blue eyes were framed by a domino mask, and her revealing costume told Izuku exactly who was on the screen. "Whoa, Genesis," he exclaimed. "She's amazing. She'd definitely be in the top 10 if she wasn't a professor here." The woman sitting in the chair smirked. "You some kind of hero nerd." Izuku thought about defending himself for a half-second before he smiled. "Yeah," she chuckled. "Right on. Welcome," Genesis proclaimed proudly with her signature playful smirk. "My name is Nimuri Kayama, but I'm more often recognized as Genesis, the creation hero. If you're seeing this, then you're standing at the precipice of your final test. However, unlike the previous steps, you won't be doing this alone. You'll be taking this test with a partner we have randomly assigned to you. If your partner has already arrived, give them a wave." Genesis gave a playful wave to emphasize her point. Izuku held up his hand in greeting to his partner, and she gave him a small wave back as they played along. One of her ears was facing the television and the other was directed at him. They were fascinating to watch. "The test is straightforward. You'll be tasked with getting down the street in front of you. The trick is that it will be filled with robotic villains who don't want you to do that. Defeat them and make it to the end in one piece. This isn't a competition. You are partners, not opponents. Hit the button on the wall when you're ready to begin. Do your best and good luck." The screen winked off and Izuku turned to face his partner properly. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. Pleasure to meet you." She nodded her head up once. "Kaiu Kajiru." Izuku walked over to a portable table that had been set up on the far side of the chamber and set his briefcase on it before beginning to enter the security code. With his back turned, Kaiuka took a moment to look him over. He was definitely built, which was a good sign. She didn't want to be partnered with a wimp. Kaiuka couldn't help but trace her eyes over his back, his exposed forearms, and the way those pants fit around his thick core and his firm butt. She felt a heat begin to grow in her core, which caused her to grumble in frustration. Her ears laid flat toward her back as she quickly tried to distract herself. "You all right?" Izuku asked in concern as he turned around. "Fine," she responded curtly. He nodded and opened up his case, pulling out the belt and putting it on. Kayuka's ears flipped back up and leaned toward him as she noticed what looked like holsters hanging from it, but that couldn't be right. He pulled out a pair of straps that went over his shoulders and hooked to his belt and around his chest. One had a few pouches on it, but the other appeared to have another holster. Izuku reached back into the case and picked up one of the 9mm pistols and began to inspect it, but was interrupted as Kayuka jumped out of her chair. "Is that a fucking gun?" she asked accusingly. Izuku was honestly expecting that reaction. He looked down at her sheepishly, noting that she was about 3 inches shorter than him, as long as you didn't count her ears. "Yeah, my quirk lets me control bullets, so I kinda have to use a gun." "You're fucking with me," she said flatly. "I'm not, I promise," he replied in earnest. She glared at him but turned away and decided to distract herself with stretching. Izuku felt bad, but there wasn't anything he could do. As she turned away, he noticed that the reason she was wearing shorts was because they evidently had a hole in them where a fluffy, purple rabbit tail stuck out. He marveled at it for a moment as she began to stretch, but was then distracted by what was surrounding the tail. Kayuka had a butt that you might expect someone who had done 1,000 squats a day for half of her life to have, and Izuku quickly turned back to his preparations before he spent the rest of the day staring. He inspected both of his 9mm pistols and loaded them after he was satisfied. He put one in the holster on each hip and then loaded his 2 spare magazines into the pouches on his right shoulder strap so they hung against his ribs. Once that was settled, he turned to his final weapon. A smile grew on Izuku's face as he picked up the pistol. Sleek, beautiful, and brand new, his father had fallen in love with it when he had spent a few years in America. It was the newest model of a true classic, the Colt 1911. The pistol was originally designed over 3 centuries ago, but it was still as popular as ever. It had been updated with all of the new technology and techniques, but the core design had remained unchanged. His father had bought it for his 19th birthday a few weeks ago, and it had felt like a dream in his hands. Izuku loaded the one magazine into the pistol and tucked it into the holster under his left arm. "I'm ready when you are, Jiru." Ochako opened the door and stepped into her designated testing area. To her surprise, she wasn't the only one there. A black-haired woman rose from her seat as the door shut. "Listen up, partner, She stopped as she pulled herself to her full height and didn't have to look down or across at Ochako, but up. Her black eyes narrowed slightly as she slowly and very obviously took a few moments to look over Ochako's body, from her muscles, to her chest, to her face. Ochako felt a little weird under her piercing gaze, but she couldn't help but give this woman a once-over in return. Her black hair was tied back in a spiraled ponytail with a single lock hanging down over her face, and those piercing black eyes were decorated with luxurious, long eyelashes that appeared to be smoking slightly at the tip. Beyond her face, Ochako could tell why the woman had frozen. She was only about an inch shorter than Ochako, and the similarities didn't end there. Just like Ochako, she was built well and covered in muscle, from her toned arms, to her powerful core, to her impressive thighs. Beyond her chest, which was pushing out her uniform further than Ochako's, and the inch or so of height Ochako had on her, the differences were barely worth mentioning. The woman looked almost offended that she had to look up at her, but Ochako broke the silence. Partner, I'm not in the wrong place." The woman's cool, appraising gaze rested on her for a few moments before she spoke. "No, UA has assigned us each a partner for this test. Apparently, you are mine." "Oh," Ochako exclaimed. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Ochako Uraraka, Momo Yaoyorozu," she replied properly. "Yaoyorozu, I know that name," Ochako noted, rubbing her chin. "Wait, your parents are pros." Momo's expression turned prideful. "Correct. I won't have to explain why I won't need your help. You may stay back here or behind me, I care not which." Ochako recoiled a little. "Whoa, what? I thought you just said we're partners." "I don't care what Yue says. I don't need help," she declared firmly. "This is my test, too," Ochako retorted as a fire began to burn inside of her. "I'm not going to stand back and watch." The faint smoldering on the tips of her eyelashes grew more intense as her eyes locked onto Ochako's. "Then you will stay out of my way." Ochako straightened herself up and put her shoulders back as she took a step toward Momo. "How about you stay out of mine?" The smoke flashed into a fire that grew into a domino mask of flames as she returned the challenging step forward. Fire began to smoke from the tip of her ponytail as she glared up into Ochako's eyes with a ferocity that made the literal flames pale in comparison. Ochako couldn't tell if it was a reflection from the fiery mask around them or not, but Momo's eyes themselves seemed to be smoldering with a faint orange glow. "Don't cry when you get stepped on." Ochako huffed and tossed her bag to the side, which caused Momo to glance over. "Do you have any preparations to make before we begin?" "No," she replied, suspicious of the seeming cordiality. "Good," Momo said simply before walking over and slamming her fist down on a button. The wall fell down, revealing a street full of menacing-looking robots that quickly fixed their gazes on the women. It had taken about 3 seconds for Kayuka to jump forward and separate one of the robots from its head with a single kick. Izuku blinked in amazement as she carried her momentum through and crushed the solid steel on the main body of the faux villain with a knee. Before it had even hit the ground, she was running toward the next one. She's already incredible, Izuku thought to himself. She's getting into UA for sure. Gotta make sure I am, too. He moved toward the wreckage of the first robot and began to quickly inspect it for a weak point. Kyoika kicked the arms off of the second bot before a third kick separated its head from its body. With only a wheel to stand on, it fell down and powered off. It can't be that simple, can it? He wondered aloud. This does look important, though. Hey, you gotta carry your weight. Kyoika shouted back at Izuku, who was crouched down by the first robot she defeated. I've already got two. Izuku stood up and pulled out his pistol. He took aim and fired a shot, which caused Kyoika's ears to twitch in annoyance. The bullet smashed straight into the single red eye on a robot's head, causing it to spark, shudder, and collapse to the ground. With a smirk, Izuku pulled the trigger 2 more times and took out 2 more robots. I've got 3, he called back. Izuku felt a little caught up in the moment and wasn't really thinking when he continued. Come on, keep up. Kyoika's ears folded back as she surged forward toward a robot that had just come around the corner. Now it was on. Look at these two, Nezu said with a delighted purr. He was sitting in the darkened observation room with the other evaluators watching the tests unfold in front of him on numerous monitors. His tail flitted back and forth excitedly as he brought the 2 camera feeds to the front. Nana, that is your successor, is it not? It is, she answered nervously. She knew Nezu was very aware of who Ochako was, so she didn't know why he was asking. And that is the Aorazu scion, Nezu continued. They're doing quite well. You're going to make it harder on them, aren't you? Shouta asked flatly. Nezu ignored the black-haired man. And then this is the young man you petitioned me about. He is, Nana confirmed. Nezu had agreed to allow Izuku to carry his guns and far too easily at the time, and she had been wary ever since. I look forward to seeing how they handle this, Nezu said with undeniable excitement as he pressed a few buttons on his keyboard. Ochako's fist punched clean through the chest plate of one of the robots with little resistance. She grabbed a handful of wire and components and yanked them out in a shower of sparks as the robot collapsed to the ground. That was her 10th robot by her count, but she didn't know how many Momo had downed. Ochako wasn't sure if they were supposed to be competing, but they sure as hell were doing just that. There was no way she was going to let her beat her, no matter who she had as parents. Ochako began to gather power in her arm with air cannon and pointed it at another robot that was rolling toward her. For having arm-mounted guns, they sure weren't programmed to use them very often. As Ochako leveled her arm at it to blow it back into a building, a massive gout of flame engulfed it and caused her to shield her eyes. The flames cleared and revealed a half-melted pile of slag where the robot used to be. Was Momo showing off, or were her flames just that hot? Ochako didn't know, but she wasn't going to take that lying down. She looked over at Momo, who delivered a flame-empowered fist to another robot and then aimed another fire blast at a robot between the women. As the flames shot from her arm, Ochako let loose with her air cannon, blowing the flames away harmlessly. Momo shot Ochako a dirty look as the latter hurled a chunk of robot toward the other and smashed it into pieces. The partners began to run down the street together in a flurry, each of them destroying bot after bot. A part of Ochako noted that this seemed like more of a test of raw power than any sort of inherent heroic ability, but the rest of her was focused on competing with Momo. It was thrilling, in a way, to think that less than 2 years ago, she was quirkless, and now she was standing toe-to-toe with someone of this caliber. Ochako used air cannon to push one of the robots into another, then shoulder tackled them, destroying both with a single blow as Momo melted another few robots into scrap. As they prepared to charge forward again, the ground began to shake, and new robots began to pour from the alleyways around them. These looked different than the others. They were larger and rested on 4 legs instead of 1. The main body had a long-necked head sticking out of it and a scorpion tail looming behind. A red glow began to emanate from the tail of the robots, and the women barely dodged out of the way before lasers began to fire at where they were standing. Ochako and Momo shared a look before they jumped back into action. Izuku hid behind a pile of robots that Kyoika had destroyed as he changed his magazine out. These new robots definitely looked tougher than the last, but he still had plenty of ammunition. He poked his head above the cover and took a shot at the head of the robot, piercing and shattering the red light with a single round. It staggered a little bit, but continued to move, and as the other 3 eyes turned toward him, he pulled the trigger 3 more times at a controlled speed. With the 4th eye smashed and the electronics behind it filled with bullet, the machine seized up and powered down. Kyoika's method of dealing with the robots seemed to be just as effective against these. She just had to try a little harder. Her kicks still bent steel like paper, which impressed Izuku to no end. Honestly, her legs might have even been stronger than Ochako's. However, these robots were more willing to fire their weapons than the previous group, and Kyoika found herself exposed in melee. As she smashed another robot, Izuku saw one behind it charging up its laser at her. Kayuka noticed it too late, but before it could fire, she heard 4 rapid-fire shots ring out. Izuku's wrist stung a little and his quirk felt strained from that little trick. But as the shots hit home at nearly the same time and the charging laser backfired, he smiled to himself. The robot's tail exploded as the rest of it collapsed to the ground. Kayuka's vision snapped over to him as he waved from behind cover. He took a moment to rest his wrist in his quirk, but he heard a noise from behind him that caused him to whip around. As he saw a robot bearing down on him from seemingly nowhere, Kayuka streaked overhead with her foot extended. She crushed the body of the machine in a single blow as Izuku slid down onto the ground in shock. Kayuka dismounted with a small hop that made her land right in front of him. Her feet were on the outside of his legs and her hands were on either side of his head as she crouched down and stared at him. Her ears were tilted forward, as if giving him their full attention, and Izuku was desperately trying to keep from glancing down at her very healthy chest that was inches from his face. Or even, she remarked. There was a faint blush on her face that he surmised was from the physical exertion rather than anything else. Of course, partner, Izuku replied with a small smile. Kayuka's face grew more flush, but she jumped away before he could notice, she hoped. With that distraction over, she got back into the fight. More shots fired off from Izuku's pistol as she continued to jump from robot to robot, crushing each one with relative ease. Despite their nominal competition, they had settled into a sort of system. Izuku made an effort to take out the ones further away from her so she was at less risk from their weapons, while she handled the front line. Things seemed to be going well, and it only took them a few minutes to clean out the rest of the second wave. Izuku jogged up to meet with Kayuka with a smile on his face. "You're amazing." "Thanks," she said with a bit of a huff. "You're not bad with those. You sure it's a quirk and you're not just a good shot?" He nodded. "No amount of skill can make a bullet curve." "Not like I can." "So are we done?" she asked, looking around. As if waiting for her to say something, the ground began to shake again. There was a great storm of rubble and dust kicked up into the air as 2 buildings seemed to burst from within. 2 great lumbering monstrosities that looked like tanks with rocket pods mounted on the side rolled out into the middle of the street and park. Izuku and Kayuka ducked behind a robot carcass as they tried to think. They were bigger than the rest and those rocket pods didn't look friendly. Kayuka stood up tentatively to see if she could get close to one, but both of them turned on her and began to beep menacingly until she ducked back down. "Crap," she hissed. "Do you think you can take one of them out so I can get at the other?" 2 might be too much. Izuku nodded and peered through the scrap metal they were hiding behind. Kayuka had sure done a number on it. "Can't get a good angle, but that's not a problem," he told her. Izuku aimed his gun up and toward the beast while still staying behind cover, then peered through the small holes at his mark. Kayuka raised an eyebrow as she saw him aim nowhere near the robot. But when he pulled the trigger, which still bothered her enhanced hearing, she was surprised to see sparks fly off the machine. "I guess you really can curve them," she admitted. He half smiled at her. "Yeah, but the problem is that the glass on that eye was too much for these rounds. So you've got nothing," she hissed. "No, that's why I brought this," he replied as he holstered his pistol and pulled out his 1911. "Higher caliber, more power, and FMJ. These are specially designed to punch through things. You'd be surprised how far bullet technology has come in the past few centuries." "I don't really know what that means, but more power sounds like what we need," she said forcefully. "Give it a show fuck. Go for it, I mean." He laughed kindly as her ears flattened against her head. Izuku took aim and fired again. He grit his teeth as he pulled the bullet down to its target. The higher mass and power meant that it was more of a strain on his already weary quirk. With a crack, the round struck gold, but it didn't penetrate. The glass was shattered but holding together, so Izuku put another shot into it. This one broke through and destroyed the components behind the eye. 2 shots each. "Means I won't be much help with the other." "That's fine, I'll handle it," she replied. "Just take this one out so I only have 1 set of rockets trained on me." He nodded and carefully fired 4 more shots. As the last one found its mark, the robot shuddered and slumped down. Kayuka jumped over the cover and began to charge at the other machine. It trained its rockets on her and began to beep angrily. Izuku saw one rack and begin to fire, but Kayuka dodged out of the way. The shockwave rocked her balance and she stumbled as another one began to fire at her. "Jiru," Izuku shouted as he stood up and planted his feet. Time seemed to slow down as he focused on the rocket that was beginning to fire at her. As soon as the ignition began, he pulled the trigger. The missile didn't even make it out of the pod before the jacketed bullet slammed into the explosive head of the rocket and detonated it, shattering the rest of the pod and badly jarring the robot. Kayuka regained her footing and was on the machine before it could recover. With a single kick, she detached the other rocket pod. Then she brought her heel down on its hardened head, sundering it with a horrifying metallic groan. Izuku cheered as it sparked and collapsed. Ochako and Momo both stomped toward each other as the pair of massive tank-like robots crumbled into pieces or dissolved into scrap. They had hardly noticed that the final bosses had arrived. and they had been destroyed as quickly as all the others. With the smoke clearing, the only thing left was each other. Unbeknownst to the other, both of their hearts were pounding in their chests as adrenaline pumped through their body. The women met at the center of the street and got in each other's faces, each glaring into the other's eyes, but neither saying anything for a moment. Neither noticed that they had begun to push their impressive chests together, or at least neither appeared to notice. They were too focused on holding their ground against the other. Momo pushed forward a little, which was matched by Ochako as their faces drew even closer until there was barely an inch between them. You have potential. Ochako cocked one of her eyebrows. You are impressive yourself. It's clear we're both getting in, Momo continued, eyes narrowing at the taller woman, so either get out of my way like I told you. Not happening, Ochako growled. Or keep this up, Momo finished. Ochako's eyebrow rose higher. I've never met a competent rival before, Momo explained, so either keep up or I'll crush you. You have no idea who you're messing with, Ochako retorted. Momo smirked. I look forward to finding out. Take care, classmate. With that, Momo turned and walked away toward the exit, not even bothering to glance back once at Ochako. She stood there for a few moments as she tried to get a good read on Momo. She was unlike just about anyone she had ever met, but also familiar. She reminded her a little bit of Bakugo, but there were also undeniable similarities to Izuku, especially with how she had gotten her competitive fire burning. Normally only Izuku was able to incense her like that. Ochako began to walk slowly back to get her bag, something she hadn't noticed until she had left, but Momo smelled nice. Izuku yelped in surprise as his back was shoved into the wall. He looked down at Kyoyuka, who was glaring up at him with an intensity in her eyes like he had angered her somehow. Her face was flush. She must have exerted herself more than he thought, but she wasn't panting at all. Her hands were against the wall at his sides and her ears were tilted forward, only inches from his face. He felt a little trapped by the shorter woman, but he didn't understand why she was just standing there. You did incredibly, he said without really thinking. You're getting into UA for sure. Kyoyuka's blush deepened as she grit her teeth. You saved my ass back there. What? He said with a bit of surprise. Yeah, I guess I did, but please don't think anything of it. It's nothing, really. It was like he was trying to make it worse for her. You better get into UA so I can pay you back. All right. He smiled weakly. Was she getting closer? Why did she smell so good? I think I've done all I can. Yeah, I did my best and that's all I can do. Kyoyuka narrowed her eyes as her hormones scrambled her thoughts. A primal part of her wanted to jump him right there, but she resisted that obnoxious impulse. Kyoyuka huffed one more time and turned around, stomping away as her ears flattened in irritation. She really hated her quirk sometimes, but at least it had gotten her into UA. Excellent, excellent, Nezu purred as he studied the smoking wreckage of dozens of formerly functional robots. Those 4 are the best we've seen today. I'd say this year's class is looking quite promising. Those 2 are going to be trouble, Sekijuru noted as he pointed at the screen where Ochako and Momo had just left. Those sorts of rivalries can be quite beneficial if handled properly, Nezu noted. I'll leave it to you and Aizawa to make sure it is. And Miss Nana, of course. Speaking of, when are you planning on revealing that you've chosen a successor? Nana squirmed uncomfortably. As late as possible. She doesn't deserve that attention. Nezu's yellow eyes fixed on her. His black fur made him otherwise invisible in the darkened room. The other students will be vying for your favor until they know. They will see it as a prize to be won. If that means they work harder in class, is that a bad thing? She asked. I'll try not to get anyone's hopes up. Nezu grinned, showing off his fangs. I look forward to your tenure here, Miss Shimura. You've both got your schedules, right? Nana asked as she looked at her 2 trainees. They were back on Dagaba for little reason other than ceremony and sentimentality. Tomorrow was the start of move-in weekend at UA, which meant this was the last day they'd be on this beach for a long time. Ochako and Izuku nodded. Nana smirked as she cocked her hip to the side. You didn't just pick the same classes, did you? No, Ochako said quickly. Shame, Nana chuckled. It would have been cute. What'd you pick? Well, we're in the 3 mandatory classes together, Izuku began. There's only one section for ethics, same for your class, and we both were able to get into the same freshman health course. With your mom, Nana teased. Izuku blushed a little. I've been looking forward to being in her class for a long time. Ochako reached over and ruffled the hair of her best friend. Me too. All right, what else? Nana prompted. We both signed up for English, but we couldn't get the same section, Ochako explained. The theater course I picked conflicted with the one he had to grab for his art course. Art, Nana repeated. I didn't know you liked art. He blushed a little and averted his gaze. I doodle sometimes. It's relaxing. Nana often thought that Ochako was a lucky woman. Izuku was adorable. She turned back to her successor before Izuku felt too awkward. I'm glad to hear you took my advice about theater. I think it'll really help. I've never done anything like it before, but you haven't led me astray yet. Ochako exclaimed with shaky faux confidence. That's the spirit, Nana said proudly, clapping Ochako on the back. Then Ochako is taking an economics class and I'm doing a basic mechanical engineering course, Izuku finished. 16 hours for each of us. Nana nodded approvingly. Not a bad schedule. Are you too excited? Of course. Ochako cheered as Izuku grinned. Nana smiled warmly, almost motherly at the two young adults that she had been training for over a year now. She would still see them most days, but not like this. She would miss them. One thing, not to take the wind out of your sails, Nana began coyly. Do you remember me mentioning that Nezu acquiesced to my request about your guns too easily? Yes, Izuku said nervously. Well, I know what the devil's bargain is now. Ochako looked at Izuku, then back at Nana. What is it? Hey, this is our last day training here, right? Nana said evasively as she clapped her hands. Let's not waste time. Izuku and Ochako looked up at their new dorm rooms. In the Hero Course dorm plaza at UA, there are 4 buildings, each 10 stories tall: Bravery Hall, Honor Hall, Perseverance Hall, and Compassion Hall. In Perseverance Hall, on the 9 floors with dorm rooms, out of the 8 rooms on the floor, despite their names being almost as far about in the alphabet as they could be, Izuku and Ochako's rooms were right next to each other. Do you think this is what Nana meant? Izuku muttered. It's just because we're partners, Ochako reasoned. They both exchanged an unconvinced look before they began to move the rest of their boxes into their rooms. The professional movers at UA had already put all of the furniture in the rooms for them, which meant all they had to do was haul up clothes and other personal belongings. Izuku set down the last of his boxes and took a look around the room. He was stunned by the size of the room. This was going to be his for the next 4 years. It was even nicer than his bedroom back home. He had his desk and bed in the room and still plenty of floor space, not to mention a full personal bathroom with a shower. The glass door opened to a balcony that overlooked the plaza outside, and he even had a small closet to hang clothes in. He excitedly unpacked his belongings, hanging posters on the wall, setting up action figures, and stowing his clothes in the dresser. Izuku was putting the final touches on his notebook collection when he heard a knock at the door. You done, Izuku? He hurried over and opened the door for Ochako, who stepped inside with a grin. Just like home, huh? You even kept your all-for-one comforter. Izuku rubbed the back of his head awkwardly and didn't notice Ochako's eyes glance down to where his shirt had lifted up slightly to reveal his abs. Yeah, I know she's officially our teacher now, but I like it. Ochako giggled. Are you gonna have a comforter with me on it when I become all-for-one? Izuku turned red. Maybe. It was supposed to be a harmless tease, but Ochako felt nervous all of a sudden and quickly changed the subject before she began blushing harder. Hey, I heard my neighbor move in. We should go say hi. Izuku was equally happy to move on. Sure, I think I heard someone on the other side of my room, too. As they left Izuku's room and he closed the door behind him, Ochako heard the door beyond hers open. To her frustration, she recognized the person who stepped out. Black eyes framed with long eyelashes with smoldering tips locked onto her face. Uraraka, glad to see you didn't get lost. You're not going to get rid of me that easily, Ochako retorted. Of course Momo was her neighbor. This must have been what Nana meant about Nezu. Momo smirked. I would hope not, or I'd have to replace you. Izuku leaned out from behind Ochako. Oh, you must be Momoye Arazu. Ochako told me about you. It's a pleasure to meet you. Ochako, Momo thought as she watched Izuku give her a formal bow. He's very well-mannered. You could learn a thing or two from him. Ochako rolled her eyes. This is Izuku Midoriya, my best friend. Momo raised an eyebrow as she looked over the man. He was much shorter than her, but he showed no signs of weakness. His shoulders were broad and his muscles were easy to see, even through his t-shirt. His face was handsome, and those eyes had an adorable charm to them. She liked the way he looked up at her. Most interestingly, he had gotten the attention of her rival. Perhaps he would be interesting to her as well, or at least useful. She tipped her head to him. It's an honor to be in a class with the child of the number 2. He continued excitedly. I hope I can learn a lot from you. Momo actually smiled a little. He was so earnest, it was a little flattering, almost endearing. Technically, children. My brother is in our class, too. Brother? Ochako repeated. You're a twin. Momo nodded. He's never been able to keep up with me. Fire beats ice, after all. Izuku's eyes widened a little. It made a lot of sense for Cataclysm's children to each have half of her quirk. At that moment, the door behind Izuku and Ochako opened up, causing them to look behind them. Izuku smiled warmly. Good to see you, Jiru. Tayuka blanched and her ears shot straight up as she heard his voice and looked over. Oh no, not only was he her neighbor, she apparently shared a hallway with 2 Amazons. 2 of the tallest, buffest, most beautiful women she had ever seen were looking at her, and she was definitely staring straight at their tits. Good shit, Tayuka. It wasn't her fault that they were at her eye level, or that they were the biggest she had ever seen. Yep, she was certain of it now. Between those two and Izuku, there was no way she was going to survive UA. Quick, play it cool. Oh, you're Kyoyuka Jiru, the brunette said as she walked toward Kyoyuka. Izuku told me about you. It's nice to finally meet you. Izuku, she thought. Kyoyuka wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed that he was already taken. Hey, I'm Ochako Uraraka, she explained. Back there is Momoye Urazu. I like your ears. Kyoyuka's ears twitched as she blushed a little. They moved forward, then tilted backward before Kyoyuka seized manual control and forced them to stay still for one. Oh, thanks. Nice to meet you. God, she was tall. And those arms and thighs she could crush. Kyoyuka shook her head by faking like she had to sneeze but then lost it. Once the initial shock was over, she was able to get a better handle on herself. Even so, this was ridiculous. Their hallway had her, Izuku, Ochako, and Momo in a line. Whoever was in charge of these room assignments was a sadist. Ochako smiled kindly as she gestured for Kyoyuka to come over and join their conversation. She obliged, standing to Izuku's side and trying to maintain her cool. Izuku hoped Kyoyuka was feeling all right. She was acting a little strange, a little like she had at the end of their exam. Maybe she was just nervous. He understood that. It was all a little overwhelming to actually be at UA as students. It wasn't too much longer when another voice interrupted their conversation. Hey, is this where all the hot people are hanging out? The four of them looked at the voice coming from behind Momo. Coming down the hallway from the other side of the dorm was a woman wearing a bright, excited smile. The first thing Izuku noticed was her skin, which was a beautiful shade of blue. The second thing he noticed was her eyes, which were a vibrant green against her solid black sclere and filled with vibrant excitement. He noted that she was around the same height as his mother, 4 inches taller than him and a good 8 shorter than Ochako, and had long, but fairly messy pink hair on her head. It was an elegant messy that gave her a casual, yet beautiful appearance. A baser part of him noted she had a toned and fit body, like a dancer or a sprinter, with powerful legs and a strong core. Her low-cut shirt showed off her chest, which was somewhere between Ochako and Kyoyuka in terms of size, and as she turned around to call back through the hallway, he got a look at her backside. 4 pairs of eyes glanced down at the newcomer's butt and each of them had the same thought. Nice. Her wide hips complemented the work that had clearly gone into crafting something that large and shapely, even if the yoga pants she was wearing were doing her favors. Hey, Kiri, get over here, she called before turning back to the group. I'm Mina Ashido. Kiri and I are on your floor. Mina had meant what she said earlier. The 4 people standing in the hallway were all gorgeous in different ways. The tall, buxom Amazon, the taller, buxom Amazon, the short bunny girl with thighs that she definitely wanted to have wrapped around her head, and the short guy who looked like he could break her in half. Oh yeah, she was going to love UA. Izuku had to look up to meet Ochako's or Momo's eyes. But he had to look up to meet eyes with the man who came around the corner. He was well over 7 feet tall, but he was far from lanky. The man was strangely, well, overweight for a hero student. His large belly bulged the loose hoodie he was wearing, and his weight hid almost all of his bone structure. He'd never seen one quite so large, but he wasn't going to judge. Instead, Izuku wondered what he always did. Maybe it has to do with his quirk. He had short black hair and friendly red eyes above his wide, toothy smile. His amicable face combined with his rotund shape made him look jolly, friend-shaped. Hey, everyone, he said boisterously. This is Ijiru Kirishima, Mina explained. What are your names? The 4 of them went around and introduced themselves, but as Izuku spoke his name, Mina rubbed her chin. Wait, Midoriya. I've seen that name recently. Momo raised an eyebrow. Yes, you're right. The health course is taught by a Dr. Midoriya. Ochako beamed proudly. Yep, Remedy is Izuku's mom. Really? Ijiru exclaimed. That's so cool. Yeah, Izuku confirmed as he blushed a little. That means you can get us the answers to the tests, right? Mina asked with a teasing grin. I don't think so, Izuku replied with an awkward chuckle. Momo's gaze fell on Izuku. He was the child of a pro hero as well. Sure, Remedy wasn't a combat hero, nor anywhere close to the top 10 by any metric, but a pro nonetheless. Her mother had been healed by Remedy more than once. Perhaps this is how he got the attention of someone like Ochako. Maybe she could use him to get to her. The 6 of them continued to talk for a few minutes before the final 2 members of their floor finished unpacking and joined them. A fit, silver-haired woman of average height with a rather repetitive name and a black-haired man wearing a bandana. Tetsu and Yosu Uwase were both nice, although the latter had a cruder way of talking. Tetsu herself seemed to hit it off fairly well with Ijiru, and it didn't take long for the group to feel less stiff, even though Momo maintained a haughty distance. Mina dragged the group downstairs so they could meet the rest of their classmates. The common room was packed, bustling with students of all shapes and sizes. Ochako and Momo were the tallest women there, but there were a few men at their height or taller, including Kirishima and a quiet man who looked like an orca whale. Mina and Ijiru wandered off almost immediately, but Momo and Kyoyuka stuck with Izuku and Ochako. It was hard to blame them. Unless you were a social butterfly like Mina, anyone would be intimidated by the uncertainty and the sheer mass of people in the room. However, despite the crowd, it didn't take long for a certain blonde to notice Ochako and Izuku. "Hey," Bakugo barked as he slid up to the pair. "What are you two doing here? How'd a pair of quirkless losers get into UA?" "We're not quirkless," Ochako responded defiantly. "We got in fair and square." Bakugo scoffed. "What, did you manifest quirks out of nowhere?" "My quirk didn't activate until I touched a gun," Izuku explained flatly. "And she was a late bloomer." "A gun?" he replied derisively. "You have a gun quirk." "Huh, it's true," Kayuka said defensively as she stepped next to Izuku. "He saved my ass with it." Bakugo looked her up and down like she had offended his ancestors. "You were saved by him? Good to know who the weaklings in class are." "Hey, who the fuck are you?" Kayuka spat back. "You're better," he replied simply as he turned and walked away. "What a fucking dick," Kayuka growled. "Sorry about that," Izuku said with a sigh. "He's from our old school. He's always been like that." Momo watched Bakugo leave with unconcealed disdain. If he ever spoke to her like that, he'd regret it. She would enjoy taking him down a peg, but for now, she had other questions. "He thought you were quirkless?" Momo asked pointedly from Achako's side. Achako felt herself begin to sweat a little. "Yeah, Izuku didn't touch a gun until a bit over a year ago, so he thought he was quirkless. Mine didn't manifest until about the same time." "Weird, huh?" Momo looked at Achako for a few moments before she waved her hand dismissively. "Yes, weird." Achako wasn't quite sure why Momo and Kayuka were continuing to hang around her and Izuku, but she wasn't going to ask her. They spent the next hour going around and talking to classmates, meeting them and learning names. Some of the highlights included a short woman seemingly made out of wood who Achako hit it off with fairly easily, and a very short woman who made eyes at Izuku that Achako did not appreciate. By the end, Achako was feeling a little socially worn out, even with how outgoing she normally felt. The front doors of the dorm opened up as two men walked in, causing the rather loud common room to quiet down rapidly. Izuku recognized them instantly and began to bubble excitedly to Achako. "That's Mindjack and Slate," he whispered. "I know," she replied happily. "Do you think we can get their autographs?" "Oh, I hope." Momo and Kayuka exchanged a glance as the two almost vibrated with excitement. Mindjack, the tired-looking black-haired man with a strange scarf around his neck, leaned over to a small panel by the wall. He scanned his fingerprint against it and began to speak. "Any of you who are still lurking upstairs, get down here right now. You have 1 minute." The students in the common room looked at each other with trepidation as the last few stragglers quickly came down the stairs, including a purple-haired man who looked about as tired as Mindjack, and a man who looked like he was actually made out of concrete. Slate quickly scanned over the room and nodded to Mindjack. "I think that's all of them." "Great," he replied flatly before turning to the rest of the room and speaking louder. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Aizawa and this is Dr. Kan. We're your class supervisors for the next 4 years. We're your coaches, advisors, counselors, and more, so get used to us." Compared to Aizawa, Kan was taller, buffer, and healthier looking, even though he seemed to be older. He had short, spiky white hair and his teeth all appeared to be razor sharp for some reason. What Aizawa is trying to say is welcome. You 42 students were selected out of tens of thousands of applicants to come here to UA and become the best of the best. We're looking forward to helping you all grow into the best heroes you can be. That being said, don't expect it to be a walk in the park. The entrance exam was the easy part. Now the real challenge begins. Achako and Izuku both looked at each other and nodded confidently. "Tomorrow, your classes begin," Aizawa droned on. "Take them seriously. Screw around and you'll get kicked out. Won't be the first time. Most weeks, you'll have 2 hours of practice with us every evening. This first week, it will only be Tuesday and Thursday. If you need to talk to us outside of practice, our office hours are on your course packet and so is our email." Kan shook his head at Aizawa. "We'd like to introduce your Ra to you as well." A short, pink-haired woman stepped into the doorway and stood next to the professors. She had a pair of thick, round glasses on and looked rather demure, but she smiled warmly and waved to the students. "This is Kazuo Hanyama," Kan explained. "She's a junior in the management course and she'll be your resident assistant for at least this semester. If you have issues with someone or something in the dorm, talk to her first. If there are no questions." Aizawa led as he looked around the room for a few moments. "Good. We'll see you all Tuesday. And yes, welcome to UA." His tired scowl turned into an almost cruel grin. "I hope you're ready to work." Izuku woke up to his alarm the next morning and sat upright nearly instantly. Today was his first day at UA. He grabbed his phone from his bedside table and triple-checked his schedule for the day. English, then art, then mechanics 101. Well, no time to waste. Izuku rolled out of bed and freshened up. He still couldn't believe that he got his own personal bathroom before beginning to get dressed. Unlike high schools, UA had a dress code, but no uniform. students were free to wear basically anything, as long as it wasn't dirty and as long as it was more formal than a t-shirt and gym shorts. The impression he got from his classmates peppering Heinyama with questions. The code wasn't often enforced, but people looked at you funny if you flaunted it. He put on a pair of nice jeans and a well-fitting polo that felt a little tighter than it had when he had bought it. Maybe it had shrunk in the wash. Regardless, he slipped on his favorite pair of red sneakers and pulled on his backpack before checking his phone to see if Ochako was ready yet. Seeing that she was, he left his room and knocked on her door. Ochako opened it with a wide, excited smile as she looked down at her best friend. The woman was wearing a long-sleeve button-up with the sleeves rolled up above her elbow that was tucked into her high-waisted jeans, all above the simple flats she wore on her feet. "This is really happening, huh?" she asked. He grinned. "Yeah, really." The two walked down the stairs together and out of their dorm. Izuku pulled up the map of UA on his phone and they navigated to one of the dining halls, where they waited in line and got a hearty breakfast. They found an empty table and sat down opposite of each other to eat together like they had for most days since they could remember. "You know, something I've noticed," Izuku began as they ate. "For years, you always stood while we ate. Now, you stopped. Why?" Ochako began to sweat a little. "Oh, you noticed that?" He shrugged. "I just figured it was something you did. I'm just curious." "Oh, well, Ochako trailed off before she reminded herself that she was supposed to be totally honest with the man. He was her partner. "I always enjoyed feeling taller than you. Now that I actually am, I don't need to pretend anymore, I guess." Oh. Izuku blinked up at her a few times before blushing softly. Both of them remembered their confessions back on the beach all those months ago. However, they both also remembered that they had to stay focused. UA wasn't going to be easy, and they couldn't risk distracting themselves. "Right." Ochako averted her gaze from Izuku before her mind went any further down that path and onto the people who had just entered the hall. Several of their floormates were walking in, namely Momo, Kyoyuka, and Mina. The shortest woman was wearing a loose top and yoga pants, which made sense to Ochako. It had to be a nightmare getting pants customized for both that adorable fluffy tail and those massive, powerful thighs of hers. Something stretchy and form-fitting was practical and it made her look good. Mina was, wow, eye-catching. Her low-cut blouse and shorts looked like they should clash horribly, but somehow she made it work. Maybe it was her blue skin. She had an undeniable natural beauty to her that she couldn't help but admire. As distracting as Mina was, it was the black-haired woman that drew Ochako's eye the most. Momo was wearing a low-cut shirt and definitely had a push-up bra underneath. Combined with her tight jeans and her black knee-high boots with 2-inch heels, it was clear that she knew what she was doing. Every piece of clothing she wore was designed to emphasize and complement her luxurious curves and powerful body. Judging by her confident smile, Momo felt as sexy as she looked. Mina caught Ochako's eye and waved, which she and Izuku returned. The three women grabbed their food and sat down with them at their table. Mina sat down next to Ochako, while Momo took her place next to Izuku. For some reason, Momo made eye contact with Ochako while she did it. Ochako felt a strange sensation in her chest again, and she didn't like it. What was Momo trying to do? Mina started the conversation in a way that none of the others were expecting. "So, you two are dating, right? What with the personal names and such?" Izuku nearly choked on his food and Ochako was glad she hadn't started to take a drink yet. "And no, we're not," Izuku answered quickly. "Yep, nope, totally single," Ochako followed with an awkward chuckle. Mina was a shrewd woman, and she noticed the subtle glance that Izuku and Ochako shared, especially with how it lingered for a moment more than necessary. Oh ho, this could be fun. They clearly had something between them and all she had to do was find out how to push them together. On the other hand, Kyoyuka swore internally. He was single. Her ears dropped a little in annoyance before she made them stand back up. Well, maybe if he wasn't dating anyone, Kyoyuka could. No, she couldn't indulge that. She barely knew the guy, just because he was hot and cute. And, no, stop. Momo reached into her bag for nothing, accidentally brushing Izuku's arm with one of her pushed-up breasts as she did so. Izuku quickly pulled his arm in and apologized, but she dismissed him graciously. "You were there first, Midoriya, it's fine." The way he blushed made her smile grow wider. He was so polite, and she saw how much it bothered Ochako. Yes, there was clearly something there, and if she could stoke her rival's fire, all the better for her. Jealousy was a powerful motivator. "What class do you all have first?" Kyoyuka asked, hoping to move the conversation away from relationships or anyone's tits. "English," Izuku answered. "Really?" Momo said slowly. "Me as well." Fuck, thought Kyoyuka. "Yeah, I have English first, too. I guess we can walk together." Momo's eyes turned to Ochako again. "What about you?" Ochako pursed her lips a little before speaking. "I have theater first." Mina gasped. "Me too. Don't worry, you're Raka." Momo cooed as she reached out and put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "We'll take care of him when you're not there." Her hand got blown off his shoulder as Ochako flicked a jet of air at her arm. Izuku doesn't need anybody to take care of him. Is there something going on? Izuku asked, looking between the two women. Just some friendly teasing, Momo replied with a practiced smile. But look at the time. We need to get going if we're going to get to class on time. I don't think Dr. Aizawa would approve of us being late on the first day. Oh, you're right, Izuku exclaimed as he checked his phone. The five of them stood up, Momo taking a moment to look at Ochako again, who had to look up at her now with her heels. There was something powerful about being taller than someone, and Momo enjoyed that something. For one last dig before they departed, she accidentally walked chest first into Izuku, whose face was at the perfect height. Izuku was checking his backpack and making sure he had everything ready before his world was suddenly very soft and very dark. He jumped back and immediately threw himself into an apologetic bow. Monsieur Urazu, I didn't mean. Midoriya, it's fine, it's not your fault, Momo said graciously. I'm so clumsy this morning, you must forgive me. Momo didn't look at Ochako as they left for their classes, but she could feel the death glare. She didn't dare push any further or she might actually cause a scene. And besides, she had definitely succeeded in her goal. When they met for their first training tomorrow, Ochako would be more than ready to clash with her. Then they would find out who was the top dog. English class was weird. About as soon as they arrived, Momo and Kyoika seemed to lose interest in him. Maybe they were just diligent students, which he respected, but it still felt weird. Momo barely said a word to him, although she still had him sit next to her, and Kyoika almost seemed to be avoiding him as she sat on the far side of Momo. It was syllabus day, so there wasn't much of interest with the class itself beyond the teacher. Dr. Grace Montgomery was better known as her hero name, Stampede. The American had a cowboy aesthetic and a face mask that she never took off, but she was still kind and personable, even with her anachronisms. After class, Izuku had gone up to her and asked for an autograph, which she provided and even let him keep one of the horns she grew out of her head and fired at enemies as a souvenir. Momo and Kyoika had both watched Izuku bubble at the professor and laughed at his excitement when Stampede let him keep the horn she had fired off earlier as a demonstration. There was something undeniably endearing about his eagerness, but that was neither here nor there. Izuku said goodbye to the two women as he headed to his art class. He wondered if any of the other hero students would be there. Maybe he'd know someone. He arrived at the classroom in the art building after about a 15-minute walk. It was a modest studio, with 5 rows of 3 tables that sat 2 people each filling most of the space and a desk at the front for the professor. To his surprise, most of the seats were already full. The only open seat was in the back corner, but luckily he recognized the woman sitting there. She was dressed in nearly all black, from the thin black sweater she wore over the white collared shirt underneath, to her black pleated skirt, to her black shoes and the black thigh-high tights she wore. Honestly, her outfit looked far too warm for a late August day, but he wasn't the fashion police. And besides, the hormonal teenager in him wasn't complaining about how her shirt complemented her already impressive bust. Truth be told, they looked only a little smaller than Ochako and Momo's, and since the woman was 2 inches shorter than him instead of a foot taller, they seemed even larger. The way her skirt emphasized her hips and slimmed her waist gave her an incredibly curvy silhouette, but he wasn't here to be horny. Izuku sat down and tried to be polite. You're Kodai, right? Yui Kodai. The woman slowly turned her head to him and nodded. Midoriya. Her skin was pale naturally, but it seemed like her face was even lighter, or it may have just been the contrast from her black lipstick, eyeshadow, and mascara. Her short black hair framed her face, and all of it combined made her striking blue eyes appear as mesmerizing as they were beautiful. He smiled. She hadn't seemed very talkative the previous day when they had been introduced, but she didn't seem mean, just quiet. The professor arrived a few minutes later, sashaying into the room in a well-fit business suit and skirt. Dr. Nimuri Kayama, better known as Genesis, gave a disarming and alluring smile as she welcomed them to their first day of class. Before we get into the droll business of the syllabus, she began with a sigh, I'd like to ask you all a question. Why did you take this class? Why, out of all of the interesting and fascinating subjects available to you here at UA, did you pick this elective? What drew you to my class? No pun intended. The students looked at each other awkwardly as nobody wanted to be the first person to speak, so eventually Genesis had to call on someone. She consulted a data pad before pointing at the tall redhead at the front of the room. Can do, right. What do you say? The green-eyed woman met Kayama's gaze and spoke confidently. I've always loved drawing, but I've never learned how to draw formally. I want to get better because making art means a lot to me. Kayama smiled. A good answer. Passion is essential for what we do here. Anyone else? How about you, Midoriya? Izuku flinched a little. He wasn't surprised that Kayama's predatory smile fell on him. He was one of the few people who she might recognize, thanks to his mother. Well, art has always been a hobby of mine. I find it relaxing and fulfilling, but I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of what I can make. Another good answer, Kayama hummed approvingly. Art is about self-expression even more so than it is about technique. To his surprise, he heard the woman next to him speak softly, so softly that only he could hear. It's vital for our ability to express not just how we feel, but how we see the world and ourselves in the world. He nodded. It's not inherently performative, but rather deeply personal. It's almost spiritual, in a way. Yui's eyes widened slightly before she nodded and gave him the smallest hint of a smile. For some reason, it filled him with warmth. It's good you understand that. Kayama called on a few more students before she settled into discussing the syllabus and the semester at large. There were several different techniques and art forms they would cover, spending enough time on each for the students to experience them, but moving on before they got too deep. There was simply too much to cover for one semester. For the rest of the 50-minute class, Yui didn't say a single word, even as Izuku muttered under his breath or made comments about what Genesis was saying. He could tell she wasn't ignoring him, but listening silently, so it didn't feel awkward. It felt comfortable, truth be told. However, it seemed that all things came to an end, including the silence. As Kayama dismissed them until Wednesday and the two stood up, she looked up at him and spoke. "You're hot." She turned and left without a word or even waving goodbye. Izuku himself was frozen like an old computer for a few moments as he processed the compliment out of left field. He watched the black-haired woman leave with a strange feeling in his chest. Nobody but Ochako had ever complimented him like that. However, on the subject of Ochako, he shook his head and hurried out of the room. She should be getting out of class shortly too, and they had plans to meet up and get lunch later. After lunch, Izuku hurried to his final class for the day. It was always nice to spend time with Ochako, even after seeing her nearly every day for his entire life. He just never got tired of her. That was just one of the countless reasons why she was his best friend. For some reason, Ochako had insisted on them taking their lunch to go and eating out in one of the remote parks that dotted UAS campus. Izuku didn't complain, and in fact he complimented her idea, as the park was beautiful. It was nice to spend a quiet midday meal with her, relaxing under a tree and talking about their classes. Ochako had asked a few questions specifically about Momo for some reason, but in the end, she seemed more interested in the art class. Izuku equally asked her about the theater class, which she seemed excited about, including what appeared to be a blooming friendship with Mina. Izuku liked that. Ochako deserved more friends. The problem with spending time with his best friend is that he often lost track of time, which is why he was now jogging to the support building. Izuku arrived at the classroom with only seconds to spare. He opened the door and stepped inside the back of a workshop that was set up fairly closely to how the art classroom was set up, albeit with far more power tools and heavy equipment around the walls. The seat at the back, the one closest to him, was empty, so he sat down quietly, hoping to cause as little disruption as possible. The professor was a tall man with red hair and mask covering everything below his eyes. More distinctly were the 6 arms that stuck out of the side of his torso, 3 on each side and webbed together before the elbows. The pro-hero Sentimane introduced himself as Dr. Higari Majima, but added, "I'm pretty sure all of you know that." Before he began, he paused and looked over the students. "We're missing one." As if on cue, the door behind Izuku flew open and made him jump nearly a foot in the air. "Sorry I'm late," declared a loud, boisterous voice. Izuku whipped around and his eyes went wide. Standing in the doorway was a tall, pink-haired woman who was grinning widely. Her yellow eyes almost appeared manic. But what drew his eyes more is that while she was holding the door open with one hand and her backpack in another, she still had 2 more hands to spare. The woman stood just about exactly 6 feet tall by Izuku's estimate, but her 4 arms made her feel larger than that. Each of them was toned and quite muscular, reminiscent of Ochako and Momo, and the similarities didn't stop there. Due in part to, he assumed, her quirk affecting her biology as well as her strength, her shoulders as well as her core, and the rest of her appeared fit and strong, although not to the same level as Ochako or Momo. He was reminded of Hanyama's comment about the dress code not being enforced too often as he looked at this woman. Her attire consisted of a set of red goggles and a black tank top that was doing its best to cover her prodigious chest. Izuku wondered what was with Yue and him being surrounded by women like this. He surmised that it was a result of her quirk making her torso a little larger than most, but her chest was comparable to Yui's, albeit on a much larger body. Below that, she had a jacket of sorts tied by the sleeves around her waist, which further emphasized her wide hips. But all of that combined with her baggy cargo pants meant she was nowhere close to being dress code compliant. "How nice of you to join us, Miss Hatsum," Sentimane said with a sigh. "Take a seat so we can begin." She did a quick scan of the room and then sat down in the only open seat, right next to Izuku. "Like I said," Majima continued, "most of you recognize me. We met yesterday, in case you forgot." However, there is one person here who is a new face. Sentimane's eyes fell on Izuku, who suddenly felt small, especially next to the four-armed woman. Normally, hero students don't take this course. Basic gear maintenance is covered in your heroics classes. May I ask why you're here, Mr. Midoriya? Every other pair of eyes in the room shifted onto Izuku, who now felt even smaller. Well, I have to admit, it's because of my quirk, Izuku began. I'm entirely reliant upon my equipment to even use it, so I decided it would be important for me to have a deeper understanding of these things. He smiled nervously as he finished weakly. I see, Sentimane replied. Before he could continue, the woman next to Izuku slapped the desk enthusiastically. You're a hero student? Yes, he replied nervously, looking into her intense, yellow eyes. And you need gear. That means you need me. She reached out a hand to shake his, which he took. Meihatsum, pleasure to meet you. I Izuku Midoriya, he muttered in disbelief as she shook his hand vigorously. Great, meet me in the lab after class and Miss Hatsum, Majima said tersely. First of all, the development lab does not open until tomorrow. Fine, May huffed, waving one of her hands at him. Meet me in the lab tomorrow. And second, stop interrupting my class. Oh, May blinked. Right, sorry. The professor sighed as he turned back to his datapad. Izuku was reeling. He wasn't quite sure what was happening, especially as May took a moment to point to her eyes with each of her hands and then around the room. I got him first. He's mine, she muttered. He wondered if Yue might be the death of him. The walk to health class was interesting. Ochako and Momo seemed more distracted with each other than anything else, and everyone seemed to be giving the three of them a wide berth. Izuku was just excited to finally be in a class taught by his mother and didn't really pay attention to the tense energy crackling between the two taller women. Truth be told, he didn't really know why Momo was hanging around them. She didn't seem like a particularly friendly person, but he didn't mind her presence. Deep down, he thought she might be lonely. Few people were as lucky as him and came into UA with their best friend. Momo was around people she didn't know, participating in the most strenuous hero course in the nation. It was understandable that she latched onto people she knew, and Izuku was trying to be as welcoming as possible. Ochako didn't seem as cordial, which struck him as strange. She was the more outgoing of the pair, and her chipper attitude was hard to knock, but around Momo, she just seemed to always be on edge. Or maybe it was just UA affecting her, too. Not only did she have the same pressures as Momo, she also had the weight of being the next all-for-one to bear. Izuku noted that, as her partner, it was his job to help her with that. He made a mental note to make some time for her after practice tonight to help her distress. They arrived at the class and saw dozens of students streaming into the 500-seat lecture hall. As it was a university-wide mandated course, Inko taught every freshman at one point or another, so it wasn't surprising. Izuku saw a mostly empty row of seats in the rightmost section and made his way over with the women in tow. He sat down and began to pull out his notebook with an excited smile. He barely noticed when Momo sat down next to him, but Ochako did. Izuku, come over here, she directed, pointing at the seat to Momo's left. He didn't even really think about it, as his mind was too focused on the class ahead of him, so he simply stood up, scooted around Momo's long, muscular legs, and sat down. Ochako took her seat on his left as he made sure his pen was working. Momo shot a pointed look over his head at Ochako, who met her gaze with a confident smirk. As Inko walked in, a silence gradually fell over the lecture hall. Izuku was nearly vibrating out of his chair as she introduced herself as Dr. Inko Midoriya, and his face split into that huge grin of his when her eyes paused over him and she smiled back. Momo watched Izuku with covert curiosity, but what intrigued her more was Ochako, who was smiling proudly at the man. It was a warm, genuine smile and her eyes were filled with affection, even though Izuku wasn't looking at her. Ochako was sincerely proud and happy for him, which Momo noted. It was a little heartwarming, and she felt a small pang of guilt for how she had been antagonizing her, but no, she had to stick to her guns. Ochako was her best chance at getting stronger, and that's what she came to UA to do. However, she also came to UA to learn, and as the professor began to speak, Momo turned her full attention onto her. Later, after class was over and Izuku had gotten a hug from his mother, the three of them were walking out of the lecture hall together. I'll see you at heroics class, Uraraka, Momo said with a smug grin as she gave her a single, almost sarcastic wave. And you too, Midoriya. Ochako took exception to the sultry wink Momo shot at Izuku before she turned and walked away in a different direction. She huffed before looking down at her best friend. Something about just being around him made her worries melt away, so she was smiling again before too long. We have time to kill before Nana's class. Want to hang out? Izuku grimaced. Actually, someone from my engineering class asked for me to come by the design studio today. It would be rude to stand her up. Ochako's heart sank a little, but she quickly collected herself and dismissed her selfish feeling. Oh, that's great. What are you going to be doing? No clue, he answered with a shrug. She found out I was a hero student and told me that I needed gear and to come by the lab. I guess she wants to design gear for me, but it seems really early for that. I guess you do need gear, Ochako said with a smirk. It could be a good opportunity for you. Not all of us are able to lift fridges over our heads, Izuku jabbed back playfully. And yeah, for sure, getting my foot in the door early. What's she like? Ochako asked innocuously. Energetic, Izuku replied cautiously, but also brilliant. She was taking notes with 2 hands and tinkering on something with the others, and… Wait, hold on, Ochako interrupted. She has 4 arms, Izuku explained before continuing. Sentimane called on her to make sure she was paying attention, and she answered his question without even looking up. 4 arms might mean she's better at multitasking than the average person, Ochako reasoned. Her years of writing those notebooks and theorizing with Izuku weren't just for show. I thought the same thing, he agreed with a nod. But anyway, gotta run. Catch you later, Ochako. Bye. Ochako waved after him. She sighed, feeling a lot more down with him gone. Maybe Mina or Tsuyu were free. She had hit it off pretty well with them so far. Izuku made his way to the support building and followed the signs to the design wing. When he pushed open the massive steel doors, he wasn't ready for what he saw. Stretching 5 stories up was a massive hall lined with hundreds of cells that gave it a look reminiscent of an old-style prison, except that each cell was a glass-front workshop filled with equipment and students using that equipment. It was set up in a horseshoe layout with glass bridges, each brilliantly reflecting the light from the skylights, connecting the reinforced steel walkways around the perimeter. This is amazing, Izuku said aloud. First time here, someone asked. Izuku looked down to see what appeared to be an upperclassman sitting at a desk nearby. It's always fun to see people's expressions when they see it for the first time, she said with a grin. It's incredible, Izuku muttered with a slight embarrassed blush. The woman laughed softly. Instant tour, this is the main design hall. The ground floor workshops have the heavy-duty tools. Upper floors have the more basic stuff, but still basically anything you'll need. If you do need a tool out of the ordinary, let us know and we probably have it. If you're worried about privacy, hit the switch just inside the doors to frost the glass. And if you're working with anything volatile, pull down the blast shield so you don't shatter the glass. If you're looking for the industrial studio, the place for cars, jetpacks, giant robots, etc., it's down that wing and through the big doors at the end. You can't miss them. Now, do you have a reservation? Izuku blinked at her for a few moments in shock before he remembered how to make his mouth work. Actually, I'm not in the support course. I'm meeting someone here. I hope she's here. She said she would be. Oh, you must be hero course. The upperclassman chuckled. What's her name? Meihatsum. She entered the name on the computer and scanned the screen for a moment. And there she is, Studio 311. Is there a problem? He asked as he saw her brow furrow. She's a freshman, so she probably didn't know. She didn't mention she'd have guests, which she was supposed to. Just go on up and tell her to let us know next time when she makes the reservations. We need to know who is moving in and out of this place and where they are. Izuku nodded and thanked the woman before heading over to an elevator and riding it up to the 3rd floor. He followed the signs and found the workshop marked 311 with little effort. But the floor-to-ceiling glass wall had been frosted up so he couldn't see inside. Izuku knocked, but heard no response. He knocked again with the same result. Then put his ear to the glass. Someone was definitely inside. Maybe it was Mei. He decided to peek inside just to check, so he grabbed the door and pulled, which immediately caused the wall to unfrost and reveal the workshop within. Sure enough, Mei was inside working on something at the main workbench. As soon as the door opened and the loud click announced the glass defrosting, Mei whipped up with a scowl on her face. Hey, I have this reserved for 5 more hours. Yet she stopped as she recognized Izuku. Wait, what are you doing here? Of all the questions to come out of her mouth, that was one of the ones he was expecting the least. You asked me to come, right? Mei stared at him in shock for a few moments before her eyes lit up and a grin spread across her face. Yes, I did. And you came. Great. Izuku laughed nervously and finally entered the workshop. The door shut behind him and the glass refrosted with another click, leaving the pair in relative privacy. So, how can I help you? Izuku asked. Mei felt her heart swell a little. Well, you're in the hero course, and I'm in the support course, which means that it's my job to make babies for you to use. Babies, he repeated nervously. She ignored him. So what's your quirk? I gotta know what you can do so I can figure out what you need. Oh, sure, he began. My quirk is called bullet control, and it does what it says, allowing me to control bullets that I myself have fired from a firearm. Mei's mind immediately began firing on all cylinders. She began to rub her chin and tap the table, then pulled out a notebook and pencil with her other 2 hands. Control how? It's more like guiding than perfect control, he explained. Kind of like the rudder of a ship. It's going, but I can tell it where to go. So, to hit something behind you, she reasoned, you'd need enough space for it to curve around. You couldn't just flip it in midair. He nodded. Maybe one day, but not right now. Have you tried other projectiles? Yes, but they only work with gunpowder. Rubber bullets work, paintballs or airsoft don't. Archery doesn't, throwing knives, etc. So what I'm hearing, she said with a glint in her eye, is that you're going to need special guns and special bullets. Are you allowed to make that for me? He asked. He let out a short laugh. Have you seen the robots they use here? Also, I saw some seniors making an actual giant mecha. It had a drill the size of a car on it. Yes, I can make you that stuff. Have you ever made firearms or cartridges before? He followed. PSH, no, but give me like a day or two and I'll figure out the basics. Besides, it'll be a fun challenge. He smiled nervously. If you say so. Oh, she exclaimed. And you're in that basic engineering course. That means you can help me make babies. Izuku choked on nothing. I what? Either she didn't care, or it flew over her head. Yeah, come on, I could always use a third pair of hands. Go get that drill over there. The impact driver. Izuku and Ochako were almost late to Nana's class because they had gotten caught up talking like they often did. They entered a rather bland lecture hall that was on the smaller side. With all 42 students in there, it would nearly be at capacity, which meant that there were few seats left when the pair arrived. There were 3 open seats in the front row next to Mina and Ijiru. Well, 4 technically, but one was blocked by Ijiru sitting down on the floor in front of it, so it didn't really count. What are you doing, Kirishima? Ochako asked as they looked down at him. He rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. Well, I feel bad sitting in the front row cause I'm so big, right? I don't want to block the people behind me. Ochako laughed and promptly sat down on the floor next to him with a grin. Mina leaned over a seat and grinned up at Izuku. It's fine. Us shorties can sit in chairs like normal people. Here, Izuku, Ochako said, gesturing behind her. No need to take up more seats. Just sit behind me. He hesitated for a moment before feeling the eyes of nearly 40 other people looking at him standing there. So he took Ochako's offer, putting his backpack in his lap just to be safe. Mina grew a smug smirk and made eyebrows at him and Ochako, but they either didn't see or pretended not to notice her. That was fine. She still had plenty of time to make them squirm. The door opened again, and Izuku felt better because he and Ochako evidently weren't the last students to arrive. Yui and a short, black-haired man Izuku remembered was named Fumikage Takoyami entered together, seemingly unconcerned with being late. Izuku could tell why the two had appeared to become fast friends, as Fumikage's fashion sense was fairly similar to Yui's, including black eyeliner, pale skin, and a wardrobe nearly entirely black as well. The black hair on his head as well as the 2 massive black wings on his back added to his appearance, making him quite reminiscent of a raven. Izuku wondered if he was related to Nevermore. A bird head like the number 3 would definitely complete Fumikage's aesthetic. Izuku waved to Yui and invited them to the open seats next to him. She and Fumikage sat down, with Yui at Izuku's side. She glanced down at Ochako and nodded at her, then turned to Izuku and spoke very plainly once again. You're very lucky. Izuku sputtered. What do you mean? Yui tilted her head slightly, then looked down at Ochako sitting between his legs, then back up at him. She didn't say anything, but her beautiful blue eyes were making him feel small. Before he could say anything to break up the awkward silence, a voice pierced into Izuku's mind. What are you all doing in that stuffy classroom? Come on outside, it's a beautiful day. Izuku and Ochako were used to Nana's telepathy entering their minds, but everyone else in the classroom took a moment to process. A few of them began to whisper to each other, making sure they hadn't gone crazy, but Izuku and Ochako had already stood up. What are you waiting on? Izuku called over the room. You heard the woman. Ochako cheered, pumping her fist in the air then pointing at the door. Let's go. The rest of the class unfroze and quickly followed the pair out of the room, down the hallway, and outside the building. They spotted Nana leaning against a tree next to one of the large practice fields behind the Hero Course main building and led everyone toward her. Of course you two are first. Nana's voice echoed through Izuku and Ochako's minds. They could hear her shaking her head. But remember, you two don't know me. Welcome, everyone. Nana yelled as she waved broadly at the approaching students. To your first day of heroics class. Excited murmurs rippled through the 42 students as they gathered around her. First things first, as you probably heard on television, I'd rather you call me Nana instead of Professor Shimura or anything like that. Miss Nana is acceptable if you insist on being formal. Izuku heard a telepathic cough in his mind. As long as the weather holds up. We're gonna meet out here, Nana continued. I'm not exactly a woman who likes to stand at desks and give speeches. I'm a woman of action. And I know you are all cut from the same cloth as myself, or you wouldn't have fought so hard to get into UA. Izuku and Ochako looked at each other and nodded as the rest of the class muttered energetically. We have a lot to cover this semester, and I'm sure you're all eager to train your quirks, but before we get there, there is something else we need to cover first. The foundation of any and all quirk use. Can anyone tell me what that is? Immediately, the tall, blue-haired man near Izuku threw his hand into the air. Nana pointed a finger at him. Ada, go ahead. A healthy respect for safety and the dangers that all quirks pose, Miss Nana, Tenya declared boldly. Exactly, Nana said approvingly. How is Tensei, by the by? He is doing quite well, Tenya replied dutifully. Ochako leaned down to Izuku and whispered, That's Ingenium, right? Izuku nodded. Tenya was Ingenium's younger brother, and had what appeared to be a nearly identical quirk, with the exception of his engine exhausts being on his arms compared to Ingenium's calves. Good to hear, Nana returned. Tell him hi for me, would you? Now, safety and respect, as Ida said, is foundational. All of our quirks can be dangerous and even deadly when applied in the right or wrong way. While it's true that heroes sometimes take lives, that is always as a last resort. We are here to save every life we can, civilian and villain alike. Is that clear? Yes, Miss Nana, came the response in unison. She clapped her gloved hands together before pulling out a datapad and looking over the roster. Good. Now, let's emphasize this, shall we? Could Kendo, Takage, Shaoji, Kaminari, and Midoriya please come stand next to me? Izuku and the others obeyed and stepped out from the group. Itsuka Kendo was a well-built taller woman standing at the same height as Mina Orinko, with bright red hair and teal eyes. She was shorter than Mezu Shaoji, who stood around Mei's height at 6 feet even, but was otherwise hard to describe beyond entirely black, so black that light seems to get swallowed around him. Satsuna Takage was a few inches shorter than Izuku, and her most distinctive features beyond her green hair were her slitted green eyes and sharp fangs she bared when she smiled. Lastly, Doi Kaminari was a bit of a clown and a showman. From what Izuku could tell, she stood about his height and had bright blonde hair, but had few other outstanding features. Nana tipped her hand toward them. You 5 represent perhaps the 5 most easily deadly quirks in the class. Don't get me wrong, the rest of you are also dangerous, but I believe it would take the least amount of carelessness from you 5 to kill someone. Izuku and the others shifted uncomfortably as the eyes of their classmates fell on them. Don't feel bad, Nana continued, it is the nature of quirks. Think about how easily I could be deadly. Or any of you standing there. I singled you 5 out because I wanted to emphasize that, no matter how dangerous you are, I have complete confidence in you. The bottom line is this, a quirk is what you make of it, and since you all want to be heroes, I know you'll all be diligent and disciplined. Izuku looked to the others and smiled confidently. What are their quirks? Mina blurted out as she raised her hand. Nana raised an eyebrow before looking over at Izuku and the other 4. Perhaps a demonstration to emphasize my point, and to sate your classmates' curiosity. I can't exactly show my quirk off, Itsuka admitted. I'd rather not be naked. Nana nodded. You and Takage can just tell us. You'll get chances to show off later this afternoon in practice. Itsuka returned the nod and then turned to the rest of the class. My quirk is called gigantification. When I use it, I grow over 20 meters tall. Izuku's eyes went wide and he reached for his notebook, but couldn't find it. He must have left it in his backpack. Fortunately, when he looked over at Ochako, he saw it in her hand as she wrote furiously. Satsuna whistled. And here I was thinking I would be the biggest one in class. My quirk is called Dragon, and it lets me turn into a dragon. She bared her fangs theatrically to the class and made a small roar, which elicited laughter from her classmates. Doi stepped up next. I could tell you all, but why tell when I can show? She reached down and put her hand on the grass beneath her. Abracadabra. A huge chunk of dirt vanished into seemingly nothing in an instant. Doi stood back up and began to run a small blue marble between her fingers before she clapped her hands and held them out again, showing no marble in sight. With a snap of her fingers, the marble reappeared in her other hand. My quirk is called Compress, and it lets me shrink anything I touch down into a marble like this. I can uncompress it as well, of course. She tossed the marble into the air and it turned back into the large chunk of dirt before thumping to the ground. Izuku had 1,000 questions for her and the others, but he held his tongue. He didn't want to disrupt Nana's class. My quirk is Black Hole, Mezu said in his slightly ethereal voice. When I activate it, I suck up anything nearby and atomize it. To demonstrate, he gestured for Doi to step back and then extended his hand toward the pile of dirt. A rushing noise started up as air and dirt began to rush into the void that was his hand, seeming to vanish from existence. Izuku felt a sense of unease looking at him. Something deep within his brain didn't like the unnatural nothingness of Mezu. Calling him black was a misnomer. It was more accurate to call him nothing. A hole in reality that was vaguely man-shaped. He seemed nice, though. Izuku wondered how he ate. All eyes fell on Izuku, who suddenly felt very awkward. I can't demonstrate my quirk without a tool, Miss Nana. Of course, I read your file, she chirped as she walked over to the tree behind her. You little shit, she added telepathically to him. Izuku kept his grin to himself as she picked up a small metal case and tossed it at him. He caught it and placed it on the ground before flipping it open with ease and pulling the pistol out of the foam casing. Whoa, Doi exclaimed as she lost her bravado. Is that a gun? Izuku checked the safety and inserted the magazine before standing up and looking over at Doi. Yeah. My quirk only works with firearms. Nana nodded solemnly. Guns are dangerous, as you all know. He has to be constantly disciplined and careful, or he poses a serious danger. Here, Midoriya, how about a demonstration? Based on your report, I'd say this should be easy for you. She placed her hands on the ground and a pillar of earth formed a few feet away from her. She unfolded a piece of paper with a large bullseye and 4 smaller ones at the corners from her pocket and attached it to the pillar. Go ahead and hit those targets for me, she instructed, taking a few steps away from the target, but still standing between it and Izuku. Yes, miss, Izuku replied dutifully. Aren't you gonna move? Mina asked from the crowd. Nana shook her head. No need. Nana's body suddenly flashed to steel as every inch of her was turned into the silvery metal. She leveled her eyes at Izuku and stared at him pointedly. He grit his teeth. Nana knew quite well that he struggled hitting targets he couldn't see. She had been training him on it for months. This was a test that he couldn't admit he saw coming. Izuku flipped off the safety and leveled his gun at Nana, causing the rest of the class to recoil and mutter nervously, save for Ochako. Even Kyoika was a little unsure about it. He aimed the gun to her right and fired 2 shots, then aimed to her left and fired 3 more. A silence hung in the air as Nana grinned and released steel. She stepped to the side and saw with pride that all 5 targets had holes right through the middle. You did it, she praised in his mind. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I knew it would push you. Very good work, Midoriya, she said approvingly out loud. Thank you, Miss Nana, Izuku said with a bow. And please, you may call me Izuku, it's only fair. Once again, you little shit. I'd be dangerous too if you gave me a gun. Minerva Minda whined from the side of the group. She was staring at the pistol with fear in her eyes, which was understandable. Very true, Nana confirmed. That leads me beautifully into my next point. Anyone with a gun is dangerous. To that end, anyone with a knife or any other sort of weapon is dangerous. Villains and criminals are often those people. Talk to any hero, and they'll be able to tell you when they've been shot or stabbed. Some of them might even show you scars. Take Izuku's gun away, and he's functionally quirkless, she continued. That's true, but I don't want to see any sort of attitude about it. There are plenty of technopath quirks out there, and they make great heroes. Ochako bristled a little. If anyone had a problem with Izuku, they could take it up with her. Nana shot her a glance and continued. There are plenty of ways for all your quirks to be rendered useless or unusable, so just accept this. In fact, Izuku's quirk is a boon to our class, although I doubt you're going to like it. Can anyone tell me why that might be? Momo's hand rose into the air. As heroes, we have to be prepared to face villains in combat, some of which are armed with weapons, such as firearms, as you said. Sparring with Midoriya may be unpleasant, but it will prepare us for an inevitability and make us better heroes in the process. Very good, Nana approved. I can definitely tell you're your mother's daughter. Momo straightened up a little with pride. So what, we're gonna get shot at? Minerva trembled. Nana nodded firmly. At some point, during your tenure here at UA, you are going to be punched, kicked, cut, stabbed, shot, exploded, and subject to nearly every other type of physical violence imaginable. Our profession is a dangerous and violent one. You'll need to get used to enduring pain and hardships. That's why Izuku's mother is so crucial to UA. If you don't think you can handle that, then the window to drop classes and transfer to a different major extends until next Friday. She looked over the class with an intensity that let them know she was deathly serious. She saw doubt form over some of their faces, but after a few moments, it hardened into determination. Very well, Nana continued. Let's see what that might look like. 2 of you are going to spar. How about? Momo's eyelashes began to smoke more as her eyes filled with metaphorical fire. This was her opportunity to spar with Ochako. She threw her hand up to volunteer. Kodai and Monoma, come on down. Momo put her hand down and grumbled as the 2 women walked past her out of the group. Izuku unloaded the pistol, including the round in the chamber, collected the spent brass, and put the weapon back into the case. He handed it back to Nana and hurried back to Ochako's side as the class cleared space for the practice fight. Nana created a raised area as a makeshift arena with her earth flow, and the 2 students stepped up onto it. Nero Monoma was a blonde woman of average height, but her quirk was clearly something related to the 2 longer locks of hair that hung off her head. The ends of the locks were vaguely arrow-shaped. Maybe she could attack with them. Izuku still had no idea what Yui's quirk was, but he was excited to find out. She stood across the ring from Nero, staring her down with a flat expression on her face, but seemingly breathing deeply. As Nero got in position, she took in a breath and held it. Remember what I said about pain? Nana called over. Go. Nero glanced over at Nana nervously, but a moment later, she understood what she meant. Yui's mouth opened and a piercing, ear-splitting screech erupted from within. Nero immediately and reflexively clapped her hands over her ears and fell to her knees as the rest of the class jumped back from the eruption of shrill sound. Grass was ripped up and the trees bent back as the wall of pressure crashed over them. Yui's impressive lung capacity kept the high-pitched shout going for longer than Izuku expected, but she cut it off when Nero fell to her side, trying to hide herself from the noise. "Do you give up?" Yui asked. Her voice returned to its normally quiet tone. "I would rather not have to do that again." Nero didn't respond. Izuku was pretty sure she couldn't hear anything at the moment. His ears were still ringing and he wasn't directly in the path. "That will be enough, Kodai," Nana ordered. "You've helped me make my point, thank you." Yui nodded to Nana and walked over to Nero to help her up. Izuku saw her mouth a quiet, polite apology to the blonde, which he appreciated. They were there to learn to protect, not hurt. He knew that he wouldn't relish the day he first had to shoot someone. With practice later, that day might be today. Ochako was leaning over him as he began to take notes furiously. Sonic attacks were notoriously difficult to deal with, and it was clear to both of them that she would be a potent hero. If you block out sound, you're leaving yourself vulnerable by hindering a basic sense, Ochako muttered as Izuku wrote down her observation. After Yui made sure Nero was all right, she noticed Ochako and Izuku glancing at her as he wrote. She walked right up to him and asked him her question directly. "What are you doing?" Izuku jumped a little after not hearing her approach. "Oh, Kodai, I was just taking notes on your quirk. Is that weird?" "Sorry, show me." He turned the notebook over and held it out to her. Yui scanned over the page and was privately surprised at the detail and insight. The two of them had inferred much from her simple demonstration. They were both clearly very bright. Out of everything, she saw only one error she cared to correct at the moment. "You drew my eyes too far apart," she noted as she walked off. The other mistakes would be fixed in time. Izuku turned the notebook around and scratched his head. "Oh, yeah, eyes back up here, everyone," Nana requested in their minds, regaining her class's attention. "We've still got plenty of class left, don't lose focus now." The days of Izuku being able to keep up with Ochako in a race were long gone. Even if she didn't have heroic form boosting her strength, speed, and stamina to superhuman levels, there was no way he could outpace those long legs. Even so, his physical ability impressed many of his classmates as he arrived near the front of the pack alongside much taller students as they finished their laps for hero practice that afternoon. They had been exercising and stretching for nearly a half hour now. Izuku was glad he wasn't still wearing his school clothes. Minerva brought up the rear by a wide margin, but Izuku couldn't blame her. She was barely 4 feet tall. On the other end of things, Ochako had blown past a frustrated Momo, but still couldn't keep up with Tenya. Izuku smiled proudly to himself. Nana told them that her strength still had a long way to go. Maybe she'd get there one day. The class formed up in a semicircle around their 3 instructors, awaiting further direction. Dr. Aizawa looked over them with a tired gaze. But Izuku could tell there were 1,000 thoughts going on behind those eyes. "To know where you have to go, we have to know where you are," he began simply. "Mentally, physically, the works. I hope you're all ready to prove yourselves." "Anything," Ijiru declared triumphantly. "I like that attitude." Dr. Ken grunted approvingly. "We're going to be setting you up in a team exercise that simulates a potential situation out in the field. 4 heroes versus 4 villains with a hostage on the line. Hero team has to extract the hostage safely while the villain team has to prevent that from happening. Doesn't that leave 2 people teamless?" Hanashiro asked. "It does," Nana replied. "Which means we'll need 2 to volunteer to be excluded. We'll test them in other ways." Momo saw her opportunity arise once again and she would not be denied her fight a second time. "Why not myself and Uraraka?" "Uraraka?" Nana asked, looking at her secret protege. Ochako knew what Momo was getting at, and she was itching for it as well. "Sure, very well," Aizawa noted. "You 2 get to be our hostages." Momo nearly erupted into flames right there. Kan hit a button on his datapad and projected a hologram with 10 teams of 4 displayed for all to see. "We'll run 2 matches simultaneously so we can get through this before next week." Izuku saw his team and immediately began planning. He already knew Kyoyuka's capabilities, and they worked fairly well together, he thought. Yui would be quite useful at medium range, but Mina was the big question. He didn't know what her quirk was, so he couldn't plan anything out. Maybe if... He was knocked out of his thoughts as he felt a weight crash into his back. "Hey, Deadeye, we're on a team," Mina exclaimed through a toothy grin as she held her arm around his shoulder in a half hug. "Oh, Ashido." "Hey," he returned as he looked up at her, a little nervous with her being so close to him. "Damn, you're thick," she noted out loud to herself as she looked at his shoulders then back at his face. "Hey, I know I'm a catch, but you keep that gun holstered around me, all right?" Izuku tilted his head in confusion. "That's adorable," Yui said in her soft, flat voice as she walked up to his other side. "What is?" Izuku asked as his confusion mounted. "You ready to rock this?" Kyoyuka asked as she arrived at their little group. "Between the 4 of us, I think we got this handled." "With you, for sure," Izuku agreed with a friendly, honest grin. Kyoyuka's ears twitched as her cheeks reddened. "Yeah, thanks. You, too, I guess." Mina began to cackle as she reached her other arm over and grabbed onto Kyoyuka's shoulder, then pulled Izuku and her closer until the 3 were nearly touching cheeks. "Oh, this is gonna be fun. Oh, one more thing." Nana telepathically added, "You're going to do this exercise in costume." Ken yelled over the class, "You'll find that your suits and equipment are waiting for you in the locker rooms. We didn't want to spoil the surprise early." "Badass," Kyoyuka growled with approval. Izuku beamed with excitement as he and the rest of the class began to run back to the locker rooms. It was hard to believe that after everything, he was finally here, finally ready to wear his own costume. Time to show everyone that he deserved it. Nana herself couldn't have pulled Izuku's smile off his face as he suited up for the first time. He zipped up the nearly skin-tight green and black suit before putting on his red shoes and strapping on his belts. Just like his outfit at the entrance exam, he had 2 holsters on his belt, one under his left arm, and plenty of pouches for ammunition and other things. Lastly, he pulled on his tough gloves and looked at himself in the mirror in the changing room. The black designs along his suit were inspired directly by his mother, and while the colors were different, it wasn't the most subtle nod. Whatever, it was his mother. He was allowed to do it. He even got explicit permission. UA had the facilities to provide each of their hero students with their own, relatively spacious changing room to facilitate heteromorphic students or those with complicated gear and outfits. And because UA could afford it, of course, the privacy was also appreciated. In the room next to Izuku, Ochako was suiting up as well. As she pulled up her heavy-duty sports bra, she mentally wondered if she had made a mistake growing her chest that large. Surely, she couldn't be blamed for what her mental image of her ideal heroic form might be. And maybe she knew Izuku liked it, which had made her grow larger, but that was beside the point. Ochako's hero suit was skin-tight and colored mostly in black and white with some pink highlights. Her shoulders were exposed above her arm-length compression sleeves that showed off her muscles quite nicely, if she said so herself. They were the product of a year of work and a potent quirk, but she was proud, according to Nana. Her strength was only beginning, and she suspected that Ochako might even wind up stronger than her one day, which excited her. In her original design, she had a cape and a belt sash that were more than a little reminiscent of Nana, but she had discouraged Ochako from including them, at least for now. They wanted to hide who she was for as long as possible, so that Ochako could train and grow in peace and relative privacy. Nana had impressed upon her more than once the weight of being all for one. She'd become an overnight celebrity, and that was something she was dreading. She'd never been one for the spotlight, but she would do what she had to do to help people. It was a small price to pay. Ochako stepped out into the hallway and saw that Izuku had beaten her out, but was currently talking to Kyoyuka, who had apparently grabbed the room on the other side of him. "Tactical butt cheeks," said a voice from behind her. Ochako whipped around to see the black and green eyes of Mina looking up at her. What? Look at his ass, girl," Mina muttered, turning her back around. "Look at how that suit clings to it. With that gear and that Spec Ops look he's got going on." Tactical butt cheeks. Ochako indulged a little and let her gaze linger on Izuku. Mina wasn't wrong. The way his green hero suit clung to his butt was something else, but so was the way it was wrapped around the rest of his body. His muscular thighs stretched the fabric, as did his powerful calves. She swore she could make out his back muscles through the tough, thick material, and his shoulder straps only emphasized the pyramid his traps created up his neck. She felt a bit guilty, but not a night had gone by in a long time without her having thought about him in her most private, intimate moments with herself. Her eyes were still glued on his butt when Mina called out to him, which meant when he turned around, she was staring straight at his junk. To be perfectly clear, Ochako was very aware of what Izuku was packing down there. They had been basically inseparable for years, and as she grew up with him and went through puberty, she had always kept an eye on it, perhaps more literally than she would ever admit. With all the gym shorts and sweatpants she had seen him wear as they trained together, she had a very good mental image, one she often referenced, in all honesty, especially with how impressive it had become in recent years. Thanks to Izuku and her maintaining those notebooks, she had quite the mind for quirks, and she had sometimes wondered privately if maybe Izuku really did have a quirk. Ever since they discovered his real quirk, her mind had other theories. Secondary mutations were inexplicable and seemingly random. There was no reason for Mina to have blue skin, nor for Slate to have those razor-sharp teeth. Quirks were bullshit and they could do whatever they wanted, for better or worse. Fortunately for Ochako, or perhaps not, Izuku was wearing protection that both obfuscated, but also emphasized, especially with how tight his pants were clinging all over. "You're just gonna keep staring, huh?" Mina hummed smugly from her side. "I mean, I'm not gonna judge. I'd do the same thing if I wasn't having so much fun right now." Ochako ripped her eyes away as she felt her face light up in a fierce blush. Mina smirked up at her. "Oh, a blushy Amazon. That's a new one." "Amazon? I don't know about that," Ochako blustered. Mina cocked an eyebrow in her hip. "Girl, I barely come up to your shoulder and I'm not exactly a shorty myself. That, and you look like you could crush a bowling ball between your thighs. That makes you an Amazon." Fair." Ochako sighed. Fortunately for Ochako, or perhaps not, Izuku hadn't heard any of that. He was too busy staring back at her. He'd seen her in tight clothing before, but he'd never seen her hero uniform before. The way her tight costume showed off the definition in her arms, thighs, and abs, combined with how it seemed to emphasize how wide her hips were and how larger her chest was, Izuku was very glad that he was wearing a cup. The horny part of his brain wanted her to turn around, so he could look at the huge, muscular butt that he knew was behind those hips, but he knew he had to focus on other things. He turned his gaze on Mina, hoping to put Ochako out of his mind, but it honestly just distracted him further. Her hero costume was a skin-tight blue and teal suit that did wonders to show off her long legs, powerful thighs, and toned core, not to mention the triangular window on her chest that showed off her ample cleavage. The fur-trimmed jacket she wore added to her trendy aesthetic, but perhaps the most attractive thing about her was the smile she beamed as she made eye contact with him. Mina gave him a wink, causing him to wince and avert his gaze further. She took the opportunity to look past him to Kyoyuka, who was adjusting the fingerless gloves on her hand. Her torso was covered by a high-waisted leotard, but the only thing covering her legs from her hips to her ankles were fishnets and some knee pads. Holy shit, those thighs. Mina was proud of her legs, but Kyoyuka was on another level. She wanted to ask her if she would crush her skull, but it might be too soon to be that forward. Beyond that was her heavy, steel-toed boots, elbow pads that matched her knee pads, and those fingerless gloves, all topped off with a short jacket not too dissimilar to Mina's own. Mina noticed Kyoyuka's eyes trace over Izuku, then Ochako, then Mina, but as her eyes flowed over Mina's hips and chest, they locked onto her face and saw that she was looking right at her. Kyoyuka blushed and averted her eyes as her ears flattened themselves against her head. How cute. Well, we can stand here ogling each other forever, but I think we all have class to get to, Mina reminded everyone, including herself. Yep, Ochako said far too quickly. Mina grinned up at her. Yes, wouldn't want you to be late for being a damsel. Nana won't leave me hanging, don't worry about that, Ochako declared confidently. The four began to walk back outside as different classmates emerged from their changing rooms. Mina complimented Itsuka's costume, was dazzled by Yuuna Aoyama's costume, and gave Ijiru a high five as he towered over everyone else. It wasn't long before they started getting their instructions broadcasted into their mind by Nana, which still felt weird to Mina. Head straight to your assigned stations. Yaorazu and Uraraka can come straight to me to receive special instructions. Ochako bid goodbye to the rest of them as she headed off to meet with their teacher. Mina found it incredibly hilarious that both of their resident Amazons got relegated to hostage duty, but she wasn't going to rub it in. For now, as they walked past the central observation post where Ochako was heading, Izuku saw his mother talking to Nana. She had been called in for on-site healing because, as Dr. Kan put it, when quirks clash, people get hurt. Izuku waved at her as he caught her eye, and her wave back put a goofy smile on his face. The three made their way to their designated starting location at the base of a large building in the mock city. It seemed to be some sort of assembly hall or gymnasium, rather than an office building, so Izuku reasoned that open combat was likely. If it came to that, the team with the better plan and more decisive action would win. His mother had taught him that much at the very least. Yui wasn't there yet, but they still had several minutes before they were set to begin. Izuku wasted no time and placed his gun case down on a concrete divider to begin his preparations. He pulled out his pair of 9mm pistols and began his checklist to make sure everything would work properly. A malfunction in the field would leave him basically quirkless, which he couldn't afford against his opponents. After he holstered the two weapons on his hips, he filled his pouches with his magazines before reaching down to pick up his Colt. And I'm telling you, son, well, it ain't no fun staring straight down a 44, Izuku muttered as he checked his sights. Well, it's a 45, but the point stands. Oh my god, that song is like 200 years old, Kyoyuka groaned. I listened to a lot of that stuff growing up, Izuku admitted. My dad came back from the States with a love for it. You also knew it, too, girl, Mina teased. Shut up. As Kyoyuka's ears twitched with annoyance, they picked up a noise behind her. One turned to listen more carefully, and heard the distinct sound of footsteps and jingling metal. She turned around to look at the newcomer and her jaw dropped. Yui was walking toward them, and her stunning blue eyes transfixed her for a moment, but the rest of her quickly drew her attention. Her dark suit held tight to her curvy body, accenting her wide hips and busty chest. Her tits wouldn't have looked out of place on a woman a foot taller than her, but on Yui, they blew Kyoyuka's mind. She had seen Yui before, but she hadn't truly seen her until that moment. Her suit was low-cut, and the rest of her torso was colored maroon, streaking down the side of her legs to her boots, which seemed to emphasize her curves. The jingle came from the straps on her boots and gloves, as well as from the heavy leather jacket she wore. The jacket was solid black and had small spikes on the shoulders, providing both style and a level of protection. She wore a black choker that was adorned with some interesting tech, including what looked like a speaker right in the middle of her throat. Descending from the choker was a strap that split her cleavage and connected to her metal belt, drawing the eye both up and down. Fuck, Kayuka muttered under her breath. Yui was equal parts cool, badass, and attractive. Yui was going to kill her. I like your fishnets, Yui said coolly as she walked past Kayuka. They show off your legs beautifully. Gee thanks, Kayuka mumbled bashfully. Hi, Kodai, Izuku chirped, trying to fight the blush dusting his cheeks. Ready to go. She nodded once. Mina cocked her hip. Do you think every group is this attractive? Or are we special? We're special, Yui replied without changing her expression. Her eyes traced up Mina and Izuku before continuing. But we should focus. She was hard to read, but Izuku didn't think she was upset. Right, Mina cheered as she clapped her hands once. Horny brain off, hero brain on. Izuku was used to being around beautiful women, but normally only one of them, so he opted to change the subject to something more comfortable. Ashido, I already know theirs. What is your quirk? She looked down at him and grew a toothy grin. I call it landmine. It lets me turn anything I touch into a bomb to be detonated at my command. Whoa, he exclaimed. That's awesome. Thanks, she replied happily. They're not big on their own, but get enough of them, and they pack a punch. Have you ever met Ground Zero? He asked. Her smile turned into a playful pout. No, but I want to. Hey, he hangs around Miss Nana a lot, Izuku suggested, catching himself before he revealed too much. Maybe you'll get to. I hope so. Mina leaned down and picked up a pebble, showed it to him, and tossed it into the air. As it reached the top of the arc, she snapped her fingers and it exploded like a small grenade, sending tiny pieces of rock raining down and causing Kayuka to flinch. Mina jumped and clapped her hands over her mouth. Sorry. Oh, Jiru, Izuku exclaimed, running back to his case. I remembered how sensitive your ears were back in the entrance exam, so I packed these in case you needed them. Kayuka blinked dumbly at him as he jogged back holding a pair of headphones. I know they're not designed for rabbit ears, but they should help. He smiled down at her hopefully. What are they? She asked as she fit them over her ears, pressing them back a little. They're designed for shooting ranges, he explained. They'll cancel out sound over a certain decibel level. Ashido, could you do that again? Mina nodded nervously and picked up another rock before throwing it into the air and exploding it. The blast and small shockwave echoed through their chests, causing Kayuka's jaw to drop. I barely heard it, she gasped. Oh, she was going to kiss this man. How was he this genuinely eager and considerate? And buff no, bad Kayuka. Focus, you can fuck yourself later, she mentally chastised herself. Alright, we need to consider our opponents, Izuku began, rubbing his chin. We have Hagakure, Anjiro, Shiro, and Yaoyorozu. Wait, Yui said flatly. Her twin brother, he explained. She nodded. We don't know all of their quirks, so we need to play to our strengths. I have some ideas. He pulled out his .45 and released the magazine. Ashido, could you do something for me? I swear the teachers did this on purpose, Momo sighed. There was rope tied around her ankles and wrists, but that wasn't the worst part. Don't worry, Momo, Inasa declared in his obnoxiously boisterous way. It's my duty as her brother to protect you. Why couldn't Uraraka be assigned here? She bemoaned. Inasa laughed. Don't be like that. This is a perfect time for some family bonding. His glibness was punctuated by a wave of his hand that caused a block of ice to erupt from the ground and encase her up to her neck. She glared at him as he grinned smugly down at her. I could melt out of this and burn these ropes in a second. Of course you could, he agreed. But you won't, because you're not supposed to. And that's the best part. Now, you sit tight. I have to get into villain mode. How will you be able to tell? She barked at him as he turned on his heels and walked out of the small room they stuck her in. He laughed once before he erected a wall of ice in the doorway, effectively sealing her inside. Momo really did feel like a prisoner now, but only because of the professors. She wasn't trapped, she was just bored. Hopefully whoever came to get her would be competent. Are you sure you two are related? Toru asked as she looked up at Inasa. That sounded harsh. Inasa looked down at the darker-skinned woman with shock. What? No, that's just how we show our affection. Momo and I care about each other very much. If you say so, man, Hana said, clearly unconvinced. Mashurao began to stretch his arms as he looked around his group. Anybody got a plan? Okay, Toru began, hopping around and causing her white hair to jostle excitedly. So, we know Midoriya's quirk. I'm pretty sure the next school overheard Kodai's quirk, and I think we can all assume Jiru's, but Ishido's is a total mystery. When I asked her, she said it would be a fun surprise. I can't believe that his quirk is gun. Mashurao grumbled. I didn't come to UA to get shot at. Of course you did, Inasa affirmed. You came to UA to learn to be the best, just like the rest of us. I eagerly accept the bullet wounds that come my way as a part of this training. Hana looked down nervously to Toru and Mashurao before she spoke. Baby, don't run headlong into the gunfire. Hagakure, what are you assuming Jiru's quirk is? Pardon me if I'm jumping to conclusions. But have you seen her legs? Toru exclaimed. Between her yoga pants barely holding together, her fluffy tail and adorable ears, she's gotta have a bunny quirk, right? That means she's probably going to be their bruiser. Hana reasoned. Where are we going to fight? Mashurao gestured around to the large room they were standing in. We have the edge because we know their quirks better and they have to come through here to get to the hostage. Why not fight them head-on in the open? Direct combat. Inasa cheered approvingly. We will see whose passion burns brightest. But your sister is all tied up, Toru jabbed, eliciting hearty laughter from Inasa. Ready or not, here they come. Nana's voice echoed in their minds. No more than a couple seconds later, there was a heavy metallic crash as Kyoika kicked the heavy steel door off its hinges. The crumbled metal fell to the ground with a heavy thump as the four attackers entered the building cautiously. They appeared to be in some sort of front office, which made sense, but there was no sign of their opponents. Izuku held up a hand to his teammates and began to creep forward to the door leading into the main room as quietly as he could. As he peered through the window, he saw all four of the defenders waiting patiently. Toru Hagakure, the shortest one, was grinning widely as she hopped up and down eagerly, jingling the bells on the collar of her slightly garish, jester-inspired costume. Next to her was the sandy-haired Mashurao Ajiro, who wore nothing above the waist and simple pants below. Hanashiro wore a mostly black and white ninja costume with yellow highlights, while Inasaye Irazu was dressed like he was getting ready to scale the Himalayas, complete with a bulky fur coat and snow boots. Remember the plan, but don't be afraid to improvise, he recommended as he gestured for his teammates to move forward. Jiru, if you would. You just like seeing me kick doors in, she huffed. Not that she minded. Izuku said nothing, because she wasn't wrong. He only smiled weakly as she put her foot into the door and crumpled it like tin foil. You know, these doors are unlocked, Nana muttered in their minds. Welcome, Inasa shouted across the open room. I hope you're ready to give it your all. Izuku smiled and pulled out one of his 9mm pistols, pointed it at Inasa, and hesitated just long enough for him to react before he pulled the trigger. A massive wave of ice shot out from Inasa and formed a wall in front of the team, which was the opportunity Izuku was seeking. Before anything else could happen, Izuku pulled out his Colt and fired all 7 shots along the length of the wall, embedding them in the ice and looking to Mina. She snapped her fingers and the 7 bullets exploded, shattering the wall of ice into hundreds of pieces. As the frozen shards rained down, time seemed to unfreeze as all 8 students began to move. Exploding bullets really are cool, aren't they? Izuku bluffed as he holstered his 1911 and drew his 9mm. You can say that again, I'm freezing. Toru laughed as she ran toward him. Mina, Kyoika, and Yui all closed ranks in front of him and charged toward the other 4 students. Protecting the principal was the name of the game, at least as far as it appeared. The 3 women would provide cover so he could cover for them. It was easier to aim without having to dodge punches, after all. However, Inasa and his team had no intention of letting that happen. He kicked his foot back and began to surf toward Izuku as he yelled triumphantly. Inasa kept a shield in front of him as he raced toward him, which caught a pair of bullets, but that distraction meant he couldn't react in time when Kyoika jumped at lightning speeds and smashed his wave into smithereens. Inasa went tumbling toward the ground, but caught himself on a new wave before he impacted. He regained his senses just in time to see Mina bearing down on him, her hand outstretched. Just let me get a hand on you, would ya? She yelled. Inasa's training set off alarm bells in his head. Mina was the big unknown of their team, which meant that they needed to be the most careful of her. It couldn't have been more obvious that she had a touch quirk, which meant he needed to avoid that. A slap of his hand sent him shooting upward, narrowly avoiding her hand, which slapped harmlessly against the ice beneath him. Ashido has a touch quirk, he yelled to his team. Don't let her get her hands on you. That's no fun, she cried up in frustration. Mashurao moved to intercept her as she chased Inasa. Let's see if she can touch this. His arms melted into countless particles of sand that slammed into Mina, sending her flying backward onto the ground. The particles swirled around her as she snatched at them ineffectually, forcing her to resort to grabbing pieces of ice off the ground and throwing them at him. Kyoika instantly knew that kicking sand would be about as effective as it sounded. But even sand couldn't dodge sound. Kodai. Yui opened her mouth and unleashed a deafening shriek directly at Mashurao, which caused his sand to retract back into his arms as he clamped them over his ears in a desperate attempt to stop the pain. She tapped the choker on her neck, which seemed to focus the sound a little, allowing her allies to not share Mashurao's misfortune. Hana, who had flattened herself along the floor and had crept behind Yui, took the moment to strike. She unflattened her fist and threw it forward along her extended arm, but right before it struck, a shooting pain knocked her hand aside. Izuku's quirk twinged a bit from hitting such a small target. He was thankful for all the training Ground Zero and his father put him through. Still, that was the first time he had actually hit a person. Wouldn't be the last. He didn't like it, but it had to be done. Hana cried out as she pulled her hand back. She unflatted her upper body to look at her arm in horror, but only saw a red welt. Rubber bullets. He yelled at her over Yui's scream. Also, that's an amazing quirk. Thanks. Hana yelled as she shook her hand loose and flattened herself back into the ground just in time to avoid another shot from Izuku. I want to win too, but you don't hear me screaming about it, Toru exclaimed as she ran toward Yui from the side. The piercing noise choked and vanished, leaving the room in a relative calm for a moment before Yui began to laugh. It was a quiet, full laugh, if a bit husky. It sounded beautiful and refined to Izuku's ears, but he was more concerned as to why she was laughing. Come on, Toru complained while grinning ear to ear. It wasn't that funny. She jumped out of the way, barely in time to avoid a concrete cracking stomp from Kyoyuka. Whoa, down bunny. Where's my holy hand grenade when I need it? Toru yelped. Kyoyuka moved to chase after her, but before she could, laughter began to erupt from her as well. Toru shrugged. Easy crowd. Izuku noted the attractiveness of Kyoyuka's bright laugh on some level, but he was far more focused on getting them out of whatever Toru was doing to them. But as he leveled his gun at her, a wall of ice cut him off. The passion of your team is blinding, Inasa shouted excitedly as he surfed toward Izuku, reforming the shield in front of him. But mine burns brighter still. You're done. Izuku whipped a shot at Inasa, but the wall of his in front of him blocked the rubber bullets. He didn't have time to reload to regular rounds. And with Mina chasing after Hana, nobody was coming to his aid. That meant he only had one chance. He aimed far to the left of Inasa and squeezed the trigger. He pulled as hard as he could, willing the bullet to come back. It curved wide, barely avoiding the left wall as it began to circle back in a wide arc. Inasa was bearing down on him as it narrowly missed the back wall. He felt his head pound as it touched the right wall, but with one final push, he maintained control and drove it right into Inasa's back. He let out a cry of pain as the rubber bullet punched through the fur coat and disrupted his focus. Inasa tumbled off his ice wave for the second time, but this time, right at Izuku. The much shorter man didn't have time to dodge, but he had no intention of doing that. Instead, he planted his feet and drove his elbow forward, catching Inasa in the chest and throwing him to the ground. As much as his body ached, his job wasn't over. He aimed his pistol upward and pulled one more time, sending his shot up, then curving it back down. His eyes were focused on Toru, and her pained yelp told him he found his mark. That was it. His quirk was spent. He was just a guy with a gun now, which wasn't bad, all things considered, but hopefully his teammates could close this out. Fortunately for him, the break in their uncontrollable laughter was just enough for Kyoyuka to make a sudden jump and kick Toru square in the side. She flew backward, but the rapidly moving arms of Hana caught her before she could hit the wall. The rest of the woman unfolded and stood upright so she could place Toru back down on the ground. You all right? She asked. Yeah, fine, Toru hissed. I take it back. Tough crowd. They both flinched a little as Yui resumed suppressing Mashurao, who was at least trying to fight back this time, although his sand was still being blown away. Toru looked up at Hana. We need to help him. What if? Watch out, Hana warned as Mina came running toward them, tossing chunks of ice like some sort of incensed baseball player. She shot her arms out to the side to move Toru out of the way before she flattened the rest of herself to avoid the ice balls. It was a little sad, all things considered, that Mina had been reduced to throwing things, but Hana didn't have time to feel bad. On the other side of the gym, Inasa inhaled deeply to suck in the wind that Izuku had driven out of him, but he did so with a wide grin. That's what I'm looking for. Spectacular. He jumped to his feet and kicked off, surfing back toward his side of the room. My team, regroup. A new wave of ice encouraged Mina to stop her chase and run back to her team as the 8 students caught their breath. Izuku walked up to stand by his teammates as they stared down the other 4 from the other side of the room. They had held their line strong, just like they had planned, making sure the defenders were fenced to their side of the room. A chill hung in the air from all the smashed ice, and the absence of Yui's echoing screams made everything feel just a little more empty. A stillness permeated the room as their breaths fogged up around them. That was incredible, Inasa praised boisterously. All of you, that's the kind of burning drive to succeed that I was hoping to find. The unquenchable desire for success, for victory. Thanks, Kyoyuka replied, cocking an eyebrow. Is this like a timeout or something? Inasa shook his head. Nope, it's the end. I could have finished this before it really got started, but I wanted to see what burned inside of you all. Are you sure your sister is the one with the fire quirk? Toru asked. You keep talking about burning things. My quirk is cold, but my blood runs hot, Inasa answered as he turned back to his opponents. With a single move, I can freeze this entire room without breaking a sweat. Thank you for a pulse-pounding battle, but this is over. As everyone looked at Inasa in shock, Mina spoke up. You know, funny story, I was about to say the same thing. This gave him pause, which was exciting. What could she have done? He had to know. Really, you haven't touched anyone at all? Yeah, Hana huffed. I've barely been able to do anything because I've been playing keep away. Mina giggled. Oh, you thought I was all hopeless, running after you all, just barely not getting you, but don't worry, I've been making myself very useful. She took one last look at all the pieces of shattered ice that were strewn all over the ground on the far side of the room. A minefield, if you would. As she raised her fingers, ready to snap, she grinned. Tick tick boom. Nana and everyone else in the observation booth winced as dozens of explosions shook the room. Damn, Doi hissed. Then had to hurt. She was almost knocked off her feet as Ijiru clapped her on the back. Don't doubt Ashido. Nana nodded. It's important to remember that all 42 of you got into UA for a reason. Never underestimate your classmates. Even so, that was quite the plan. Wait, what do you mean? Tetsu asked. That was their plan from the start, Nana explained to her students. From the very first action. Did any of you notice that Midoriya hesitated on his opening shot? The students muttered to each other with a mixture of confusion and surprise. I think he was gambling on some sort of big opening move from Inasa Yaoyorozu. And that paid off, Nana continued. Beyond that, did any of you notice that Ashido didn't use her quirk once after the opening explosions? I did, Ijiru exclaimed excitedly. You don't count, Doi pouted. Midoriya was the key player overall, I'd say, Nana finished. He provided support to his teammates and made sure they could do their job. You're allowed to be smug, Remedy. Inko grinned proudly from the side of the room. Thanks to her years of patching up hero students, she knew they would be fine. After a kiss from her, the only things bruised would be their pride, but that was the way they learned and grew. In the moment, she was just happy for her boy. A few years prior, she never would have thought it possible, but here he was. Kyoyuka shattered the wall of ice blocking the doorway to the hostage with ease, shining light onto the still encased and very bitter-looking Momo. Yaoyorozu, Izuku exclaimed worriedly as he rushed forward. Are you okay? I'm fine, she growled. Aren't you cold? Mina asked as she peered down at her. Momo huffed indignantly. My quirk keeps me warm. This isn't the first time Inasa has frozen me. Sorry about this, Izuku muttered before he reared his fist back and drove it into the ice, causing a crack to split up the side and echo through the room. Momo's indignation vanished for a moment as it was replaced by shock. It was no small feat to crack Inasa's ice, and he had done so with relatively little effort. Just how strong was this short man? Izuku worked at pulling the ice away and got her clear. Before anyone else could offer, he reached his hands under her back and legs and lifted her up in a bridal carry with ease. All right, let's go. Momo would have been furious if she wasn't so surprised. He was all but a foot shorter than her, and she knew that her powerful build meant she was far from light. Damn it, no, she was better than this. Congratulations, you win. Nana's voice echoed in their minds. And you can untie the hostage. Oh, Izuku exclaimed as he gently lowered Momo back to the ground and quickly produced a knife with which he cut her bonds. Sorry about that. Momo immediately ignited her domino mask of flames to conceal any traitorous redness that may have begun to show on her cheeks. She stood up, towering over her 4 rescuers, and moved toward the door. Thank you, she said simply and stiffly. Oh, of course, he muttered awkwardly, avoiding her piercing glare. Frustrating. But regardless of anything, Momo couldn't deny that Izuku was more interesting than she had originally guessed. Momo was honestly impressed as she observed the battlefield. Those explosions I heard, that was you, Ashido? Yep, Mina chirped happily. They never saw it coming. Momo gazed over the 4 students who were in various states of groaning on the floor, the most satisfying of which was her brother. She slowly walked up to him and glared down at him from her full height. Tusk, what do you have to say for yourself? That was awesome, Inasa exclaimed. You lost, she reminded him with a small laugh. Who cares? He replied, trying to sit up but hissing in pain. Dang, got me good. Momo knelt down next to him and shook her head. You have all that training with Mother and you lost. And you don't care. He smiled wider. Exactly. Don't you see? Even with our training, I lost anyway. Isn't that exciting? It would be boring if we never lost. It shows that UA has so much to offer. Momo carefully reached under him and picked him up, trying not to move him too much. Let's get you to Remedy. Maybe she can cure your incessant yelling, too. Unlikely. Mina laughed as she looked over at Momo and Inasa as she picked Toru up. You all right? Yeah, Toru said softly. Just hurt my funny bone. That's all. Mina rolled her eyes, but smiled. Nice quirk, by the way. You too, Toru muttered. Really blew away my expectations. Stop punning. Impossible, she retorted. You know, I really thought I had those 2 dead to rights. You did, but Midoriya is pretty crafty, Mina replied. Gotta say though, those 2. Cute laughs. Right, Toru exclaimed, throwing her arms up. Oh, hey, don't move too much. Kyoyuka carried Mashirao with ease and Izuku scooped the lanky Hana up as Yui led the group out of the building. They crossed the city blocks between them and the observation booth in a few minutes and found Inko waiting for them on the sidewalk. It was very considerate to carry your opponents. Inko praised them as they placed the injured on the ground. Good sportsmanship. Thank you, Remedy. Mina chimed proudly as she put an arm around Izuku. You know, your son was the one who came up with the plan of hiding my quirk. Momo glanced over at the two out of the corner of her eye, paying a little more attention than she had been. That's my boy, she hummed, reaching out and ruffling Izuku's hair proudly as he blushed. Mina's breast was resting right on his shoulder, and he was determined not to give her any indication that he noticed. Thanks, Mom, he muttered. I'll take care of these four, and Ko continued. You all should get back to the observation room so you can watch the other matches. Make sure to pay attention. Izuku and the women made their way inside and began to climb the stairs. The door had barely closed behind them before Yui's piercing blue eyes found Izuku. Your costume is inspired by Remedy. He began to blush again and smiled awkwardly. What a mama's boy, Kyuuga teased with a soft chuckle. Yeah, he admitted. No shame in that, Yui commented. She's very nice. Momo pushed the door open as they reached the top of the steps and entered the room with the rest of their classmates. The other students made vague noises of greetings and congratulations before Ochako bounded up to Izuku and looked down at all five of them with a wide smile. How'd you do? She asked. I just got here, so I missed it. I heard you won, though. He grinned up at her. Yeah, we did. It was all thanks to them, though. I just played support in the back. You should have seen it. They were amazing. Izuku flinched as he felt a light slap on the back of his head. He turned to the side to see Yui gazing up at him passively. You were instrumental to our victory. Don't downplay yourself. Thanks, Ochako laughed, smiling down at Yui. He's too selfless for his own good sometimes. Yui nodded. Nana's hand appeared between them and waved once, getting their attention. Her rubbery arm snapped back as she spoke up. You all did very well. We'll go over the results as the next groups prepare, which includes you too. No dawdling. Momo and Ochako shared a look. With 5 matches, one of them had to go twice, and Momo had the bad luck to lose that coin flip. By the time the last match ended, it was all she could do to not erupt into flames. Her eyelashes were smoldering with such intensity that it was almost obscuring her vision. Once she could stomach, twice she could bear. Thrice playing the damsel in distresses was too much for her pride. She was pissed. It was all she could do to not give Nana a piece of her mind. Actually, scratch that. Professor, she began tersely as she raised her hand above the rest of the class. Nana, seemingly oblivious to her anger, answered politely. Yes, why was I subjected to being a hostage for the better part of 2 hours when a mannequin or any other stand-in would have served just as well? Momo did little to hide her displeasure. Ah, a good observation, Nana praised. The simple answer is that people act different when there is a human being on the line. The worse answer is that we have 42 students and that isn't divisible by 8. A stunned silence filled Momo and her 41 classmates. But hey, don't worry, Nana continued. You're going to get your chance. I have no intention of leaving this class with only seeing 40 of you in action. Momo perked up a little. Now they were getting somewhere. Come on, follow me outside. Nana gestured and the students followed, walking in a mass out of the stuffy observation booth and outside onto the street. They walked for a few blocks until they came to a large, grassy field outside of the fake city, where Nana put her hand to the ground and created a large ring. Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, pick a side and get ready, she instructed. Momo's frustration and indignation didn't vanish, but now she had an outlet, the perfect outlet. It was time to finally test her strength against Ochako. If you insist, Anasan declared as he stepped out of the group. Not you, idiot, Momo barked, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him back. She knew that he knew exactly what he was doing, but now wasn't the time. Right now, it was time to finally get a crack at Ochako. Ochako felt her heartbeat pick up. By her side, Izuku socked her gently in the arm. Show her who you are. From most people, that would have been a fairly cliché encouragement, but from Izuku, it had a different meaning. He was one of the few people that knew that she was the next all-for-one. The next number one. Someone for everyone, especially him, to look up to and admire. Well, maybe it was still a little cliché, but she appreciated it deeply. Momo clenched her fists and flexed her arms as she took her place at one end of the wide ring. She opened her right hand and created a small flame at the tip of each of her fingers before clenching again and combining them into a fireball. After she held it for a few moments, she let it fade as she ignited the domino mask of flames which completed her costume. The radiant heat kicked on her cooling systems that were built into her suit, and she felt the liquid pumping around her core and neck, down her arms and her legs, ready to keep her regulated as she fought. She was ready, and leveled her eyes at Ochako to await Nana's signal. On the other side, Ochako rolled her neck from side to side and stretched out her legs. She pulled her arms from side to side, making sure they were loose before she slammed her fist into her open palm with enough force to create an audible rush of wind. Izuku grinned widely, but around him, many others felt a little intimidated. What's Uraraka's quirk again? Mina asked, leaning down to Izuku. This lie was practiced. A fairly basic, but potent, strength enhancement. She's strong enough to make gusts of wind with her punches, or even flicks of her fingers, and strong enough to crush my skull without trying, Mina noted slyly. Yeah, Izuku said dreamily. Mina did a double take, which gave him enough time to wipe the expression off his face and bury himself back in his notebook. I think this will be a good match. Yeah, hope so, Mina replied weakly, cocking an eyebrow at him before turning her attention back to the arena. Ochako eyed her opponent, from her powerful legs, to her thick core, to her burning eyes and smoldering hair. This might be her hardest fight since the last time she and Nana sparred. That was exciting. On your mark, get set. Nana paused. She kept pausing. It got funny, then it got awkward, then it got funny again. Finally, she relented. Go. Ochako kicked up huge chunks of dirt and grass as she tore toward Momo with all of her strength. Momo was surprised by the burst of speed, but the distance was more than enough for her to react in time. She brought her right hand forward and a gout of flame erupted from it, streaking directly toward the brunette bearing down on her. Ochako dodged to the side, which Momo expected, but smirked as she saw Ochako pick the wrong side. She dodged toward Momo's middle, which meant that she could cut her off. Momo raised her left hand and released another blast of flame before moving her hands together to trap Ochako between them. However, before the fires could converge, Ochako reared a fist back and threw it forward, shooting a blast of air directly at Momo that blew her hands away and disrupted her flames. Ochako would be on her before she could properly counterattack with her quirk. But Momo was far from a one-trick pony. With a shift of her weight and a step in the right spot, she knocked Ochako off balance, tripping her and sending her sprawling onto the ground behind her. There was a collective wince from the onlooking students. But that was far from the first time Ochako had eaten dirt. She had hopped back to her feet almost as fast as Momo could turn around and was back on the offensive. With her teeth grit, Ochako unleashed a flurry of blows on her opponent, but Momo seemed anything but fazed. She firmly and calmly deflected all of Ochako's strikes to one side or the other, showing her that a year plus of training under the number 1 wasn't nearly enough to stand up against a lifetime of training under the number 2. Since she wasn't going to win on technique, she had to rely on her strengths, literally. Ochako went for a swinging attack that Momo had to block instead of deflect while she pulled her right arm back. She unleashed a blast of wind with her swinging arm that disrupted Momo's battle flow, which was hopefully the opening she needed. Momo had been sparring with her mother and brother for over a decade. It would take more than that to get her to break her guard, but Ochako had succeeded in denying her the chance to dodge. She brought her arms up to block as Ochako grunted with effort and threw her right fist forward, straight into Momo's guard. Splitting pain rocketed up her arm as a crunching noise echoed through the ring. The force carried through and sent her flying backward through the air. She hit the ground with a heavy thud, but Momo was just getting started. Ochako had been taught better to let up, but as she neared Momo, the air around her erupted into flames, forcing her to stop and shield her face from the heat and the light. Before she could recover her sight, a blast of flames exploded in her direction. Ochako cried out and jumped back as the searing pain pulsed through her nerves. The material on her arms had been burned off, leaving her arms red and exposed. If the costume hadn't been flame-resistant, the burns would have been far worse, but she couldn't rely on that a second time. Ochako knew better than to take her eyes off her opponent for long. She couldn't let the pain distract her. Momo took a moment to stand up properly and pull herself to her full height before holding her hand toward Ochako and unleashing a massive blast of flame, far larger than anything she had used before. With no chance to dodge, Ochako was forced to meet it directly. She planted her feet and charged up as much of air cannon as she could muster before blasting it forward toward the flaming wave. The two forces met and intertwined into a swirling mass. The heat caused the air to rise, dragging it up into a flaming tornado that streaked into the air above them to the cries of amazement from the crowd. "Holy fuck," Kayuka whispered. As the flames dissipated harmlessly, Momo and Ochako both took a moment to eye their opponent. Momo clenched her left fist and lifted up her arm slowly, turning it over and wincing in pain. "Not broken, but definitely damaged," she noted with a mix of excitement and anger. "You've been holding back, haven't you?" Ochako glared back at her, not willing to drop her guard for a moment. "I still am." Momo grew a wide smile. "Really? Good. So am I." In that moment, her eyes shifted. The pools of onyx surrounding her pupils changed to a fiery orange, with her domino mask following suit as the flames brightened. Everyone present could feel the change in the air. Even Izuku, standing a fair distance away, could feel the rise in temperature around Momo. "Ladies, that's enough," Nana called out to them, but neither responded. Izuku was furiously writing in his notebook, drawing a raised eyebrow from Kayuka. Ochako grit her teeth and crouched down slightly. Izuku saw her tight costume bulge around her thighs and calves as her muscles coiled, ready to unleash their power at her command. New flames grew in Momo's hands, brighter and more intense than what she had been using before, and she was eager to use them. "Let's see what you're made of," Momo called over to Ochako. "Ladies," Nana repeated, more forcefully this time. Perhaps it was the roar of the flames, but neither seemed to hear her. Achako's legs pushed off, sending her soaring straight toward Momo as the latter charged up a blast of fire. Izuku and several of the students around him were eyeing Nana nervously, but their teacher didn't look worried, just annoyed. Nana let out an exasperated sigh, and then seemed to vanish. There was a bright eruption of light and the sound of roaring flames and a heavy impact as Momo and Achako clashed. The explosion of dirt and dust obscured their vision for a few moments, but as it cleared, all the students were stunned. Standing in between Achako and Momo was Nana, with a disapproving look on her face. She had caught Achako's Megaton punch with a single hand like it was nothing, and the left side of her body was entirely metal, seemingly unaffected by Momo's heat as she held her by the wrist. God damn, Mina muttered dumbly. Yeah, Izuku replied. Yui could only stare. Her face was passive, but her heart was racing. Those two were so powerful, how could she not get excited? And Nana, Achako gasped softly. I told you two to stop, she scolded, looking between the two. You did, Momo asked with a look of surprise on her face. We didn't hear you, Achako explained. Sorry, Nana huffed, releasing their arms and turning to walk back to the class. You're here to spar, not kill each other. Keep it under control next time. I let my emotions get the better of me, Momo mumbled, her cheeks red with embarrassment. I apologize, Professor. The shame inside her chest burned brighter than her flames. The excitement of fighting someone as powerful as Achako had gotten the better of her, and she had acted recklessly because of it. She knew better than that. Me too, Achako followed. I got into the fight and, well, sorry. You both did well, Nana continued, smiling softly. All of you did. Now go get changed and enjoy the rest of your evenings. I'll see you all on Thursday. The students began to disperse and head back to the locker room, but not all of them. Achako looked over at Momo with sincere regret and concern. Are you all right? I didn't mean to hurt you like that. Momo brought herself proudly to her full height, yet still had to look up slightly at Achako as she huffed. I am fine. I've had worse. I would thank you to not hold back in the future. Achako furrowed her brow. But, see to your own injuries, she snapped, softer than she intended. Achako, Yaoyorozu, Izuku called as he ran up to them. You two are incredible. Achako smiled softly down at her best friend. Thanks, Izuku. You both are powerhouses, he continued excitedly. That power, that strength, Yaoyorozu. Your command over your quirk is outstanding, especially for a freshman. You might be able to go pro today, I'd guess. And your martial skills are just as impressive. I've sparred with Achako. I know she's no slouch, but wow. I can tell you've been trained by Cataclysm. Momo smirked smugly, shooting a look at Achako. It speaks well of you that you are able to recognize talent and skill. Maybe it will rub off on you. I'd love to learn from you, he exclaimed innocently. She wasn't prepared for that and faltered. She felt her heart squeeze a little, but didn't know how to respond, so she pulled the escape cord. Where is Remedy? I'd like to have my arm back to 100%. Oh, she's back near the observation booth cleaning up supplies, I think, he replied. Achako, you should go too. Those burns look painful. They are, she exclaimed with a forced laugh. Those flames are no joke. Momo didn't dignify her with a response as she walked off with them following her. Hey Izuku, Achako began. What are you doing after this? He looked away and rubbed the back of his head. Well, I was hoping you were free so we could hang out. Achako's heart leapt for joy. Without thinking, she put an arm around him and lifted him off the ground in a one-armed hug. Awesome. Oh, Izuku furrowed his brow as she dropped him. Hey, careful. Don't make it worse. Sorry, I was just excited, she replied meekly. I know, I am too, he said with a smile. Momo rolled her eyes ahead of them, but a part of her was a little envious. They were so friendly with each other, so excited to just be around the other. A part of her wanted that, but that part was foolish. She was here at UA to become a great hero, not to go soft. She flexed her arm, sending pain shooting up it in an attempt to distract her from her thoughts. She hissed. Okay, it worked, but it was a bad plan. Oh, the day's events had taken more out of Achako and Izuku than either of them had suspected. After they returned to their dorm and showered, Achako had joined Izuku in his room to talk about things. They discussed what they had for years, heroes, villains, and everything in between, but now they also had class and their classmates to discuss. Izuku told Achako all about Mei and his time with her. He told her about his art class with Yui, and his fight that afternoon. She told him about her theater class with Mina, as well as her economics course, which she luckily shared with Tsuyu. Izuku had run into her a couple times, but the wood-faced girl seemed to have hit it off pretty well with Achako. However, after getting each other up to speed, things got quiet. That wasn't a bad thing. Sometimes it was nice to just be together. Izuku felt the soreness of his quirk more acutely as the sun set and his energy faded. Sitting up became more of a chore, so he decided to find a nice place to rest. Fortunately for him, there was a very comfy spot right next to him on the floor. Achako smiled softly as Izuku laid his head on her thigh. They had gotten very comfortable with each other over the years, and this was far from the first time he had done this. It's probably not as comfy as it used to be. What with them being about twice the size now. Sorry about that. He waved his hand dismissively. It's better than ever, don't you think that way? She was grateful his eyes were closed so he couldn't see her blushing. I guess you did say you liked this new me, huh? His own cheeks began to turn red, making him look a bit like a strawberry. Why yeah, I think it suits you. You certainly use it well. Ochako nearly choked. Oh, why yeah. Izuku panicked and tried to get out of the hole he was digging, but he was never very good at that. I mean yeah, the way you moved in practice and how you ran and fought against Yaoyorozu was great, your form was spectacular and it's clear all your training has paid off. How closely was he watching me? She wondered with a mixture of embarrassment, curiosity, and hunger. Thanks, Izuku. Why yeah, no problem. The awkward silence was mercifully transformed into comfortable silence once more when she reached a hand down and began gently petting his head. Ochako looked out the window as she ran her fingers through his soft locks and thought. In the past, she had always treasured these moments as a guilty pleasure when she could indulge her unrequited attraction to Izuku. But ever since their mutual confession on the beach, they had become so much nicer, but so much more intimate. They had both agreed to put things off, but what did that mean? Should she not be doing this so they weren't tempted? Well, he was the one who laid his head down first. He wasn't complaining. She was no fool. She knew that in college, people fooled around. They explored themselves and others. She would never forget the mortifying conversation she had with her mother before she came to UA. But beyond the embarrassment, she was glad her mother had talked to her about it. Izuku and her weren't together, they had made that clear, but they also knew that they felt things for each other. Whether or not those things involved a certain four-letter word, she didn't know. She thought they might, but she didn't know, not for sure. What if someone else hit on Izuku, tried to get with him? What if someone tried to get with her? She should be okay with that, right? Would that be a distraction? Should they forego any sort of exploratory relationship for the sake of their classwork and training? Her mother had cautioned her against that. She shouldn't waste her one chance at being in college. Maybe Izuku felt the same way. Maybe it was foolish to put things off, or maybe it was foolish to hold on to things. Maybe. Izuku, she said softly. There was no response. She looked down and saw that he had fallen asleep in her lap, which made her heart beat faster. Ochako felt an overwhelming sense of affection and gratitude that he felt safe around her, and that he trusted her to protect him. Maybe that was a romantic way of looking at it, but she couldn't deny how she felt. Heroes were supposed to protect people, but sometimes Ochako felt like that wasn't good enough. Heroes needed protection, too, and she was happy to give it, especially to Izuku. Ochako gently stood up, lifting him carefully from the floor. Thanks to heroic form and her training, it was incredibly easy to lift him. Short as he may be, the man was far from small, and she liked that about him. He was built sturdy and built strong. He could handle himself, but God help anyone that hurt him. Ochako blinked at that thought and blushed a little harder. I guess I can't deny that I'm attached to you, huh? She whispered to nobody. It makes sense. You're my partner after all. Ochako laid the sleeping man down on his bed and tucked him in. She looked at his peaceful face and gently brushed some of his messy hair out of his eyes. Maybe she was just sappy when she was tired, or his serene expression had an effect on her, but she felt a new swell of affection for him. In a moment of weakness, she leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on his forehead. Good night, Izuku, she whispered to herself as she turned the light off and carefully closed the door. Izuku would never admit it, but he had the most wonderful dream that night. The low chanting echoed through the circular chamber, reverberating off the walls in wonderful harmony. The smell of incense, candle smoke, and the crackle of the great fire filled his senses, reminding him of the many, many rituals of the past, the many faithful who submitted themselves, body, mind, and soul, to the service of their master and to the service of all mankind. One day, the world would finally recognize what they did and thank them for it. But that day was not today. And until it was, they would continue their work in secret. Until society recognized its future, nay, its destiny, they would be shunned. But that was a price that they were all willing to pay. That was a burden they were all willing to bear. Kyudai looked around the chamber at the countless faithful standing in reverence. They stood deeper than the light of the candles and braziers that lined the hall showed, symbolic of the legions that came before and that would come hence. There was no end to them, because their struggle was humanity's struggle. Ever since the inception of Quirks, from the very beginning, from the birth of their god and the mistakes of the great demon, their cause had grown. It was imperative that they succeed, but it depended on the faith and devotion of those strong enough to do what had to be done. He had no doubt because of those that stood before him, those willing to do whatever was needed, to give up whatever was needed, even up to and beyond their own lives. These sacrifices must never be taken lightly and never be forgotten. The sound of doors opening at the back of the chamber caused the chanting to increase in volume. The joy and jubilation of the faithful redoubled as the chosen came into the light of the flames. They wore nothing but simple clothing as they walked the sacred path toward him, their faces stoic, but their heads held high. Together, they rose up the steps of the great altar before stopping at the top, each of them looking at him with grim determination. The chanting began to lose its composure as cheers, whoops, and cries echoed around the room. The faithful showered the chosen in their love, respect, and admiration. They all hoped that one day they would be chosen as well. But now was not their moment. Now was the moment of the ones standing before him. Kyudai stood up from his throne and the hall fell silent at once. The last echoes rang out for a few seconds before the only sounds were the low roar of the braziers around them. He smiled out from under his hood at the two chosen as he approached the fire between them. He was so proud of them, it was all he could do to hold back his tears. "We are gathered here to witness a most holy ritual," he began, his strong voice booming over the silent masses. "These two are chosen to become more than they were, more than they ever could be." His words echoed over the faithful. He saw one of the chosen's composure break as a smile began to creep onto his face before he regained control. Kyudai could not hold it against him. His heart had to be all but bursting with joy. "They have done all that we ask and more," he continued. "This is the highest honor that I can bestow, but as all we do, it comes with sacrifice. Henceforth, he who is no longer. That life will die, but a new one will begin here. But I do not command alone. We are a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a family." He looked beyond the chosen into the crowd, holding his arms wide. "I call upon you, honored, beloved faithful. If any of you oppose this, speak now so we may know your will." The sound of his voice echoed through the hall, and was met with silence. He waited long, savoring the silence beyond the crackle of the hungry flame. Every moment built their resolve. Now, who would stand by their brother and their sister? He asked. "We will," came the deafening chant of countless voices in unison. His eyes returned to the chosen before him. "So say all of us, but so must say you. Akito, should you choose, discard your final possessions and speak your last." The man removed his clothes and cast them into the fire before him without hesitation. He turned to the woman with tears in his eyes. "I love you." Kyudai smiled warmly. "Omi, should you choose, discard your final possessions and speak your last." The woman followed suit, discarding her clothes into the hungry flame and turning to the man. "I love you, too." Soft coos rolled out from the crowd as Kyudai was nearly brought to tears. So pure and noble. He held up his hand to praise them. It is not always that two lovers are those chosen, but it is exceptionally special when it is so. May we all be so lucky one day. He held out his hand over the fire. "Reach out to me, so that your old lives may be consumed, and your new life may begin." The two did so, each taking his hand over the flames. They shared one final look and clasped hands between them. There was a pause, then it began. With a touch of their hands, Kyudai unmade them, so that they might be made new together. Flesh, bone, and sinew unwound and rebound before him and the faithful. A great light began to shine from the altar as their transformation began. Wind rushed around them, blowing all but the most stubborn of candles out, but none could miss the divine miracle before them. Kyudai thanked his God every day that he was given such a power, such a blessing. Before them, beauty was created. Their bodies became one. Their minds became one, and in time, their souls would as well. With a final rush of power, it was over. The new being staggered and fell to its knees, disoriented and confused. He moved around the flame and gently placed a fatherly hand on its shoulder. It tried to speak, but a multi-layered mess of choking and wailing was all it could say. "SHH, do not worry," he said calmly. "In time, all will be well. You will learn your new body and you will speak again. Trust in your family that we will take care of you until you are ready." It looked up at him in awe and nodded. One eye was the color of the woman, and the other, the man, but he thought no more on the past individuals. They were much more now. "Let me be the first to thank you," he began. "Thank you for your sacrifice, but do not let me be the last." He gestured to the crowd, which erupted into cheers and jubilation. Tears of joy were streaming down the faces he could see in the dim room. "And let me be the first to welcome you," he continued. "Welcome to the vanguard of the Ascension. You will be our spear and shield against those who would defy our God and the future of humanity." He turned once more to the crowd, holding his hand high. "Such blessings are thanks to our God. All who are faithful and just praise him in his name. Praise be to one for all." The crowd replied in enthusiastic and well-practiced unison. "Praise be to Shigaraki." Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.